Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku's thoughts on Ashido were revealed. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story Cosmic Sky from AO3. So let's start the video. Chapter 1. A taste of pink. Izuku already felt himself wincing as if he were the one about to be hit instead of Mina. Some part of him quietly pondered if there was any way he could get to her before the predator who'd set his eyes on her. He could practically feel his heart beating in frantic fear as it sometimes did in the heat of battle. Every fiber of his body was screaming for him to act as he usually did. Someone needed saving, and he was training to be a hero, wasn't he? Biting his lip, Izuku racked his brain around possible courses of action. Time was running out. Ironically, pressure always seemed to help him think. Well, he was thinking, probably harder than he should have. Of the numerous ideas spinning around in his head, he grasped a hold of one above the others. With that decision came a clarity that blew away the storm that had been rapidly consuming his mind. His right thumb touched upon the tip of his right ring finger and concentrated. Precise control was critical. If he overshot this, then the results weren't going to be pretty. He didn't need a bullet, just a breeze. There was no time like the present to learn if he was capable of such a thing. TWOOSH. Everyone was caught off guard, but none more so than Mina, who was the target. The gale of wind was enough to snap her awake, and then some. Namely, it was enough to send her schoolwork sailing off to the side while Mina shot bolt up, her black eyes wide and her heart racing. Duck. 3 o'clock. Enemy on your 3 o'clock, shouted the pink-haired girl. Actually school lets out at 3 o'clock, Kaminari informed with a sweat drop. He'd felt the brush of air whistle just past his back as it sped toward its target. It was quite impressive, but he was glad that it wasn't aimed at him, and he was glad that he wasn't the one snoozing in class. Not for you, and not for Midoriya, commanded a cold voice that caused the entire classroom to freeze. The chill was colder than Todoroki's pyrokinetic quirk. The boy himself shifted his attention from Izuku to their homeroom teacher. He recognized the look on the teacher's face, and rightfully feared it like the rest of his classmates. It was far colder than the ice he could produce. He silently gave his condolences to his classmates who were the unfortunate targets of such a glare. Both of them were shivering like leaves, and rightfully so. The shivering only came to a stop when they locked eyes with one another. Izuku was relieved his plan had worked, even though it was likely going to cost him. Mina was happy for it too. After all, she'd been spared Aizawa-sensei waking her up. The pink-haired and skinned girl smiled at him in spite of the fear pumping through her heart. Thanks, she whispered even while the heroic teacher's irritated eyes bore down on her. He smiled at her, then went back to trembling in fear of Aizawa-sensei, who hadn't said a word during the silent exchange. Was he being merciful in letting them have that? Or was it his anger was so great he wasn't able to speak? Or was he genuinely interested in seeing if one flipped on the other? If so, it would have been more accurate. He was waiting to see if Mina flipped on the boy who'd woken her from her classroom slumber. She did her best to play it off though. Sorry, Aizawa-sensei. I dozed off. His deadpan stare made her feel like she was trying to talk a ravenous tiger who was in the mode for some nice pink-skinned ham, with or without a side of poison to it. Did you bother to finish your assignment before deciding to take your little nap? He asked in his trademark deadpan voice that belayed how annoyed he truly was. Her laughter grew even more pained until it ceased completely. Practically everyone knew how this was going to end, but stopping it was beyond their control. Mina definitely knew that, but decided to press on anyway. Sucking it up, she reached to her left and grabbed a hold of her schoolwork and handed it over. A thick sigh followed as she knew what was about to come next. Mina knew for a fact she wasn't going to be enjoying the spring weather that they viewed through the classroom window. It wouldn't be the first time. Everyone watched with bated breath as the bandage-wrapped teacher examined the horned girl's schoolwork. Even if it had been complete and the work accurate, it's entirely possible that Aizawa-sensei's expression wouldn't change. Hell, just the sleeping alone was enough to warrant any all work suddenly being invalidated. Ashido, you will be doing remedial lessons after class in detention. The all-too-obvious verdict fell like a guillotine. As expected, the acid user's head fell, a resigned acceptance of her fate following suit. Then Aizawa-sensei turned his eyes to Izuku, who flinched under his gaze. It was time to deliver his verdict, which was a bit of a mystery to everyone. The greasy black-haired man did not play favorites, not even with the most diligent of students like Izuku and Ida and Momo. In a way, he was incredibly fair, but that also meant that he would fairly dish out punishment as he saw fit. Midoriya, you'll serve out your detention alongside her. You'll be helping her study. In addition, you will complete chapters 6 through 10 and turn them in by the end of the school day tomorrow. Is that clear? "Yes, sir," answered the green-haired youth, nary a hint of dissent on his face, while some of his classmates balked at the extra assigned work. Well, some balked, others shrugged, as they knew Izuku would be able to handle it. After all, for good reason, he was one of the top students of Class 1A, a position that almost everyone respected. Almost everyone. A certain walking, talking, mass of anger and fire mere grunted from his seat. Yet again, they were wasting time, prolonging yet another boring day in class instead of moving along. Mina looked to Izuku with wide eyes, half ready to jump across the room and hug the living daylights out of him, but she restrained herself. If she didn't, then Aizawa-sensei would do it for her and probably tack on some extra punishment. That was the last thing she wanted, especially since it could transfer over to Izuku, who'd already stuck his neck out for her. His punishment accepted, Aizawa-sensei returned to his original teaching plan, continuing on without missing a beat. The rest of the class followed suit, partially knowing that no disruption would yield them the same punishment as their two classmates, or worse. Said two classmates outwardly went back to normal, but on the inside, it was a bit of a different story. Well, for one of them, Izuku let out a quick sigh of acceptance, then refocused on the chalkboard upon which Aizawa-sensei continued the lesson on. For Mina, it was a little harder to do as her focus continuously drifted elsewhere. The pink-haired and pink-skinned girl quietly cursed the sitting arrangement as she couldn't look back at her classmate without arousing suspicion. Sure, she could try when their teacher turned his back to them, but Mina wasn't feeling bold enough to take that chance, especially since she was already in hot water as it was. She especially didn't want to drag herself or Izuku deeper with her, and yet she felt the desire to turn back and look at him across the rows like an irritating itch. What made it worse was that the more she tried to fight it, the worse it became. Mentally groaning, the acidic girl hung her head and took a deep breath. Mentally clearing her head, she looked up at the chalkboard, attempting to make sense of the scribbles that Aizawa-sensei had put up. She'd done it before and managed to squeeze by, and she could do it again. "Midoriya, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." As per usual, Izuku was fluttered. What was unusual was that he wasn't the one apologizing. Instead, it was someone else apologizing to him. And it was amongst the last people he expected to ever need to apologize to him. "Ashido, it's fine, really," the green-haired youth proclaimed, hoping to quell the sadness that had gripped the normally upbeat and optimistic girl. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something troubling about seeing her looking so down. It stirred whatever heroism slept within him and moved him to correct it any way he could. "We can use the chance to study. I agree with Midoriya." Instead of lamenting, "Ashido, I believe you can use this opportunity to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again." Of course, Ida was on board with the idea. He meant well and always did, which everyone appreciated. When they weren't overly annoyed with him suggesting the most academic and borderline boring path possible. That said, "Midoriya, it was quite dangerous of you to use your quirk in class like that. You could have accidentally hit Kaminari or Gyro. But he didn't, and I think that's actually a remarkable thing." Uraraka spoke up, shooting a quick affirmative look in Izuku's direction, causing his lips to twitch into a smile. "That's true. I mean, normally when Midoriya tries stunts like that, we get a miniature hurricane ripping through the place." Hagakure added in. The vitality of her statement was undeniable, causing the student in question to shirk his head in embarrassment. Not that that's always a bad thing. In training, it's super cool. And you learning how to make the blast smaller and more contained is proof you're getting better at controlling your quirk. Right. And besides, it's not like either of them got hurt or complained. If anything, Kaminari had just been happy that he wasn't the one caught sleeping. He was already doing bad enough in terms of grades. That actually made Mina feel slightly worse about herself. She was failing just as badly, and odds were the earlier incident wasn't going to make things better. She chased away the negative thoughts to focus on why she'd came over to the table that Midoriya usually sat at. "Consider this the first part of my apology, Midoriya. You like pancakes?" Izuku's eyes widened as his nose wrinkled, finally catching the whiff of the delectable treat that Mina had brought with her. Uraraka, Ida, and Hagakure all joined him in focusing their attention on the plate of freshly baked pumpkin pancakes that their pink-haired classmate had come to deliver, primarily for him. But Mina had been thoughtful and nabbed a few more, enough for his other friends and even Hagakure, who'd chosen to sit with them that day. "Ashido, thank you. You didn't have to do this though. Like I said, I really owe you." She softly cut off with a jubilant laugh. "You took the fall to wake me up and now we've both got detention. All that's on me, so I'm going to make up for it starting now." With that declaration, she pulled a seat, ironically right beside Izuku, sandwiching him between her and Uraraku. He stared at the former, his mouth hanging open in shock while she pushed the plate of pastries in front of him. Again, he took a whiff of them and felt his stomach rumble even though he'd already taken a few bites out of his lunch. Where was the harm in eating a little something more, namely dessert? Even he and his mom had indulged themselves a little from time to time before skipping to the main course. A quick look around and he saw that all the attention was on him, which only furthered the racing rhythm of his heart. It reached its peak when he saw Mina grinning at him. Izuku was sure his heartbeat was a grenade in his chest seconds away from going off. The pin was pulled when he took hold of one pancake and took a bite out of it. His eyes lit up like fireworks. His eyes weren't the only ones. "That's your everyone, dig in, but save some for me," exclaimed the pink-haired girl as the other three dove in now that Izuku had taken his first bite. "I'm the one who brought these things." It was pure luck that the same day she got detention along with one of her classmates, the cafeteria happened to be serving one of her favorite treats, and they had enough for the small lunchtime get-together. All of it was a turn of odd but fortunate luck that Mina wasn't in the mood to question, not like she ever did. She did what she always tried to do, make the most of a bad situation. So far, things were turning out pretty damn well, especially since she got to see what her green-haired classmate looked like with a face smeared with food crumbs. Mina couldn't help but find something rather adorable about it. Just a moment ago, the guy had seemed on the verge of swelling up like a balloon. While he had burst, it had been in joy instead of anxiety like he was seeming ready to. Now he looked so relaxed and happy, while she'd seen Midoriya get like that. This was her first time seeing such relaxation and imagination up close. Mina decided that she rather liked it. She also decided that if she could, maybe she could get him to make that face in a couple of hours when they were serving out detention. They were already paying a price for her in class snoozing. How much worse could things get? "Ashido, for the duration of the next hour, you'll be studying with Midoriya. I'll be back within the year and I'll be expecting the remedial work to be completed by then." The two students caught the way that the bandage-wearing man's eyes shifted to Izuku. Brief as it was, the message was unmistakable and picked up on by Mina. She felt an odd twinge of relief in realizing that once again, their homeroom teacher was showing his caring side, hidden by apathy at best and overbearing hostility at worst. The Aizawa sensei that they'd all come to know and love. Mina nodded in acceptance of her punishment and stayed silent until the door to the classroom shut. Her ears waited until she heard the professional hero's footsteps leading him further away until he was out of earshot. Damn, finally, her head hit the desk. All the stress she'd built up came gushing out in that one phrase. "Isn't there an easier way to tutor me?" Izuku looked at his classmate with naked sympathy. Well, it's Aizawa-sensei, at least he cares. In his own way, I actually think it's ... well, it fits his personality, don't you think? I'll give you that, mused the horned girl. Fully raising her head, she turned to her classmate with an apologetic smile. "Again, sorry that I got you into this. I'm ... well, schoolwork isn't really my thing, something I'm sure you already know. To be honest, Midoriya, I actually wish that I was a little more like you, strong in body and in mind." Upon registering her words, the taller boy looked flustered, his mouth somewhat hanging open. Ashido, you consider me strong in body and mind?" "Of course I do. I mean, seriously, you're one of the best students in our entire class. If there were a top 3 of Class 1A, you'd be it. There's you, Ida, and Yaoyorozu. You three are the smartest and amongst the most skilled in our whole class. Of all 3 of them, though, I'd say maybe you're the bravest." Saying the words felt oddly uplifting for her, almost like she'd been carrying them in. "You're a gutsy guy, Midoriya, and you showed that by trying to save my dumb butt. I was just doing my best to help out a classmate ... and a ... Would you consider me a friend, Ashido?" His voice was ringed with nervousness, which showed on his face. That was another thing about Midoriya that always struck her. He seemed to have a hard time accepting praise toward himself, but he had no problem heaping it on other people. "Well, maybe it's time I changed that," thought the horned girl as she turned about in her seat to face him. "Midoriya, I consider practically everyone in our class my friends, including you. I'll admit, I'm closer to some like Kirishima more so than others, but that doesn't mean I don't value anyone else any less. Even Minta." Leaning in, the girl continued to snicker. "Don't tell him I said that though. I don't want him thinking he's got a chance with me or something." With a laugh, he nodded, affirming his promise. "So, yeah, I consider you a friend, and I think you're pretty awesome. Hell, I'd say that you're downright heroic. Probably one of the most heroic members of the whole class." Her words had been pure and honest, yet they'd left Izuku looking like he'd been struck by lightning. The tick of the clock on the wall and rustle of the leaves outside were the only sounds in the empty classroom. Said classroom was no doubt meant to serve as a private place for the two of them. Like Izuku had said, Eraserhead was showing his ability to teach and care for his students ... in his own bizarre and at times harsh way. The fact that he'd phrased it as such was another testament to what she believed was her classmates' ability to see the good in everyone and cherish it. Hey, Midoriya, I didn't break your brain, did I?" inquired the acid user, waving her hand in front of the still dazed boy. "You, sorry about spacing out like that, Ashido. I guess I just..." His hands came together and his head was bowed. Mina didn't like that and again surprised the wielder of One for All. By some miracle, Izuku didn't completely jump out of his seat when he felt Mina's hand on his cheek, gently pushing him to look upward. What he found was a bright and warm smile that had butterflies hatching and fluttering about in his stomach. "I guess I'm still kind of getting used to being praised like that," he proclaimed without a stutter, the words just flowing out of him like a river. "What? Really, Midoriya, you're one of the nicest, smartest, and strongest guys I've ever met. You're awesome. How can anyone not see that?" Mina's eyebrows rose as if a thought occurred to her. Turning to her left, her eyes focused on a now empty seat, but she could visualize the occupant. He would have been there sneering at not her but the boy beside her. A slight pout coloring her face, she looked back to Izuku. Her right hand slid from his cheek to his shoulder, her left hand falling on the adjacent one. "Screw whatever the hell Bakugo says about you, Ashido," he began with a pained look in his eyes. "Look, I may not be as close to you as Uraraka or Ido or Tsuyu, but I pay attention. There's a reason why everyone counts you in the big three of Class 1A, because like I said, you're genuinely a heroic guy. Maybe even super heroic given that you were willing to disobey the teachers and go off and rescue Bakugo. Did he ever thank you for that anyway? You, Ada, Kirishima, Todoroki, and Yaoyorozu risked your lives to save him." "He thanked us," affirmed the green-haired boy, a small smile on his face. He'd gone from being nervous to looking content in a heartbeat. This was another side of Izuku Midoriya that she'd seen, the side of him that looked so serene. Mina wondered how he could attain such a feeling, especially when discussing the guy who seemed to make it his mission to throw venom his way every time they saw each other. She was speechless as he looked at her, his eyes shimmering with a soft hardness that mesmerized her. "What we did for Ka-chan. We did it because it was the right thing to do, what we knew was the right thing to do. We're all students of UA, we look out for each other." Mina retracted her hands, a look of amazement coloring her face. "Yep, totally heroic. That's one makes you ... kind of cool, Midoriya." Her lips twitching into a smirk, she crossed her arms over her chest and leaned forward. "Having said that, Midoriya, would you ever go that far to rescue anyone else? Like me, or rescue you?" "Of course I would, Ashido." Yet again, the words so easily flowed out of his mouth before his mind could fully process the mood they'd fallen into. Even once he did, he felt happy, especially as Ashido's face broke out into a warm grin. "I wouldn't be much of a hero if I didn't try to save someone in danger. Well, you tried to save me from my own stupidity. And here you are trying to do it again by helping me study." Winking at him, she reached forward and gently pumped her fist against his chest. "Midori, you're a little dorky, but you're the cool kind of dorky, and you're an awesome guy. Don't ever let anyone tell you any different ... and if they do, just let me know and I'll set them straight." From the spot where her fist was, Izuku felt pure warmth blooming like a flower. It didn't stop there as the flower's petals fanned out to the rest of his body. Secretly, he liked the feeling and wanted it to remain within him for as long as possible. But Izuku knew that they had work to do. Detention wasn't meant to be used as free time. Though some students certainly did, either unknowing or uncaring of the cost that came with it. As much as a part of him wanted to do that, his common sense won out. If Aizawa-sensei came back and they hadn't so much as started on their work, they'd have detention for the rest of the week, at best. Izuku wouldn't put it past him to threaten have them doing school work during the school festival in little more than a week's time. There was little doubt he'd actually do it. The thought of that happening to him was bad enough, but when he thought of that same punishment applying to Mina, he could feel a fire lit within him. He didn't know it, but that fire burned when he looked up to his classmate. "Ashido," he started, "everything you don't understand, tell me and I'll do my best to help you understand." Her grin was practically ear to ear. "Well, gee, lucky me, getting such a passionate declaration from one of the class's 5 students. Hold on a sec." Excusing herself, she walked over to the window then looked back at him. "You won't mind if I open the window and let a little spring air in here, will you?" "Not at all, I actually think I'd like it," Izuku answered with a smile. He shut his eyes and let the spring wind Ashido had spoken of tickle him. He could smell the scent of cherry blossoms and pollen riding the wind. Upon opening his eyes, he saw his pink-skinned classmate looking quite pleased with herself, taking in the spring breeze herself. Izuku felt his eyes drawn to the way her short pink hair bristled in the breeze. Then there were her horns. Personally, Izuku always felt himself more fascinated than horrified with mutation-type quirks. In the case of Ashido's, he felt it was definitely fascination. He failed to hide it. "You think they're pretty cool, huh?" Blinking, he realized she'd taken back her seat beside him and was grinning. She'd also deduced that he'd been staring at her horns. Something told Izuku that this wasn't a first for her. "If you want, you can touch them." What? Really?" he squeaked. "Yeah, you can touch them now ... or you can wait until after detention's over and we finish study," she offered. There was genuine curiosity in her eyes as she watched her classmates shift between embarrassment and awe at her proposal. Mina had a guess as to which of her 2 choices Midoriya would pick, and he would pick one or the other. As she'd observed, the green-haired boy tended to geek out over anything related to quirks and heroism. In her eyes, it was absolutely adorable. "I'll wait until after we're finished," he said with a bit of a blush on his cheeks. Anyway, let's get started. Math is your worst subject, right?" Like a switch, all of her cheer evaporated. "You have no idea. It wasn't that she hated schoolwork, it just wasn't for her." In contrast, schoolwork was apparently just the right thing for Izuku. Mina had discovered that about her green-eyed classmate within the first month of classes at UA. Unlike Ida and Yaoyorozu, he was less uptight about it, which was something Mina was grateful for. In her opinion, it made him a better tutor. Another thing about him was when it came to certain topics, he got incredibly excited, just like she tended to. Math. Well, it wasn't exactly that kind of subject, but it was one that Midoriya knew extremely well. In retrospect, maybe it wasn't that surprising that he was so good at mathematics. Mina had seen how even when he took off like a rocket, there was a part of Izuku's brain that was always doing calculations: distance to the bad guy, distance to civilians, distance to safety areas to ferry civilians, how much force would be needed to take a villain down, and so forth. Personally, Mina wasn't the type of person to think about all of that, at least not in a numbers sense. She wasn't even the type of person who really thought out things in a step-by-step basis. Izuku told her that he wasn't that type of person either. "I really don't see myself as a master strategist. Long-term thinking like that isn't my forte. But when it comes to battlefield tactics, you're pretty smart. That's why when push comes to shove, we're all willing to follow you," interjected the acidic quirk user. With her trademark boldness, she reached over and poked the side of Midoriya's head. He expectantly blushed while Mina giggled. "You've got the strength and the brain, Midoriya. You're the complete package." Kind of makes me feel even happier that I got you all to myself for a little while. Granted, I did get you into this. Ashido, I told you, I don't regret what I did. I'd do it again," quietly affirmed the green-haired teenager. At the last part of his statement, Mina felt her stomach drop. Well, I'd hope that I never land in that kind of situation again. But let's be real, it'll probably happen. I can't help it, schoolwork just isn't my thing." "Then, I don't know, just learn to tolerate it. Sure, it can be a bit boring, but it's all important," Izuku softly asserted. "Besides, you're going on like you're failing all of your classes, which I know isn't true." Well, you got a point there. Believe it or not, but I'm actually doing slightly better in history than I am in other classes, except chemistry." Wearing a proud smirk, the pink-skinned girl raised her right fist, the implication obvious. When it came to heroes in training like her, whatever subjection their quirk fell into tended to be the one the student had a slight edge in. That held true for Mina, somewhat. "I wouldn't mind a little help though if you're willing to, of course." "I will, Ashido," responded the super strength user wearing that same generous smile. Warm wind continued to blow into the classroom. With it came the sounds of the school courtyard. The laughter was the most tempting sound that drew them, especially Mina. She could practically picture the rest of their classmates enjoying the near-perfect spring day outside. Izuku and Mina exchanged looks. Their resolve to make it through this detention period strengthened whenever they did. In the case of the former, it empowered him to dig deep and find his inner teacher. For the latter, Mina forced her brain to work as academically as it possibly could. Little over 30 minutes in and she felt it was working. She knew without a doubt that Izuku was to thank for that. And when this was over, she would thank him. It was when they came to history did she watch the hero-focused encyclopedia within Izuku burst out. Unlike those times in history class, there was a genuine air of excitement in his voice as he recounted the origin of heroes and the acceptance of quirk users into society. Funny enough, that was the subject that Mina could inject a personal stake in. My great-grandpa was in that march. Her finger was right on the picture of thousands marching down the streets of Yokohama protesting the treatment of mutation-type quirk users. It was like lighting the fuse to a firebomb. What? Really? You had a relative involved in the 2101 Mutant Rights March? Ashido, that's amazing. That's awesome. You had a family member who was a part of history. Mina giggled at the star-like twinkle in her classmate's eyes. Yeah, that's what my grandparents and mom always said. Her bubbly expression fell as she leaned back into her chair and looked out the window. The once jubilant smile had grown saddened. I never really got to know him. He died when I was about 2 years old. But I hear that great-grandpa was happy he was able to hold me. Hey, and he was happy I inherited the family horns. So, your mom's side of the family are full of mutation-type quirks? Asked the green-eyed boy with curiosity. Yep, stretching all the way back to my great-grandpa. He had to endure a lot of crap since while some quirks were still being accepted, mutation-type quirks were still facing a lot of discrimination. My great-grandpa grew up with that, until he decided that he wasn't going to stand for it and became an activist. He marched and protested in the streets so people like his kick-ass great-granddaughter and her friends could walk down the street without having to worry about being harassed because they're sporting a pair of horns or weird colors. Izuku was quietly taken away by the bombastic pride that his classmate was exhibiting. It was the first time she'd ever opened up about her family, and it had came from studying of all things. His gaze flickered back to the photography in the history book. As much as Izuku loathed his existence as being born quirkless, he was happy he was born into an era of peace brought about by his idol. If one read the pages of the open textbook, they'd have found that the peace he and his classmates enjoyed had came at a heavy cost. Just like Ashido had said, her great-grandpa fought the good fight to give people like her a future where they were free to be who they wanted to be. He was a hero, just of a different sort than the kind most people normally thought of. "Hey, Ashido, is your great-grandfather the reason you decided to become a hero?" he plainly asked. A sheepish look overcame the Pp'd. "Hey, as much as I'd like to say yes. No, truth is, I hardly knew the guy, but I am thankful that he fought hard to make the world a better place. I guess you could say that I want to do that too, but in my own way. A way that particularly involves kicking bad guy butt." Looking at Midoriya, she could see her reasons were accepted, which brightened Mina's smile. "Alright, what about you, Midori? Do you have any relatives who have mutation-type quirks?" "No, practically everyone in my family has a ... Well, there's really no quirk pattern to us. My dad could breathe fire and my mom has telekinesis," admitted the former quirkless teen. It had gotten easier, talking about his family and their quirks, without mentioning his own. "I think your quirk is pretty awesome. It actually reminds me of All Might's." The words struck like lightning, Izuku's entire body tensing up as he desperately thought of a way to divert the conversation elsewhere. Pure coincidence. In luck on my part. Maybe, but quirk users like you help turn things around," Mina proclaimed with a smile that belayed the curiosity in her that had been piqued. "Well, as soon as I brought up All Might and his quirk, he got super defensive. It's almost like there's something about it he doesn't want me to know." In her subconscious, Mina could see her curiosity, a giant horned pink-skinned alien predator on the prowl. It had found Midoriya and was salivating at the chance to sink its jaws into him. As much as Mina wanted for that to happen, she put a leash on the beast. Smiling, she reached over and took hold of Midoriya's left hand. Near immediately, she felt the scars on it, the rough texture that characterized him as a person who'd gone through hell and high water, but was still going. Regardless of what they look like, us quirk users still had an uphill battle to get people to accept us. People were just as scared as someone who could shoot lightning from their fingers as they were of someone with tiger stripes and claws. It took a lot for people to accept all that. People like you helped make that happen. Izuku readied a response, but that response was silenced by the feel of Ashido's hand gripping his. She felt so ... warm, just like the spring breeze blowing in from the outside. Sheer impulse caused him to squeeze her hand back. Ashido, he felt a familiar nervousness creeping up on him as a small bud of confidence bloomed into an emerald-petaled flower. "Thanks for the compliments. They ... they really mean a lot to me. I'm glad you're finally starting to accept them." She giggled. "Seriously, Midori, you're a great guy, and I'm sure one day you're going to be a great hero. You're on the path already, and you're sitting here helping me." Maybe she had a point. In a lot of ways, Izuku realized he was still getting used to being praised, having his efforts not just acknowledged but even treated with gratitude. Not that such things were entirely why he ever dreamed of becoming a hero, but they were nice to have. They were also nice to hear after the painful sense of failure that still lingered within him from the battle against Overhaul Enery's rescue. It hadn't been without cost. Nothing worth doing was ever free of costs. "Alright, after a pep talk like that, I think it's time we got back to studying, huh?" he proclaimed, flipping the page on the history book. "We've still got 2 more subjects to get through after this. Hey, now that you helped me make it through mathematics, I feel like I can take on anything." "Let's go," responded the acid-tossing future heroine. The noise in the empty classroom gradually died down, though it never entirely faded. Izuku's voice was a constant with Mina's chirping in. She was unafraid to ask questions, and he always did his best to answer them. One wouldn't have been wrong to assume they'd taken up the roles of teacher and student. The 2 professional teachers watching their progress certainly thought so, albeit only one of them would have said it aloud. "I'll admit, all things considered, maybe he could one day take your place here at UA," the disheveled-looking hero stated in his usual dry tone. It belayed the approval that had taken root within Eraserhead as he watched one of his best students tutor one of his more academically challenged. And so far, the tutoring had been progressing smoothly. It was progressing so smoothly, neither of them had noticed the 2 PR heroes standing right outside the doorway. Beside him, the former symbol of peace couldn't help but laugh. "You know, I don't think you're wrong there. Young Midoriya would make for an ideal teacher, albeit I'm sure that might be into his later years, not his prime. If he keeps on pushing himself so hard, Those years will come and go like a flash. As their homeroom teacher, it was his job to know the ins and outs of his students, their quirks and their personalities. When Aizawa looked to Izuku Midoriya, he saw a young man so committed he was liable to break himself into pieces trying to save lives. It was admirable ... but that kind of suicidal drive would likely cause him harm than good, specifically harm to himself. Sighing, he turned his back to the classroom. I'll give them an extra 5 minutes. Mighty generous of you, Aizawa. All Might chuckled. As poor as Ashido's grades are, she can still turn things around. Partnering her up with Midoriya seems to be the best way to do that. There was a beat as the stumble-faced hero looked back to his blonde coworker. That doesn't mean either of them will be getting special treatment, like a seating arrangement change-up. They'd probably suspect something, especially young Midoriya. If they want to spend some time together, they can do it on their own time ... and hopefully Midoriya will be able to get Ashido to stay awake in class. The response of the two professional heroes couldn't have been any more different. Aizawa quietly groaned, remembering the number of times he'd caught the pinkette slumbering through his lesson. As for All Might, well ... he couldn't exactly condone sleeping in class, but he preferred a gentle nudge over the more extreme measures his coworker preferred. One thing they could both agree on was that from time to time, they got some rather amusing reactions from the acid user. I'm going to get some coffee, want some? I could go for a cup, replied the retired hero. Just before following after his coworker, he leaned around the corner, running the risk of exposing himself. Luckily, the two still in training heroes were still too engrossed in their schoolwork to notice him. That was good. The last thing he needed was for his protege to see him watching him. It'd probably cause him to freeze up and throw off the harmony he'd found with young Ashido. He looked so genuinely happy that he couldn't bring himself to disrupt the detention-turned-tutoring session. All Might had a hunch that it wouldn't be the last tutoring session. He was hoping this would be the last detention that they shared together. Oh, you know, when it comes to this sort of stuff, I don't say this often, but I think I've got it, proclaimed the yellow-horned teenager with slight amazement in her voice. Before her lay an array of math-based schoolwork that had left her scratching her head to the point she was ready to impale her horns against the wall. The mathematical equations that had once left her stumped now seemed solvable. They had been solved, all thanks to the help of the boy beside her. Mina could practically picture the smile of approval on ectoplasm's face when she turned in her math work tomorrow, and 𝗵𝗲 when she turned in her writing work, and 13 when she turned in her physics work. And she owed it all to the smiling green-haired classmate beside her. Then it means that I've managed to successfully impart some academic wisdom onto you. Izuku laughed. Laughing alongside him, Mina responded, You sure did, and you made this detention not only bearable, but fun. She reached over and lightly tapped him on the shoulder. You know, I don't think I'd mind doing this again. This studying thing, not the detention part. There was a brief pause as she met his eyes. Sorry about dragging you into this. Ashido, it's no problem. Like I said, I'd do it again. And I'd spend all afternoon with you if it meant helping you. He responded. Would you be up? Her eyes widened as the doorknob turned, then the door itself swung open. Both Mina and Izuku looked in unison to find their homeroom teacher walking in looking as casual and detached as he always did. Aizawa-sensei, they shouted in unison. Hopefully you two spent all this time doing more than just talking. Show me your work so far, he declared in his usual flat voice, albeit his gaze was somewhat softer as he looked between the two teenagers. For a moment or so, his eyes seemed to linger on Izuku, looking back to Mina. He smiled, giving her his full support as she stood up and marched over to their teacher's desk. The ticking of a clock and the ruffling of paper filled the classroom. Izuku and Mina stood before the desk awaiting the judgment of their teacher. Not at all an unfamiliar feeling for any student of UA, especially Class 1A. Several times, the latter's eyes shifted to the former. Each time he gave her that reassuring smile that calmed her frantically racing heart. You've both served out your time and completed your remedial work. Midoriya, same as usual. Ashido, I want to see this kind of work repeated in the future, as will several others. Pure joy exploded across the faces of the two student heroes, especially Mina. Any second, a hug was coming, and likely Izuku's way. You're both free to go, and Ashido, no sleeping in class tomorrow. Yes, sir. She waited until Aizawa-sensei was out the door before throwing her arms around her classmate and letting her excitement and relief totally consume her. I did it. I really did it, and it's thanks to you, Midoriya. You're awesome. Why, you're welcome, Ashido. And it was no problem. On sheer impulse, Izuku felt his arms moving to recuperate the hug. He wasn't even going to deny how good it felt. Her skin was soft and warm. Not to mention up so close he got a whiff of her perfume. Strawberry, she smells like ripe strawberries, he realized with an almost mesmerized voice. A hot blush was spreading across his cheeks and stayed there when Mina pulled away. I was happy to help. And if you ever need my help again, just ask, Ashido. You know, I think I may end up taking you up on that offer. she said lightly, tapping her foot against the floor. As you know, when it comes to schoolwork, I really suck. You, on the other hand, as your classmate and friend, I'll always be there. I mean, if I can't be there for a friend like you, how can innocent people be expected to rely on me? Yet again, spoken like a true hero. Seriously, how'd you become this dedicated? Questioned the horned girl with genuine amazement and curiosity written all over her face. Izuku's trademark nervousness crept back up upon him. Well, I just ... This is who I've always been for as long as I can remember. The ... Well, hero worship. The drive to live up to the example heroes like All Might said ... All of it has just been a part of me. It's made you a good person. Mina interrupted with her lips curled into a bright smile. Izuku felt like she was hugging him again, smothering him in the warmth that was her existence. Suddenly, she bowed, pointing her horns directly at him, causing him to jump. Well, you kept up your end. Here, give him a feel. Remembering their earlier discussion, Izuku felt his familiar curiosity creeping into him. Sucking in a breath, he reached forward and felt the bone-based horns with his fingertips. Whoa, they're actually made out of keratin just like real animal horns. You can tell that with a feel. Midori, you haven't been filling anyone else's horns, have you? Just as quickly as she'd bowed, Mina rose her head, arms crossed and a peeved look on her face. To Izuku, it might as well have been the death glare of giant monster. And no, and never, yours are the first that I've ever touched. And they feel great. They're hard and strong and green eyes whitened and freckled skin turned beet red as Izuku's brain finally caught up to his mind. And he made the link as to what he was saying. Needless to say, steam exploded from his ears as he swerved his head back to the door. Personally, Mina would have found it funnier if someone had chosen to walk by the door and eavesdrop on their conversation. The absolute wrong idea would be the most obvious conclusion they'd reach. It had probably sent Izuku into a further comedic meltdown, which Mina wouldn't have minded seeing. Still, she supposed she had enough fun with this little stunt. Oh, relax, I'm just messing you with. Mina laughed as she wiped the tears from her eyes. Oh, really? You're way too easy to tease. Still, I guess that's part of your charm. Charm isn't exactly how I'd put it ... But thanks for the compliment. Though the blush remained on his face, Izuku had managed to calm himself enough he didn't feel like he was going to spontaneously combust. I'm glad that you finally accepted it. Call it a hunch, but I feel like I'm going to be tossing a few more your way, she noted before walking over to her desk to collect her work. Hey, Midori, that move that you used to wake me up, that was ... It was like All Might's ... What's it called? His Delaware Smash. You saw it at the sports festival. I'm trying to learn how to control it better so I don't break all my fingers. There was a beat as he remembered Recovery Girl's warnings to him. In spite of taking them seriously, he found himself laughing at the memory. Twice over, he added, causing Mina to snicker. I'm still learning and still developing my shoot style so I won't have to keep relying on my punches. You know, I think we're alike in that way. I wouldn't trade my acid quirk for anything in the world. Though if I overuse it, boy does it hurt. Her gaze flickered to Izuku's arms. Mina may not have been particularly in the green-haired boy's inner circle, but she was observant. I'm happy you came out that Yakuza mess all right. You and Kirishima. And I'm sorry to hear about Night Eye and Mirio. Brief as it may have been, a shadow fell over Izuku's face. Thanks for that, Ashido. His right hand rose. His rigid and scared palm stared back at him. Izuku wasn't under any delusions about what his future held. He was fully prepared to accept the possibility that he may end up losing one of his arms at best. But if it was the dream he'd been given the chance to follow, if it was carrying on for those who died, he'd consider it worth it. For Sir Night Eye, Mirio, and Eri ... For them and so many more, I'm going to keep on mastering my quirk. I know I've still got a long way to go, but I'm looking forward to heading down that path. No sooner had he finished speaking did he feel Mina's hand falling atop his, and did he see it? For the second time, he was taken back by how soft and gentle her hand felt in comparison to his own. Looking up at her, the green-haired boy was greeted with a pair of black and yellow eyes that shimmered with good-hearted affection. Would you be up for some help in doing that? You helped me with my schoolwork. I think I can do the same with my area of expertise. He smiled while squeezing her hand. I'd appreciate that, Ashido. Then it's settled. Let's get going, shouted the excitable girl. With their hands locked, she headed toward the door, her heart pounding with excitement at the thought of finally being able to indulge in physical exercise. Even better, it'd be with someone as strong as Midoriya. She could hardly Ashido. Wait, my schoolwork, shouted the super strength user, just barely managing to avoid tripping over his feet. He was still enjoying the feel of his classmate's hand clapped around his, and was silently saddened when she let it go and looked at him with an apologetic smile. Hey, sorry about that. Guess I got a little too excited there. She spoke as they walked back into the classroom. As she helped him collect his schoolwork, Izuku realized something he tended to think at high speeds then act accordingly, at least out in the field. Off the field, he took things at his own pace. Mina moved fast on and off the field, something that he took some getting used to ... and he liked her for it, admired her even. She was a little pink ball of energy, one that he was looking forward to spending the rest of the afternoon with. Was there ever a time when academics, I don't know, just didn't come naturally to you? Plenty of times, Ashido, he replied in an earnest voice. The girl's eyebrows rose. Izuku laughed. Contrary to what you think, even I struggle with school work. In fact, I kind of get off on this struggle from time to time. His confession triggered a short rush of memories that brought a smile to his face. You know how something leaves you stomped at first, but after getting depressed, you get this urge to overcome it. That's how it is for me when it comes to schoolwork and quirk practice. Totally. I get that urge, and I sure as hell know how good it feels when you finally succeed. Mina answered back, her own mind flashing with memories before she delayed it a little. That said, I can't see myself going into doing schoolwork with that kind of drive. Or at least that's how I used to feel until a couple of minutes ago. She lightly tapped him on the shoulder. Midori, have you ever thought about aiming for the #1 spot? Overtaking Bakugo, Ada, and Yaoyorozu and being the big egghead in the class? I'm sure you'd have a shot at it. A thoughtful expression overcame Izuku's face as he gave the idea some thought. It wasn't the first time that it had crossed his mind. That kind of goal ... it would be pretty cool to work toward, he admitted, looking up to the cloud-dotted sky. But it's not the end-all goal for me. I'm happy where I am in the class ranking. But if one day I end up surpassing any of the three of them, like Bakugo, she interjected, you could definitely surpass him. Izuku smiled at her. That little knowing smile of his, it was beginning to drive Mina crazy. On one hand, there was something about it she found cute, but on the other hand it almost felt like it was baiting her. Though they'd only really gotten to know each other over the last couple of hours, she'd picked up a few habits of the green-haired boy. For one, when he gave her that smile, she felt like he was going to dodge her question in some manner. A second later and she was proven right, in a sense. I'm always trying to surpass Ka-chan. And he's always trying to surpass me in just about everything. That's ... our relationship. And I'm kind of hoping that never goes away, even if I would like it if we could sit down and talk without, well, you know, blowing up into a torrent of profanity. He laughed, showing that he wasn't totally blind to the blonde boy's less than approachable attitude. Instead, Mina realized what Izuku had was acceptance, but also determination. In his own way, he was trying to befriend their class's hyper-aggressive pyrokinetic. Truth be told, she was both impressed and a tad worried. You two go back, huh? She inquired, feeling that would have been a good place to start things off. Yeah, we've known each other since we were kids. I always looked up to Ka-chan back then, he admitted with a youthful smile on his face. So there was a time Bakugo wasn't as ... Bakugo-like as he is now. Actually, Ka-chan was kind of the same back then as he is now, Izuku cheerfully responded. For the first time, the pink-haired girl stopped and seemingly did a double take. In her mind, an image of Bakugo appeared. That image was then downsized. It was surprisingly easy to picture him younger and still having the same explosive attitude, albeit probably with a little less swearing. Truth be told, the image was actually a little funny to think about. As she contemplated, she turned to face her classmate and tried to do the same to him. A cheesy grin came to mind as she pictured a younger Izuku Midoriya, complete with his all-might obsession and all. Now that was an image that brought a grin to her face along with some giggles. Ashido, called the teenage version of the cute little boy she was picturing in her head. If I asked you what you were thinking, would you give me an honest answer? Though, how cute you must have looked dressed up in your all-might cape as a kid, she replied in a sing-song voice. Izuku's face dropped. How'd you know about that? Oh man, I'm seriously not surprised. Mina laughed, nearly doubling over as her intended joke ended up hitting the mark. Now, she fully devoted her mind to thinking about a younger Izuku dressing up as All Might. It wasn't like he was the only kid in the world who'd ever done such a thing. Her classmate was just probably the only kid who did so and grew up to have a close personal relationship with the hero. He had a right to be proud of that. Hey, you still have the cape. Ever thought about one day making it a part of your hero costume? Well ... if I ever learned to fly? Maybe. Sometimes capes can work, but sometimes they can also be impractical. Though All Might has worn them from time to time, they're not a mainstay part of his outfit. I think I might be the same way. Feeling bold, he stopped and looked at Mina. The girl was a never-ending geyser of curiosity and positivity, something that Izuku found himself growing more attracted to. Ashido, how do you think I would look with a cape? Like the next #1 hero, she answered back with her trademark smile. I can see what you mean about some of them being cool but impractical and clashing with your personal style. Personally, I wouldn't wear them too often. But on special occasions, I could rock one. Kind of sucks that I couldn't use my original superhero name. It would have helped sell the look. You know, if you don't mind me asking, where'd you come up with your hero name, Ashido? Her face seemed to brighten at the question. Izuku guessed that she'd actually been hoping he would ask it at some point. See, way back, there was this awesome sci-fi movie featuring this race of killer aliens with acid for blood. They were so awesome. In the second film of the series, which featured some pretty cool space marines, they introduced a new breed of aliens, the Queen. It had this huge sac attached to its butt which produced eggs that produced these parasitic little critters called face huggers that would latch onto a victim's face and pump them full of eggs. What? That's gross and awful, Izuku shouted, genuinely horrified at the image. Oh, and they also had acid for blood. His face seemed to be catching up to his hair in terms of shades of green, maybe even verging on surpassing it. Anyways, the Queen was 3 times bigger than the others, and stronger too. It was the scariest but coolest monster that I'd ever seen. That's where I got my inspiration for my hero name from. As one would have expected, the superpowered teen was looking ... less than amazed at her story. She expected it, she'd gotten used to it. Sorry if it kind of killed the mood, Midori. It's fine. I mean I asked after all. And I'm happy that now I know. He replied with a smile, one that wasn't in any way fake or forced. Mina found some relief in that. Truth is, I actually think it's kind of cool how you're taking inspiration from something so scary and trying to turn it into a positive. Hey, well, I guess that's one way to look at it. What about you, Midori? Where'd you come up with your superhero name? Rather than answer her, he looked ahead. Mina followed his gaze and her eyes widened as she realized they were at their destination, Gym Gamma. Through the thick walls, they could hear the sounds of their fellow classmates hard at work. Neither of them were surprised that the gym was seeing some activity, with the culture festival little more than a week away. Izuku looked between the white stone building and his pink-haired companion. The last time they'd gone into the gym together had been with the rest of their class to face off against the US Big Three. Needless to say, it was an experience that none of them would ever forget. A ping of sorrow sounded within the green and black-haired boy as he thought back to that chaotic yet idyllic time that he almost wished he could go back to. But he couldn't, and he wasn't going to waste time lamenting over a tragedy he couldn't change. Instead, he was going to work to make sure another one like it didn't happen. Ashido, he began. I'll tell you after we finish training. That'll be my treat to you. Mina's eyes lit up. Deal, let's go then. She grabbed his hand and dragged him along, just as she'd done before when they left the classroom. Thankfully, this time he had all of his things with him, even if his school bag did flap as Mina pulled him toward the door. Acid was an interesting quirk, one that possesses a wellspring of potential, a great deal of it destructive. From their time in class together, Izuku had observed that Mina knew how to get the most out of her quirk, and she was still learning. One thing that was incredibly obvious was that she'd gotten control of it, great control that Izuku couldn't help but admire. His nose wrinkled with every splash against the concrete targets that lay before them. Her speed was nothing short of remarkable, as was her aim. Wherever a target went up, a ball of sizzling acid was lobbed and impacted, causing it to melt. The acidic girl couldn't stop grinning as she hit one target after another with her acidic balls. She called to the hero in charge of the cement-laced gym for a bigger challenge. 𝗵𝗲 happily obliged. The firing range in front of the two young heroes became a geyser of targets, constantly rising and falling. It was certainly more of a challenge than the stationary stone monoliths that the acidic girl had previously been firing at before. Watch this, Midori. Both her palms came together, the fingertips facing the targets. Izuku's ears rung as he heard the sizzling formation of acid between his classmates' fingertips. This wasn't going to be like his previous shots. This was going to be bigger. A second later, and he was proven right as she opened her palms and outshot several dozen acid balls. His eyes immediately moved from ball to count as many as he could. He ended up with close to 20, each one powerful enough to leave a fist-sized hole in a steel door. They were certainly strong enough to eat through the hardened cement in seconds. The shifting cement pillars ceased, giving the teenagers a change to absorb the results of the attack. Acid shot, direct from the growing arsenal of Pinky, proudly proclaimed the aforenamed girl. So, what do you think, Midori? That was incredible, Ashido. You've finally developed an area of effect type of attack, and it's highly effective too. Without a hint of warrior, the green-clad young hero ran over to the array of cement pillars, several now smoking as residual acid continued to eat away at them. His eyes held that same familiar analytical light as they moved from pillar to pillar. Of the 30 targets, you managed to hit almost all of them, albeit some were glancing blows more so than direct hits. Still, that's pretty good since your acid would sting and paralyze targets with pain long enough for you or some else to take them down. That's the idea. Plus, if a villain comes at me with a big sweeping attack, this'll make the perfect counter. Yeah, it will. he responded, still examining the acid burns. In a bold move, he caressed the burnt edges. Luckily, he had his gloves on, though they too sizzled from the residual acid. That seemed to be another thing that he examined. Though he was quietly aware of Mina watching him, he put more focus on examining each of the burns. You managed to keep the power in most of them, if not all of them. Would you be able to do this again? Her face bent in concentration. Probably, and maybe a third time. After that is when I think I'll start to lose power, and my skin will start to hurt. I'm still working on that part. Catching her stray glance, Izuku responded, yeah, I can sympathize with that. Your quirk putting a strain on your body and having to work past that. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Mina's yellow and black eyes drift to his arms, now covered by his hero costume. Ashido, how fast would you say your acid shots usually go? How fast? I can't give you a number, but maybe almost as fast as a bullet. I mean, my average shots depend on my throwing strength, and I'm pretty good at pitching. She answered. Midori, do you think there's a way I can improve? A serpent of nervousness began to coil within Izuku as he met his classmate's eyes. She was genuine in her statement. Any advice he gave she would take. At his instance, he guided her over to one of the benches by the walls. Well, I'm still trying to get the hang of the Delaware Smash, but the idea is the same. A smaller, more condensed shot for medium and long-range attacks. Ashido, I think you can do better than me. The pink-colored girl blinked. Well, for starters, your control over your quirk is better than mine, but you can generate and control the acid you generate. In other words, you can condense it. Hoping some of her boldness had rubbed off on him, he reached forward and took Mina's hand. He shaped her fingers into a gun as he held it out. Her eyes lit up like neon lights. So that's what you mean. Firing my acid shots like bullets. They'll be smaller, but I think you're right in that they'll have more speed, not to mention I'll have a little more precision. Her eyebrow rose as another thought came to her head. Hey, what about a magnum shot? That could be another super move, Acid Buster. That's actually a pretty good name. But let's focus on getting you past shooting miniaturized bullets first. Your average bullet travels at a speed of over 500 meters per second, okay? Midori, any reason why you know that? Mina inquired, feeling more than a little surprised. Izuku didn't miss a beat. Speed comparisons. It's important to know, especially since from time to time, you'll have to be able to dodge gunfire. Good point. The more you can condense your acid, the more powerful it'll be, even having more penetrative power. His gaze shifted from Mina to the dozens of other students testing their abilities against various cement constructs. In terms of thickness, how much do you think your acid can eat through? A thoughtful expression overcame the acidic heroine. If we're talking about a slab of steel about 10 feet thick, I'd say I should be able to melt through at least 6 or 7 feet of it. Again, without really straining my hands. Remembering their earlier conversation, Mina thought back to some of her favorite scenes from her cinema inspiration. Unlike her, the aliens were full resistant to their own acid, a boon Mina sometimes so fervently wished she possessed as well. Her tolerance to her own acid increased with time and training, but sometimes that left her feeling frustrated. She was a hyperactive person by nature, more than a bit of a contrast to the boy she sat beside. Looking back at him, she saw him staring at her hand with that same analytical look on his face. Mina could practically see the gears in his head turning, churning out an image of what she could become capable of. She could have asked him to see what those images were, but she didn't want to. The reason was simple: she liked the look on his face. Only she seemed aware of the silence that had cocooned them. They sat on the bench in their own little world away from everyone else. Mina was reluctant to break it, but an idea began to take root in her head. Coincidentally, its origins once again lay with Izuku. Suddenly, her finger gun changed into a 3-pronged claw, causing the green-haired boy to pull back. Grinning at him, she spoke. You know, those alien monsters I told you about had some pretty wicked claws. The kind that could cut through steel and flesh. I've been thinking maybe I can try to mimic that too. She half lied, waiting to see his reaction. Another piece of the picture was added to the alien imagery she'd put in his head, his eyes giving Mina reason to laugh before choosing to expand on her words. Alternatively, I could go with a punch or a kick. Her fingers clasped around each other in a tight fist while she looked to him with a beaming smile. A Megaton acid-style punch, just like you, Midori. Well, I've moved on to kicks, as you can see. He laughed, indicating to his armored legs. Don't take this the wrong way, but I'm kind of glad that you did. I don't want to see you losing your arms. Now that she let it slip, Mina realized there was probably no putting it back in the bottle. Sighing, she looked down at his left hand. A few times I was in the infirmary. I heard recovery girl talking to you and about you. Plus, during the sports festival, your match with Todoroki was awesome, by the way. She laughed before a slow frown overtook her normally bubbly features. It's just, I saw how you were practically breaking your fingers over and over again to keep up with him. Truth is, my parents warned me against those kinds of stunts, especially my dad, whose quirk is like mine. In a flash, Izuku found himself at a crossroad. A part of him wanted to jump on that last bit of information, the one about her father possessing a quirk similar to her acid quirk. If he did though, he knew he'd be running from the issue at hand. There was a temptation to do that, to run, but seeing the surprisingly open concern on Mina's face stirred something within him. It wasn't the first time he'd felt this way. Her words of encouragement back in detention had made him feel the same way. Leaning forward, he looked to his open palms. He didn't have X-ray vision, but he could see through his battle-worn gloves, which he was probably going to replace after the culture festival. 𝗂𝗧𝗂 had practically memorized every scar on his hand that he'd gained. Some had faded, others would remain permanent. She didn't mince words in telling me if I didn't stop, I was going to lose my arms. She was definitely right, so I've been trying to rely less on punches and more on kicks. That's how I ended up with shoot style. To emphasize his point, he swung his legs out a little. All right, those things are pretty cool, and so's your shoot style, giggled the horned girl. To help it along, you ever thought of learning kickboxing? Kickboxing? I've thought about it, even looked up some heroes who do specialize in kicks. If I do, I'll still have some work to do since some of the moves I've seen can take a person's head off. Oh, you mean you've seen the infamous Hell brothers? Those renegades from a couple of years back. One of them, what was his name? Yeah, Kick Hopper, he specialized in kicks. I think his quirk gave him some of the strongest kicking power of all the heroes and villains of his time. Yeah, his full power kicks had the equivalent of almost 10 megatons. And his partner, Punch Hopper, had punches that were about the same. He was one of the few villains who could match All Might punch for punch. Hey, you know, it doesn't surprise me you'd know that. Then again, All Might's battle against the Hell brothers was one of the highlights of his career. Mina's eyes flickered down to 𝗂𝗧𝗂's outstretched hands. Looking back, you were trying to copy All Might's fighting style a lot, weren't you? Is it because your quirks are so similar? Yeah, pretty much, he admitted with a humorous laugh. This was turning into quite the intimate conversation. 𝗂𝗧𝗂 hoped it didn't end just yet, as he was actually enjoying talking about his struggles to hone his quirk. That's cool and all, but I think it's for the best you develop your own style. Mina spoke. You're right, and I've tried to do that, even if I still look to him for inspiration. You know, you sound like a kid who inherited his dad's quirk and is trying to use it in almost the exact same way he did. It's kind of cute. Mina laughed. The embarrassed but cute blush returned to 𝗂𝗧𝗂's face. So, have you came up with any big show stealer super moves for your shoot style? Still working on that though I've gotten used to kicks, using punches and throws still kind of comes to me by sheer instinct. His mind immediately jumped to his final battle with Overhaul and how it ended with him essentially punching the crazed gangster into submission. Admittedly, it actually felt good since he could do so thanks to Aries' support, but that he knew that had likely been a one-time thing. For now, at least, as he gained better control of One for All, such feats might become commonplace with him. I guess I could work on my footwork after the culture festival. Suddenly, Mina's eyes cackled with a mischievous light that bedazzled and worried the dark-haired boy. So, you want to improve your footwork? Midori, you should have told me that before. I'm sorry, I didn't know. But since you've made the offer, Ashido, would you mind helping me out? Why did he have a feeling he was getting himself wrapped up in something he was better left avoiding? Why was he not avoiding it? Why was he feeling an impulse to run further into whatever crazy situation that Mina was setting him up for? 𝗂𝗧𝗂 would have liked to know the answers to those questions, though he had a feeling they were going to come too little too late, as the deal had apparently been made between him and his pink-haired classmate. Well, sounds like we've got ourselves a date set up, Midori? She giggled, fully aware of the reaction that was to come. Mina wasn't disappointed. Date. Like a study date, don't worry, laughed the horned girl, rising to her feet. A study date ... Yeah, that's what it's going to be. Why did she sound so disappointed when she said that in her head, with a voice that sounded like it contained a hint of denial? Hey, come on. Let's go try out some of those ideas that you suggested. Acid Bullet, Acid Buster, Acid Ravager, and Acid Smash, he offered with a grin, rising to his feet. Minute by minute, Mina was beginning to enjoy hanging out with 𝗂𝗧𝗂. The thought of turning his company into a regular thing became more appealing to her, and she had a feeling that the feeling was mutual. The smell of acid mixed with the smoke and carried on for several blocks. Mina had learned to take bizarre solace in the odor and the moments of calm that sometimes followed. It meant that the battle was over, if only for the moment. At the very least, it meant that she had a minute to catch her breath. She sorely needed that after the heavy workout she and her partner had just put themselves through. Speaking of which, as she leaned against a building wall, she turned her gaze toward 𝗂𝗧𝗂. Like her, 𝗂𝗧𝗂 had worked up a sweat, causing his green and black-colored hair to stick to his face around the forehead. The sweat caused his emerald green eyes to sparkle, they glittering so much Mina felt herself captivated by them when they met one another's gaze. For the past hour or so, her heart had been pounding almost nonstop, only beginning to slow down as their bout of exercise came to an end. Ashido, he called out to her. How are your hands? They're starting to get sore, aren't they? She blinked in surprise. Had she been staring at him for so long she'd forgotten the familiar throbbing in her arms, the flex of her fingers, and she realized she had. Yep, they're sore. She winced. What about you, Midori? How are your arms and legs? They're okay, but I think we should probably call it a day. He didn't even try to hide the fact that his concern was directed toward her. She didn't look too offended by it. Come on, I'll go with you to the infirmary. Thanks, a walk back should help alleviate some of the soreness. Ashido, how badly does overusing your quirk burn your hands? It varies, though the worst of it leaves me feeling like I'm trying to grab burning coal to the point I can't move my fingers. Hell, just doing that hurts. They left the dotted wreckage of the practice field behind them. Though they were leaving, the massive urban-styled training area was still abuzz with the activity, albeit that would gradually die down. It was getting closer to 7, the closing time for all the training areas. I pushed myself to that point 3 times before. My arms ended up hurting for like 4 days to the point I couldn't move them. The first time was in junior high and it ended up costing me practically a week's worth of school. It totally sucked. I can imagine. He really could. Izuku could eerily recall the pain in his arms from overusing one for all, and had that agony left him unable to do much of anything. It took both his hands to do something as simple as hold a glass of water, and even that was difficult to do. Ashido, how did you end up pushing yourself that far? Did something happen? A wistful look overcame the girl's face as she looked up to the sky, now beginning to turn varying shades of orange and yellow thanks to the setting sun. Yeah, there was an attempted robbery at a bank a few blocks from where I lived. I was on my way back home with my mom and little brother. Things went sour and one of them blew up a building, causing the whole thing to collapse. There was dust everywhere with dozens of people trapped beneath the rubble. I knew my quirk could melt through concrete and steel, so I went to help. Izuku interrupted with a smile, one that made Mina's cheeks turn a shade darker for some reason. Ashido, that sounds like the kind of thing a hero would have done. That's what a lot of people said. Though the paramedics did say that doing so came at a cost. That was the first time I'd ever produced that much acid, and it was a little more than what my hands could take. She cried as soon as the rush of the moment had passed. For the first time in Mina's life, her hands had simply hurt that much. Her mother and brother had cried too, the latter hugging her like she was going to disappear on him. In his defense, she had ran off without much of a word, only shouting that she'd be back, which was true as Mina had came back to her mother and brother. It was just they had to come to her first. Unfortunately, 6 people ended up dying. But other than that, there weren't any fatalities, some of which the heroes and rescue workers said I had to thank for that, knowing that I'd been able to help save lives. It was an incredible feeling, wasn't it? Offered the green-haired boy with an encouraging smile. Definitely. Even though I ended up getting hurt, I was happy that I was able to help people. It was around that time I probably decided that I wanted to become a professional hero. A humorous laugh fell from her lips as she nervously looked to the side. And if I became a professional hero, I could do that kind of stuff without getting scolded. Izuku didn't mean to, but he found himself laughing. In seconds, Mina was laughing with him, not needing a word of explanation on his part. She'd paid close enough attention to know that he could sympathize with her story. He'd probably lived it a few times. Though on the outside they may have seemed different, it was a different story on the inside. Both Izuku Midori and Mina Ashido had a tough time sitting still when there was hero work to be done. Both agreed that would be a great deal easier to do as professional heroes, a choice that had been shared by countless others at U. They left Ground Beta at the exact right time as the sun set. The evening rays reflected off the countless office buildings, panting the heroic training center in a majestic glow. Like the sky slowly but surely changing to darkness, the sounds of action were gradually faded as more students joined Izuku and Mina in calling it a day. In about an hour's time, the massive training field would be completely empty. That's when the cleaning crew would arrive to repair the damages done to the environment and collect the remains of the practice robots that the students had pitted themselves against. Some students considered it a point of pride if they were able to leave nothing behind to be salvaged. The students possessing rather destructive quirks seemed to make up a number of that group. Mina supposed she could have considered herself in that category too. Personally, though, she didn't particularly fancy the thought of leaving behind such destruction and small parts for the cleaning crew to have to sort through. Not to mention her acid quirk tended to more often than not leave electronics somewhat unsalvageable. Thanks for letting me train with you, Ashido. He spoke as they headed toward the bus that would take them back to the central square of the school. Hey, it was my treat after you landing you detention with me. Kind of funny to think this awesome day wouldn't have happened without that. Speaking of which, sorry I wasn't able to help you with your Delaware smash after you helped me perfect my moves. She responded with a slight frown. Mina had always known when it came to firepower. Her classmate's quirk blew hers clear out of the water. Really, it was amazing how much power Izuku's possessed. It was practically super strength and speed and durability all rolled up in one neat package. The archetypical superhero buttle ... save for maybe one trademark power. "It's okay, I made a little progress, and besides, I think I know what I have to do," he answered back, looking back to his hands. "At the very least, I'm not breaking my fingers with every attempt." The laugh Mina gave was short-lived as she remembered the footage of his battle with Todoroki. Again, it had been nothing short of incredible, especially since while Izuku was fighting him, he was also trying to get him to accept the half-hot side of his quirk. Mina wasn't sure if she would have attempted such a thing in the middle of a fight, but Izuku had, and it had worked. But it hadn't been without its costs. Fighting Todoroki hadn't been without its costs. The images lingered in her mind as she and Izuku boarded the bus and sat beside each other, him closer to the window with her on the outer seat. "Did you ever Midori, have you ever regretted what you did against Todoroki? With your fingers, I mean." It was a topic she felt almost nervous to broach, but Mina couldn't help herself. Adding to her ever-brimming curiosity, Izuku always seemed pretty receptive to her questions, just as she was to his. The hidden intent of her words didn't go unnoticed by the green-clad student. "No, though I'll admit that it hurt like hell. Personally, though, I think I did the right thing, even if it cost me a little too." Yet another humorous smile adorned his face as he thought back to the grilling that he'd gotten in the match's aftermath. He'd most certainly took Recovery Girl's words seriously and planned to follow them. But he couldn't deny the sheer exhilaration that ran through him had been incredible. "Don't worry, if I can help it, I'm going to try to avoid ever pushing my fingers like that again." "I'm happy to hear that," Mina chirped. As was becoming custom, she grabbed Izuku's right hand. Green eyes rose and a fiery blush rapidly consumed academic boy's face. "Your fingers are way too good to be permanently mangled. I could use them to keep on helping me with my homework. SS sounds like another reason for me to be careful. And hope that the design department is able to come through for me." He added that last part in a hushed whisper. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw Mina raise an eyebrow at his words, but she didn't say anything about it. What she did do was lay her head on his shoulder. How he managed to keep from jumping out of his skin, or out the window, Izuku would never know. He was happy that he didn't do either of those things. "Yeah, you've got some reasons to be careful, so try to be, and stop being so hard on yourself, Midori. You're great as you are, and you're getting better," she whispered in a soothing voice. It caressed the freckle-faced boy's entire existence. Instead of racing like it normally did under such physical intimacy, it calmed considerably. Izuku was aware it was a short ride back to the main part of campus. He wished it could have been longer so he could continue to enjoy this intimacy with Mina. His eyes looked to her reflection in the mirror to his left. "Hey, Midori, my horns don't bother you, are they?" came her soft voice, sounding somewhat unsure. Smiling, he shook his head. The reflection couldn't hold a candle to the real thing. "Nope, they're not a problem, Ashido. Why not ask her if you can call her by her name? Why not ask her to call you by yours?" The question made his heart skip a beat. He realized that Mina hadn't asked him about the origin of his superhero name. It had seemingly slipped her mind. Izuku could have reminded her of that, but he chose not to. He didn't want to disturb this little moment that they were having. It surprised him how much he cherished it to the point he wanted to prolong it. And maybe he wanted to repeat it. It amazed him how much excitement was bouncing within him by the time he got back to his dorm room. "Whoa," he whispered as he seemingly staggered in, letting the door close shut behind him. His feet carried him to his bed while his mind remained in a daze, which didn't dissipate until he sat on his bed for several minutes. As with most great events in his life, the last 4 hours were on a constant repeat in his head. Amazingly, it fell onto the more mundane side since his life nor anyone else's had been in mortal danger. He'd instead been learning ways about how to keep that mortal danger at bay, and helping someone else do the same. Subconsciously, the green-haired boy smiled as he remembered the time he spent with Mina. The last near 4 hours with her been great, so great that a part of him could hardly believe they were real. He fell back against his bed. Izuku felt like he was floating across the ocean. For a certain reason, either the ocean water was pink or the sun was. Whenever he thought of pink, he not got this warm, fuzzy feeling in the pit of his stomach. "A crush," he murmured in the trusted solitude of his room. I've got a crush on Ashido." Voicing the statement solidified it into a fact. After spending an afternoon with the pink-skinned girl, he'd become smitten with her. "Oh man, I seriously can't believe this is happening. What am I going to say to her tomorrow? How am I going to act?" Izuku was an extremely self-aware person. He knew that he wasn't exactly going to win any points for charisma or charm. Such things simply weren't in him. Likewise, he knew there wasn't a romance bone in his body. Either that or there was and he hadn't discovered it yet. Wait a minute, that would imply he planned on acting on these feelings. "Aw man, this is so not I expected this day to go, and just a few days before the culture festival too," bemoaned the young hero, scratching at his head in frustration. Yet another thing that surprised him was how the thought of suppressing them didn't even cross his mind. That's what was surprising to Izuku as he sat upright. There was one way for him to deal with all these raging emotions the same way he always did. For as long as he could remember, his work desk had been something of a private sanctuary. Like Mina had said, he was a nerd, someone whose favorite place probably would have been in front of a desk taking notes. She hadn't been entirely wrong, and she thankfully hadn't called him out on it. She'd accepted it, and even complimented him on it. The memory of her smiling face and encouragement brought a smile to Izuku's face. That smile stayed on his face as he searched through his many notebooks for the one that he needed. It shouldn't have came as a surprise to anyone that Izuku kept notes, primarily on superheroes and quirks of course. Some would have said that he already had that knowledge in his head, and they would have been right. The thing is, it never hurt to take notes, not to mention there may have came a time when someone else needed them. At the heart of it though was that writing that everything he learned and felt was simply in Izuku's nature. For him at least. There was enjoyment to be found in it, as he and his classmates were all still heroes in training. They were all still developing their powers. That made it somewhat complicated when it came to jotting that information down. Space had to be made, sometimes lots of it in case they took huge leaps. One such leap had been the case with Todoroki, whose abilities he recognized earlier on as only being half of what they could have been. He'd left a large amount of space in Todoroki's section to fill up what he hoped would be the dual-colored boy's eventual pyrokinetic abilities, and how he mixed them with his pyrokinetic powers. Did you ever Midori, have you ever regretted what you did against Todoroki? With your fingers, I mean. He'd heard Mina's question before, especially in the weeks following the sports festival. Pausing to look at his right hand, he vividly remembered the humongous levels of pain he endured in order to keep pace with his classmate. Oh, it had most definitely hurt but to him, helping open his friend's eyes had made it worth it, including the scolding he got afterward. Izuku leaned back in his chair remembering how after the sports festival, he rarely attempted to use the Delaware Smash afterward except if he had to. Creating full cowl had helped, but he was still a ways away from being able to fire precision bullets like his idol and mentor could. Even during this afternoon of training with Mina, he'd failed to properly concentrate the air into precise shots, unlike her, who'd succeeded. Izuku's smile brightened as he began to fill in the allotted space for Mina's section. Her acid quirk had always been impressive him too, maybe just as much as her physical appearance. To learn she had such a history behind her love of it and her heroic inspiration made him feel happier. His eyes flickered to his laptop. A movie about aliens with acidic blood. I could have sworn I've heard something about it. Wasn't it on some top 10 or top 20 monster movie list from the 21st century? H thought to himself. I'll looking it up once I finish here. Maybe I'll be able to find something to help her. Acid was a versatile substance, but also a dangerous one. As Mina herself had told him, there were limits to how much of her own acid she could tolerate. He remembered how her own pink skin had begun to darken and even redden. While watching that happen, Izuku had felt a nagging voice in his head telling him to slow down and spot. Albeit he knew if he voiced such a thing Mina might take it the wrong way. Besides, it wasn't like she was blind to the risks of her own quirk. How wouldn't that be the pot calling the kettle black? Mused the young successor flexing right hand. The impulse to head out and continue practicing the Delaware Smash and other finger-assorted moves gripped him, but Izuku beat it back. In doing so, his mind drifted to something else that Mina had said. So, have you came up with any big show stealer super moves for your shoot style? Placing his pencil on the desk, he spun around and looked at his legs. Those moves used by the Toku heroes of the past ... not Sentai heroes. The other kind. Riders, Kamen riders, and their moves were rider kicks. The sparks in his mind caught fire, driving his arms toward his laptop, his fingers pulling up the search pad in a matter of seconds. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he made a mental note to thank Mina for the inspiration. He could thank her tomorrow on during their date. Kralak, 𝐻 crap. Wait, date. It's not a date, it's a study date, not a romantic date. Whenever he thought of tomorrow, he felt his heartbeat spike. And that loss of impulse control had just cost him one pencil. Luckily, he had plenty more, but it was the aftermath of the thought that left him feeling winded. I really need to focus on other things. I'm sure Mina's not thinking about me that way ... at least. He couldn't bring himself to finish that statement to say, I hope not, because it actually hurt. Ironically, he just moved on to thinking even more about the pink-haired girl. Oh, what the hell, I might as well look it up. Besides, these monsters were pretty cool to her. How scary can they be? It was amazing how a general description yielded such immediate results, and how quickly he was able to pick out the one that he wanted. 5 minutes later, Aoyama, Takoyami, and Ida would nearly hit the ceiling, shocked to their core by the piercing scream of terror coming from Izuku's room. The latter of which would quite literally bust into the green-haired boy's room believing his classmate and friend to be under attack. What they found was a trembling Izuku, having scooted himself all the way to his back while having broken his chair in the process. He wouldn't stop shaking for another minute. Izuku contemplated skipping dinner that night, and maybe breakfast in the morning. He wasn't sure he'd be able to hold anything down in his stomach without vomiting it back up. The boy also felt tempted to skip out on sleeping too until he realized he'd probably suffer for it in the morning. Just to be safe though, Izuku slept with the lights on, and probably would for the next couple of days. Hey, Midori, you okay? I didn't this isn't my fault, is it? Mina questioned, looking to him with concern in her yellow eyes. It was inevitable. He'd spent the entire morning looking half dead with shadows under his eyes. Practically everyone had asked him if he'd gotten any sleep last night. The answer was yes, Izuku had gotten some sleep. About 4 bumpy hours worth. Izuku hoped that would be enough to keep him going until lunch. Doing his best, he smiled at her. I am fine, Ashido. Last night was just a little rough on me, that's all. Seeing her inhaling air to speak, Izuku realized he needed to better explain himself. It wasn't anything you did. I just stayed up all night studying. That's all. Technically speaking, it wasn't a complete lie. He had studied, albeit in an attempt to bury the disgusting imagery of an alien parasite impregnating a human being. The question was if Mina would buy his lie. Based on the look on her face, not likely. Izuku could feel himself beginning to sweat as nervousness once more seized him by the throat. It was too early in the morning for this, but he'd created this mess and now he had to walk through it. He nearly flinched as she sighed in frustration. I had a feeling you'd do something that stupid. Suppose it was bound to happen one day. Luckily, I've got a few tricks on hand to help you. Follow me. This time, he didn't jump when she grabbed her hand. He'd actually been expecting it. He'd readily accepted it, and Izuku was happy to have it. Suddenly, he felt all the exhaustion and lingering fear that had been eating at him melt away. You know, this seems like a pretty great way to start the day, he thought as he allowed himself to be pulled along by the pink girl for the second day in a row. His heart spiked a little and he went with the slight acceleration, relishing in it. Izuku relished in the scent of shampoo that Mina had, carried by the morning wind. Mina's touch and her scent. The combination of both was able to make him forget about everything else, including the looks some of their classmates were sending them. Izuku was focused almost entirely on the mop of pink hair and page of yellow horns sticking out from the top. He was caught smiling at it when 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked back at him. Glad to see I'm already brightening up your morning, she chirped, seeing his blissful expression. You've helped me get the morning off to a good start. He casually replied back in spite of the blood beginning to rush to his cheeks. Ashido, really, you don't have to do this for me. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, I think I actually do, and on top of that, I want to. Mina responded with a grin. Yesterday, I was caught sleeping in class and you bailed me out. I'd be a crappy friend if I didn't keep you from making the same mistake. But, turning to face him, she shot him one of those cheeky but warm smiles that Izuku was growing more and more attached to. If let's say you ever got yourself into that kind of mess, I'd be there to save you, just like you did for me. Izuku couldn't see how much he was smiling, but he felt if he smiled even more, he'd probably break his face, which he was fine with. He was just that darn happy, and he didn't even truly know why. Luckily for him, Mina didn't seem too disturbed by it and just kept dragging him along to the cafeteria. The smell of food immediately blasted his nose and made his stomach rumble in eager anticipation. He was quiet as Mina sat him down and told him to sit put while she went to order the food. Curiosity swelled within him as to what she had planned. The cafeteria was sparsely packed as students were filing in, joining the early risers. In due time, he'd been joined by the rest of their class, their friends. From time to time, he would have been amongst them, though after last night he found it a quite miracle he hadn't slept in. A yawn warned him that instead of that, he might be running the risk of falling asleep in class. Izuku shivered at the thought of that happening in Eraserhead's class or All Might's class. Both would be bad enough, but Izuku shuddered at the thought of the former. It would also be downright embarrassing after yesterday. Hey, Midori, Mina's voice sounded. Just her voice seemed to give him a small surge of energy. It certainly roused his stomach since it was more focused on what food she brought back for him. Izuku's nose wrinkled as he opened his sense of smell and tried to identify what she was carrying. He immediately detected the scent of strawberries. Shokupen toast. Izuku honestly wasn't too surprised that such a simple meal was her kind of breakfast. The jam that she went with might have been the mystery factor. In this case, it was strawberry-flavored jam ... and something else. I know this is going to seem a little weird, but trust me, you'll love it. Or at least I hope you do. I've learned this kind of thing isn't for everyone, she declared, putting her tray down. In addition to the toast, there was a small stack of pancakes and some energy bars. Meeting his gaze, Mina grinned as she quickly unwrapped one of the energy bars and placed it in between two loaves. Right before him, she took a bite out of the utterly bizarre customized sandwich. Mina took glee in his wide-eyed expression as she chewed and swallowed, then offered him a bite. Go on, give it a try. Izuku's first impulse was to accept. The logical side of his brain screamed that this probably wasn't a good idea, but he didn't listen. Flashing her a grateful smile, he took hold of the bizarre breakfast sandwich and bit down on it. Green eyes widened, then came the second bite. then the third, and then the fourth. By the time Izuku realized he was 3/4 of the way through the sandwich, it was practically too late. And there goes another one," proudly proclaimed the pink-adorned girl. "So, pretty good, right? Where is it on a scale of 5 to 10? I'd give it an 8. He responded without missing a beat. His taste buds were singing, and he was determined to keep the song going. His response was enough for Mina, who handed him a second sandwich, seeing he was almost done with the first. Internally, she felt quite relieved that the loads of toast and strawberry-flavored plus ultra energy bars wouldn't be going to waste, or she'd have to eat them all herself. If she did, she doubted she'd be able to sit still for the entire morning. Even she had an excess limit to sugar and caffeine and all the other substances that had a person bouncing on their feet. Izuku was well into his third sandwich before he found it in himself to ask his pink-haired friend about her creation. "Ashido, where'd you come up with this idea? Combining Shokupen toast with ultra energy bars." "My second year of junior high." A wistful expression overcame her face as she dove back 2 years in time. "Both my parents were in a big hurry to get to work, so they didn't have time to make me and my brothers a big breakfast. So they cooked the bare minimum and told us to make the most. There were a few ultra energy bars lying around while I was eating some toast and decided to combine them." She chuckled while taking another bite of her customized sandwich. "The first flavors I tried were blueberry jam and peanuts. It tasted weird as hell, but pretty damn good. It also gave me some energy that I needed to get through the day." "I see," he responded. A familiar analytical look began to overtake his face. To the side, Mina found it cute since it was happening while his lips were smeared in crumbs. "The main ingredients for ultra energy bars are grown in labs for the express purpose of giving quirk users energy boosts. I once did a report on it back in middle school." "What grade did you get?" inquired the horned girl. A sheepish look suddenly overtook him. "I got a B+, though that was kind of bias on the fault of the judges. I chose all my ultra bars based on ones that All Might had advertised. Maybe I should have shaken it up a little." An embarrassed blush colored his cheeks as Mina burst into comedic laughter. "That ... is so like you, Izuku." "Ashido, please, do not talk with your mouth full. It's inappropriate, not to mention your food could fall out," called a familiar voice that caused both teens to turn their heads. In a way, Izuku was happy that their classmates had finally arrived. It saved him from bringing up the fact that Mina had just called him by his first name. He knew it hadn't been intentional, a slip of the tongue, almost literally. It wasn't like he was angry. Izuku was in fact the opposite. His heart fluttered a little when he recognized his first name instead of his last name leaving her lips. Only a handful of people called him by his first name. Not even his mentor on a daily basis. From the looks of things, Mina herself had failed to notice it, and with the arrival of Ada and the others, it seemed to have completely slipped her mind. "Hopefully, maybe next time ... she'll call me by my name again ... and I can. Maybe ask her if I could try calling her by her first name. That'll only be fair, right?" Personally, Izuku liked eating and studying outside, at least when the weather afforded him the opportunity to. That mashed with his acidic classmate, who was his opposite in many aspects, yet they'd managed to find common ground. It's not summer, but it's still surprisingly nice out, don't you think, Midori?" "Yeah, I'm happy we can enjoy this weather while we can. It'll be another couple of months before it comes around again. That is, unless you like eating outside in the winter," Izuku chirped. "Done that before, not fun, but hey, I could do it," answered back the pink-skinned girl. "What about you? Have you ever done that? Eaten out in the cold?" Laughter fell from his lips. "Yeah, my mom and my dad. His quirk's great at keeping people warm. I wonder if I could do that. Just generate acid on my skin to keep myself warm." Leaning back into her seat, Mina crossed her arms and looked to the cloudy yet sunny sky doing its best to shine above them. It wasn't like summer up until a few weeks ago. There was a slight chill that came with the sunny rays. The latter had a slight edge over the former, but that would start to change over the next several weeks. That meant that they had to enjoy the time that they had. They weren't alone, as the outdoor seats were sparsely filled with other students who had the same idea as them. For the moment, it seemed the two had some privacy, something that Izuku was more than a little grateful for. "Hey, Ashido," he called, catching her attention. "Do you remember the talk about our hero names we had yesterday?" She cocked her head to the side in thought. "Oh yeah, we did have that talk. I told you about where my inspiration came." The realization dawned on her as evident in her widening eyes. All Izuku did was smile at her in a cute sheepish way. Mina couldn't help but laugh. "So, hey, you looked up the series, didn't you?" He nodded, confirming her suspicions. Sorry about that, Midori. I guess I should have given you a warning or something. That would have helped," he responded with his own nervous laugh. Mina's died down as a nervous look of her own overcame her face. It was just like yesterday when she showed some cracks in her usual optimistic and bubbly persona. "Look, I can take criticism about how weird I am." There was a beat as she looked to the side with a deep frown. or how my inspiration sounds more like a villain's. Suddenly, the freckle-faced teen's face broke out into confusion. A villain's, he repeated. Mina met his eye, her frown morphing into an apologetic smile. I can kind of see how those things would be better inspiration for a villain than a hero. But Ashido, I think that just makes your decision all the more impressive. Her eyebrows rose. How so? You're taking something that most people would perceive as a negative and tried to turn it into a positive. That's something that I take as worthy of admiration. It was a good thing he wasn't eating anything at the moment, otherwise it would have made swallowing even harder. To take something scary and well, naturally evil, and try to use that as inspiration for something like positive, like being a hero. I find that admirable. It does make me sad your original hero name was rejected, but I think your current one works just fine. The smile that he'd come to know and even love returned to Mina's face in full bloom. All right, enough about me. It's time we talked about you. What about your hero name, Midori? Where'd it come from? Did you grow up around a lot of trees? Did you like carving? It was a nickname, a childhood nickname that I had. He politely cut her off. A nickname? Hey, that sounds pretty cool. You took a. The gears in Mina's head as she remembered a certain detail about her friend's hero name. Deku. It was a name that Bakugo gave you, didn't it? Yeah, it was, admitted the green-haired and green-eyed boy. Looking back, I was pretty defenseless. It felt like he was wading into the ocean. If he went out any further, he'd be in open water. Izuku had to stop himself from revealing the source of his defenselessness. He could only hope that the truth wouldn't cross Mina's mind. He'd gotten lucky in that area before. Defenseless, you. Wait, so that means your quirk didn't show up until you were older and he picked on you for it? Well, kind of, he admitted. Behind the sorrow, Izuku let out a sigh of relief. His secret was safe, and he didn't even really have to lie about it. Mina crossed her arms as she tried to figure out where the name, Deku, could have came up. Her eyes widened as she looked up at her classmate, remembering his first name, a name that she'd accidentally called him by at breakfast. That had felt good. Oh, defenseless in. Izuku, yeah, that sounds kind of like the thing he'd do. Mina was very aware that kids could be cruel. Though some mellowed out as they got older, others seemingly got worse. She was very tempted to put her blonde-haired classmate in the latter category, but she didn't, and she had Izuku to thank for that. For whatever reason, he held out faith for his old friend. From time to time, she recalled how that faith seemed to be rewarded. Well, I guess that's a rivalry. Two guys aiming to be the #1 hero after All Might. So, you took a childhood nickname meant as an insult and you're trying to turn it into a positive. If you ask me, that's pretty awesome, Midori. Thanks, Ashido. Izuku smiled back. He was tempted to say, thank you, Mina, but stopped himself as doing that felt like crossing a bridge where there was no coming back from. That was frightening to him. Besides, we've only just started to get to know each other these last 2 days. Things are moving way too fast. He saw her open her mouth to speak, but the words never got the chance to leave her mouth. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up in a way he was all too familiar with. Ashido, move. Reaching across the table, he grabbed her hand and pulled her over the table. It was a move that came naturally to him. Luckily, Mina didn't seem to mind as she curled herself into his embrace. The table they were sitting at was blown apart by ... Well, Izuku couldn't say he was surprised to see a big stone and clay-composed wolf rampaging through campus. This was UA. Such things were all too common on a sunny, rainy, snowy, or just normal day. As panic rapidly consumed the outdoor food court, Izuku and Mina were more focused on each other than they were the mayhem around them. The latter was lying directly atop the former, staring down at his widened green eyes. It went both ways, literally, as he looked into her yellow eyes, bright and sunflower-colored irises in the middle of obsidian black. They truly were alien-like, but that in no way made them scary or unappealing. Izuku actually felt himself being drawn to them. He was losing himself in them to the point he didn't even realize that the rampaging wolf was still on a rampage until its howl practically made his ears bleed. His and Mina's too. Shit. How can something made out of rock scream so loudly? Pulling herself off her classmate, she looked over to the creature that had disrupted their formerly peaceful lunch. It might have been her imagination, but the wolf seemed to be getting bigger, its earthen body growing darker and harder. Oh great, looks like someone's lost control of their construct again. Ashido, come on. Having watched the beast's expression grow wilder, Izuku knew an attack was coming. It was telegraphed by the bright red glow at the base of the creature's neck, something he quietly filled away to be useful later. Both teenagers jumped aside as the earthen bounce pounded on them, creating a small-sized crater. Go for the legs, shouted the green-haired boy, his body already channeling his quirk in preparation for his counterattack. A couple shots of acid snipe, coming right up. Her voice was cherry, which was exactly what Izuku was expecting, as she'd practiced yesterday. Her finger bent into the form of a gun with acid collecting at the extended tip. 3 shots sounded, each one releasing a pressurized pop that momentarily shook the air. Each shot blew right through the earthen wolf, causing it to howl in agony. It slumped forward, a hole in each arm and one on its left shoulder. Bright yellow eyes turned in Mina's way and glared. She grinned. "Come and get me, Wolfie. You're running lunch break." The beast's speed was greatly reduced thanks to her shots. It was practically dragging itself toward her, at least until the red glow on its back kicked up, causing the holes in its body to begin repairing themselves. Distracted, "I'm going to do something about its regeneration," commanded the now glowing boy. "Got it." Digging deep into the earth, the beast enlarged its front paws, then leaped at Mina with the intent of crushing her underfoot. Rather than panic, she concentrated more acid into her fingertip, the resulting bullet growing to the size of a baseball. "Acid Magnum," she shouted. The attack produced a sound exactly like its namesake, a thunderous crack that launched a sizzling ball of acid at the wolf's left paw. It howled as it crashed back into the ground, its left arm gone all the way up to the shoulder. As it promised vengeance in the form of a feral growl, Izuku moved on the right claw, tearing it off with his superhuman strength, then moved to the red glow on the beast's back. Rearing his arm back, he brought his fist down, crashing it straight into the animal-themed golem's back. His palms clenched around something, which he then pulled out. He jumped back as the wolf-like construct crumbled away into rocks and clay. "Midori, you okay?" Mina called, stepping over the mess of rock that had formerly been a giant killer wolf. "Yeah, I'm fine. What about you, Ashido?" Snickering, she held up her index finger and blew over it. "Okay, and we can give the seal of approval to the Acid Snipe and Acid Magnum." Izuku smiled back at her. It felt great when training paid off. Curbing his happiness for his classmate, he looked down at the object that he'd extracted from the stone wolf. It was a gemstone, a ruby to be exact. Its glow dimmed in his hand as pieces of it began to break off. "Crap, crap, crap, crap. Are you two okay? You aren't hurt, are you?" shouted a male voice that caught both freshmen's attention. They'd gained a small audience of their fellow students. It seemed rather than intervene, they'd instead chosen to watch the two freshmen deal with the situation. Izuku had a feeling it was a way of seeing if they, members of Class 1A, were worth all the attention they'd been getting. The boy who'd called out to them had chocolate-colored hair and bright green eyes that were rimmed with panic as he examined the ruined lunch ground. His eyes focused the ruined remains of the earthen construct. He took a step forward, his face giving away shock as he looked between it and the two freshman students. Did you two seriously stop it? All on your own," he whispered, "and in record time too. I say we take that gemstone back for a refund." Another student, a redhead, muttered, looking rather annoyed at the pile of rubble. Was that thing created by your quirk?" Izuku asked. "And did this come from the development studio?" He held up his hand containing the gemstone. "Yeah," replied the brunette, taking the cracked stone from Izuku. "My quirk is clay molding. It allows me to create constructs out of clay. The strength varies on the quality of the clay. See, by implanting gemstones in them, I can boost their power. Or at least, that was the theory anyway. Guess those eggheads at the development studio lied to us," sneered the redhead. "And no, they didn't. I think the gemstone worked." Izuku suddenly spoke up, once again shifting all attention to himself. Though a small sprout of nervousness took root in him, he pushed past its entrapping roots. "Your wolf golem was pretty tough, it's just, it had the unfortunate fate of running into the two of us," Mina declared. Izuku was silently grateful she'd stepped in, as she was better with words than him. Her habit of getting physical cropped up as she threw an arm around Izuku, bringing him close, thus causing him to blush bright red. "Pinky and Deku of Class 1A, future professional heroes. Against us, you could have loaded that canine with all the gems in the world and it wouldn't have helped." The two older boys stopped and looked between one another. Class 1A. Their focus fell to Izuku. "Wait a second," the male brunette said. "You're the kid who went head-to-head with Endeavor's son at the sports festival. And you're one of the students who was involved with the Yakuza raid," exclaimed the redhead. "Holy shit, you're both from Class 1A. When did we become so popular?" The green-haired boy whispered to his pink-haired classmate. "I'd say you, Bakugo, and Todoroki helped launch our class to stardom at the sports festival. Since then, it seems like trouble keeps on finding us, and we keep on making the most out of it, like right." "Daichi Hachiyama," boomed a female voice that rolled through the outdoor lunch area. Practically everyone flinched as they recognized what the authoritarian voice meant. The now identified male brunette certainly did. Izuku and Mina could only give the older boy an apologetic look. Sorry to ruin your afternoon. You too. I'll try to make it up to either of you at some point. I promise." Together, they watched the pair of boys march up to the thoroughly angered teacher and through the doors. They both knew a detention was going to be in order for the poor boy known as Daichi Hachiyama. Looking back though, they hoped it would be a light sentencing, as the damage his clay construct had incurred didn't seem to. "Well, that was definitely a memorable lunch, wasn't it?" Mina quipped. "Yeah, it was. In the end though, I'd say things turned out for the BR notes. Oh no. Mina, school work," screeched the green-haired teen in horror. Mina felt her heart skip a beat as she followed her friend's gaze. Shit, grab what you can. We can't lose our schoolwork after a badass moment like that. 𝗵𝗲 and 𝗵𝗲 won't let me hear the end of it. Their alarm seemingly alerted everyone else to take stock of their things in the aftermath of the commotion. The little mess had eaten up a sizable chunk of the lunch block, which added to the urgency, particularly the class 1A student. It definitely hammered home Mina's previous remark. It was a memorable lunch, and deep down inside, she hoped it would lead to a memorable afternoon, particularly alongside her green-haired classmate. A yawn escaped Mina's lips as she closed the door to her dorm room behind her. It was the first hint of exhaustion she felt. This was a common thing for her. Once she made it to her room, her body usually instinctively began to unwind. In this case, it had been another fun day at UA, the sort that she loved, and maybe a little more. She felt nothing short of gleeful that she was able to spend practically the entire day with Izuku. Mina liked spending time with him, really liked it for more than just the fact he was able to keep her afloat academically. She'd already told him to his face she considered him something of a nerd. But that wasn't a bad thing, especially since in Mina's opinion, he was more on the cute nerd side. Cute and kind. Whenever she thought of his freckle-covered face, Mina smiled. He looked cute on a daily basis, with his cuteness factor increasing whenever he got flustered. When he grew serious and supportive, she felt that cute wasn't quite the word to use to describe him. He looked inspiring, appealing, attractive. Geez, we're just about through the first year, yet this is the most that I'm really starting to talk to him and get to know him. And it's only been a day and a half, she exclaimed. It was a rather vain attempt to disconnect herself from her growing curiosity. Perhaps studying would help keep it from completely overwhelming her. That was something else about her that had changed since she talked to Izuku yesterday. Izuku had done something that professional teachers before him had been attempting to do: get her knuckle down and study. Some had met with success, but none as much as the green-eyed boy. What the? Right off the bat she recognized the notebook in her hands not to be hers. Mina knew her notebooks by heart. After all, she decorated them the same way she decorated her room, putting her personal touch on them. The one she held in her hands was differently designed. It had a number of geometric designs on it. Such designs couldn't have came from Mina's hands. Flipping the cover open to the first page, her jaw dropped at the title. Heroic Aerokinetics and Flight Users. She flipped past the first page and was hit with an array of encyclopedia-like walls of texts and illustrates pertaining to quirks that allowed one to fly. Mina continued to flip through the notebook, finding more notes and illustrations. She didn't read any of the notes, only skimmed them. Each one gave her a thought as to what kind of notebook this was, and who it could have belonged to. Mina knew of only one person whom would have kept a notebook like this. Well, 2 or 3 really, but only one person had handwriting this eye-catching to her. Feeling a cold sweat gathering on her face, she put the notebook down and reached for another. The title read, Gadgetry of Heroes, giving Mina an immediate idea of what the book contained. Her jaw dropped at the vivid detailed descriptions of the various heroic gadgets Izuku had jotted down. Many of them were the equipment of professional heroes, including heroes from the tail-end age of chaos when quirks first manifested. Much of the equipment would nowadays be considered antique, especially by her generation. Izuku had jotted them down and written out details of their inner workings by hand. He's got some amazing handwriting and drawing skills, Mina whispered, safe in the confines of her own room. A tiny voice in her head yelled at her that what she was doing was a violation of privacy, her classmates' privacy. A serious one. Her mind jumped back a couple hours earlier when they were on their way back from combat practice with the rest of their class. It was the last session they had before beginning preparations for the school festival. What a time for a mix-up like this to happen. Rising to her feet, Mina looked to the door. Any second, she was expecting a knock to come at it and hear Izuku's voice, politely asking if he had some of his notebook. A minute passed, and that minute eventually became 5 in which no knock came. In addition to that, Mina hadn't moved from her desk to the door. If Izuku didn't come to her, she should have gone to him. After all, he could have used these notes. Inhaling through her nose, Mina put the notebook back in the bag, the same bag that had spilled across the ground hours before alongside Izuku's. They had 𝗵𝗲, 𝗵𝗃𝗃, and Kirishima to thank for being in such a hurry and crashing through anything in their way. That's what the promise of a special dinner would do, which even Mina herself felt a temptation to run for. Such a seemingly annoying but innocent act had yielded this strange opportunity. Reaching back down into her bag, Mina fished out another notebook, one whose title caught her eye. She knew that Izuku took notes on everything, especially anything hero or quirk related. That included notes on his classmates, including her. Those notes were in her hand, a navy blue notebook labeled Class 1A in black ink on the front cover. Within its pages were his thoughts on his classmates, including her. Mina felt her heart pounding at the possibility of seeing what Izuku really thought of her. It wasn't like she doubted what he said to her face. Izuku wasn't that kind of guy. It was just ... She felt like there was always more that he wasn't saying. He was a kind but shy guy who took a little coaxing to truly speak his mind. Well, those thoughts and feelings that normally occupied his mind had likely been put down on paper and now lay in her hands. Damn it. Come on, Mina, just go give it back to him. You're really about to cross a line here. She screamed at herself, trying to fight the urge within her. It was so damn hard. Falling back onto her bed, she stared up at the ceiling. It's Izuku. He'll understand ... Not to mention it's not like it'll hurt if I lie a little. She was aware that she was about to head down a slippery slope, but Mina was silently confident in herself. It was just going to be a little peek, and at this book and nothing else. Not even his notes. She could ask him to his face for those. Not to mention doing that would have been more fun, as she could have studied with him and had him explain concepts to her. Mina sighed as she sat upright. Just one little peek at my section, and that'll be it. That's all she would do. Then she'd returned Izuku's books. No damage done to her, him, or their relationship, so there was nothing to worry about, right? Izuku Midoriya, you have a package waiting for you at the mail office. The message had caught him by surprise, to say the least. A package for him. Who could have sent it? What was in it? Curiosity continuous swelled within him, as it always did. Had his mother sent him something from home? Had she found some room decoration that she thought he would like? As he walked to the mail office, Izuku began to entertain another thought. What if this package had came from his father, or another relative? The image of his maternal grandfather and great-aunt came to mind. The latter in particular tended to send him various gifts and sorts from her travels. Such was one of the perks of having a relative who was also a travel agent. Upon learning he'd finally made it into UA, upon suddenly manifesting his quirk, she'd sent him a model plane that he still treasured to this day. Thinking about it made Izuku's mind drift to another topic: the power of flight. He remembered that it was an ability that All Might had, likely coming from All for One. That inevitable led him to wondering if he could use that power himself. Flight was one of the most iconic and well-known quirks there was. When they first appeared, flight users became an icon of quirk users, and really the new world that was coming. Ordinary human beings couldn't fly, at least not without help, meaning the aid of machinery. Then quirks came along and people gained the ability to fly through various means. Izuku looked out the window toward the evening skies. With the sun's light gone, it would fall to the moon and stars to illuminate the night sky, that with some help from the city lights. That was something else that had changed in the last, well, near 1,000 years almost. When reading history books, Izuku was always quietly taken aback to how centuries ago, when the sun set, that was it, no light save for little torches and candle lights. When the sun fell, darkness was absolute. Nowadays, not so much, at least not in at least 80% of the world. Such was the benefit of being born into the modern era, the age of quirks. It was a blessing that Izuku woke up with every day and was grateful for. Just like how every day he was grateful that he was finally able to make his dreams a reality instead of just standing on the sidelines. Every time Izuku looked at the scars on his right hand, he was reminded that his dream came with a cost, one that he prepared himself to pay. Himself ... But the people around him, the people who loved and cared about him, was a bit of a different story. He thought back to Mina and the talk they shared on the bus ride back to the dorms yesterday. She was genuinely concerned about him and how much strain his quirk put on his body. Oh, if only she knew. Actually, hopefully, she'll never know. It wasn't like Izuku liked keeping secrets. He really didn't, but he recognized that sometimes they had to be kept. A jolt of fear raced through him as the image of a black-masked megalomaniac clawed its way into his mind. With it came a tight grip of fear that briefly held him in place. Young Midoriya, I know that the pressure of secrecy can become suffocating, but please, you must endure it. Not for your sake, but for the sake of those you love. His mentor had once told him when he felt himself near breaking point when his mother questioned him about his sudden quirk manifestation. She wasn't stupid, and if given enough pieces, she could certainly connect the dots, especially when it came to him. It wasn't out of simple malice or curiosity, but love for him. Izuku often looked to that same kind of caring love to keep the secret. The fear past Izuku pressed onward. One for All was locked away in the most secure prison on the planet, but the dominoes he'd set up were still falling. Their decent threatening to crush the world. Not a few of his classmates had anything to say about that, especially him. I'm here to pick up a package," he called, finally arriving at the mail office and walking up to the reception desk. "Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya. Ah, you're here at last." The receptionist, a man possessing bug-like antennas atop his face. "I'll be right with you in just a moment, please. Deguchi, I'm heading into the back to pick up one of the packages." Based on that statement, Izuku guessed it wasn't a letter or something. A part of him felt excited at the prospect of what it was he could be receiving. Was it something from his family, a past associate, or even admirer? He certainly hoped it hadn't come from someplace ... dark. Almost as quickly as the thought came to his mind, He banished it as he knew the school checked all the mail without opening it. If they could help it. "Midoriya, you're getting mail too," called a familiar voice. Looking back to the door, he saw his former adversary from the sports festival walk through the door. "Todoroki, yeah, I am. I don't know who it's from though. Probably my mom or maybe even my dad. What about you?" "I ordered a couple of things," he answered in a rather quiet voice. Izuku knew it. Whatever he'd ordered, he didn't want to publicize it, so Izuku wouldn't. "Midoriya, can I ask you a question?" Sure." The look on his dualistic teen's face was of deep thought. Todoroki wasn't exactly someone who tried to hide his emotions, though that was because he simply didn't let them show too often. In a lot of ways, he was like the ice that he used to primarily manipulate. That said, ice thawed out with time, just like he had. Todoroki looked away from him and off to the side wall. Whatever this was, it seemed to be something that was pushing him to the edge. "Have you your social, Midoriya? You have good relations with almost all of our classmates." I guess I sort of do." "You do," the red-eyed white-haired teenager responded, a hint of a smile on his face. "You're like I said, you're a lot more socially adept than me. It seems that you've been getting close to Ashido lately." Izuku immediately blushed at the statement, which was true. "You've been able to get her to spend time with you. I was wondering how did you do that?" If Todoroki could see inside of Izuku's mind, he might have retracted every statement he'd just made. Sure, he was friendly with almost everyone in their class, but he was not a social creature. Not like Mina, whose ability to be forward he admired. He wished that he could be that confident. Well, why you were there in class when I woke her up using my quirk. Why you know how that ended up going?" "Well, partially," he said. "What I mean is were you nervous about spending more time with her?" "Yes," he answered back in a heartbeat. "Truth be told, she actually proposed we hang out together and I accepted. After spending detention together, we got to know each other a little better. Once I started getting." The realization slowly dawned on him, leaving the superpowered teen at a bit of a loss for words. "Todoroki, you is there someone you're trying to get close to?" It was his turn to blink in surprise, and perhaps even embarrassment. "Of a sort. There's someone whom I have to make a request to say I'm nervous about it. I've been there before." The green-haired boy smiled. "It can be scary, but you should go for it. Ask her to spend some time with you, and I'm sure she'll agree. You're a pretty nice guy, Todoroki." "Thank you. I think the same of you, Midoriya," responded the scar-faced student, his lips curving into another small smile. Boys," called the receptionist, catching their attention. "Your packages are right here." The look to the counter, and both teens promptly went wide-eyed. Izuku held up a finger and pointed at the larger rectangular box. The receptionist nodded. "Yep, this is yours. Kind of heavy to be honest. As for you, Todoroki, this one here is yours." His finger jabbed at the square-shaped box that was little more than half the size of Izuku's box. Todoroki would have been lying if he didn't admit to being curious as to what Izuku could have gotten that was that large. Even more curious was that apparently even he didn't know what it was. Yet anyway, Izuku took the book in hand, holding it between his arms in spite of the weight it must have had. I guess I'll have some unwrapping to do tonight, and you will too, huh?" "It seems we do." "Midoriya, thank you for the advice," Todoroki said, giving him a slight bow. "You're welcome, even though it feels like I really didn't give you much advice, at least not what I think is good advice. And good luck." Well, whoever this person is, they've got Todoroki all nervous. The idea wasn't too crazy to believe. Truth be told, Todoroki actually had his share of admirers, though Izuku believed some of that was due to him being Endeavor's son or something superficial like his performance at the sports festival. Only a handful of people knew him beyond that, and Izuku felt like he was one of them. That said, there was still much about his classmate that he didn't know. He never felt like priding him. Izuku himself was a private person, and he tried to give others the same privacy that he preferred. And there were those who poked holes in that privacy, even if they did it unknowingly. He thought Mina was like that. In a way, those people might have been blessings in disguise as they helped people like him come out of their comfort zone. On top of that, maybe it wasn't too much of a stretch to say that they partially became part of his comfort zone. Amazing what changes a day and a half could make in turning two classmates, associates, into friends. Izuku made sure he didn't completely lose himself to his thoughts. He was carrying a somewhat heavy box, and the last thing he wanted was to bump into someone. Call it a hunch, but something told him it was best not to let it fall to the ground. He glanced at the UPS label and saw it came from America, which meant it was something his father had sent. Admittedly, that put an extra pep in his step as he returned to his dorm room. Of course, as he did, he got a few looks and questions from his classmates, who naturally took notice of the box he was carrying. The only answer he could give them was a gift from his parents, which was technically true. Knowing his friends, though, they'd all no doubt assume he was talking about his mother. Using his foot, he pushed the door open and stumbled in. placing the box on the floor and sitting on the bed. "All right, Dad, time to see what it is you sent me." Going to his drawer, he pulled out a box cutter and set about cutting the tap that bound the edges of the package. Flipping the top open, the first thing that drew Izuku's attention was a white envelope, a letter. He held it in one hand while pulling away the wrapping that lay underneath it, and by extension, whatever else was in the box. Izuku's eyes widened as he saw what lay underneath. Those are. Placing the letter atop the bed, he reached down to grasp the first of the 2 discs that had came in the package. No, they weren't simply discs, they were albums, musically albums. Izuku held the first in his hand like it was a bird's egg, the chick inside seconds away from coming into the world. Actually, he was staring at it like the chick had just emerged into the world, allowing him to witness the miracle of life. Light reflected off the polished record that he turned over in his hand. It felt slightly warm in his hands. Izuku's eyes moved from the record to the cover it had came in. Immediately, he recognized the singer, to be American, African American to be exact. He marveled at it for a minute, then began to dig through the rest of the trio of albums that lay atop the heavy metal object that was the center of most of the weight. The glistening records told him what that object was. Izuku's heart pounded at his mouth stayed sealed open. Eye at each record, in perfect condition. Upon closer examination of each, Izuku noticed a line of light blue circuitry running through them. Running his fingers along the first record, he could feel the circuitry items. Putting the 2 albums on the side of his bed, Izuku reached down into the box with both hands. Gently, he lifted the seemingly authentic record player into his lap. His already twinkling eyes glowed even brighter as he looked over the old-school machine. Or at least, it looked old-school. From the records that lay at his right side, Izuku knew the device on his lap wasn't a vintage piece of musical enjoyment from a bygone era, but it had been constructed to replicate it. From what he saw, it had been built to do a good job of that. Though it looked like plain old wood, Izuku knew the base was lined with state-of-the-art technology, including up-to-date speakers and volume control, which could be controlled by the equally authentic-looking numbs on the front. Running his hand across the glass, and he could tell it was made out of a special polymer that was no doubt resistant to the lowest levels of superhuman strength. Izuku had a feeling that his father had specifically picked it out with knowledge of his newly awakened super strength, or the possibility that the player would be the unfortunate target of some random object throw or dropped on it. Either way, it was a nice touch. Continuing to look it over, Izuku's suspicions were further confirmed as he saw the various outlets for headphones and iPods. In spite of those things, he knew the needle could still play as well as an ordinary record player could. Izuku was tempted to hook it up and give it a spin. He didn't do that though, putting the music player back into its box and setting it back into the larger packaging box, his heart silently pounding in his chest. He reached for the envelope and tore it open, pulling out the letter within. It was typed, of course, but that didn't diminish the warmth Izuku felt in reading it. The words were what counted in his opinion. Dear Izuku, it's been about a month since I last wrote to you, but by that time it seems quite a lot has happened to you. Given the career path you've chosen and your school, it's not too surprising. For you mother though, it's cause for concern. I won't lie to you, she's not alone. When I heard exactly what it was you were involved with, I was worried sick. Villains are one thing, but the Yakuza, frankly, I'm surprised they're even still around. Though I imagine after this latest debacle they might retreat even further underground and likely stay there. When you said you wanted to become a hero, I knew there were going to be a lot of dangers that you would face. Some of them ... Well, Izuku, I know I may not seem like an expert, but the world can be filled with terrifying things, but it can also be filled with some good things. And I'm happy you discovered such during your time at UA. I'm happy that you're apparently still thriving there like I hoped you would. To help with that, I sent you this little gift. You've always liked music, though you never really took it as a hobby. It can be relaxing though, and the life of a student at a superhero student can call for some of that. Office life can be a drag and at the same time quite taxing. But it has its perks, as you've no doubt seen. This record player is based off some of the more popular models from the latter half of the 20th century. It was a gift from a friend I made while working on the job. She works in the musical division of the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 company, so it's top-notch. As for the records, well, that's something of a personal taste. As you know, I've always had a bit of a side interest in music. It's nothing compared to your interest in heroes, but I like to believe I've found some great musicians to listen to. As it happens, quite a few seem to have came from the US during the late 20th century. You'll have to forgive your old man for being, well, old-fashioned tastes, but I believe they're good ones. Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell are two such ones. At least I believe they are. I listened to this one song that they did together and it made me think of you. I'm sure you'll figure out which one it is. Listening to that one song led me to more. Thus these 2 albums that I scored the market for. You don't have to listen to them. Hang them on the walls if you want. Hell, show them off to a girl. If you're ever feeling a little down or need something to relax to, just put the needle on and let the music play. It worked wonders for me, and I'm hoping it'll be the same for you. If you want to talk more, then please either give me an email or try to call me up for a video chat. Both of us lead busy lives. But as your father, I'd like to know that you're doing all right, and I want you to know that I'm doing all right too. By the way, I haven't forgotten about our marriage anniversary. I'm going to try to make it back in time for it, though well, I'm going to do my best, which hopefully be enough. Sincerely, your father. Hisashi Izuku could feel his eyes beginning to water a little. He couldn't help it. He was a sentimental person, just like his mother. His father seemed to be the only one of the family who wasn't a softie, at least most of the time anyway. Izuku remembered him telling him that he always had a soft spot for that sentimentality, and it's what drew him to his mother. She'd passed the trait down to him, something he always took in strides. He was going to write his father back, send him an email at best. The question was when would be the best time to do it. Izuku knew his father had become quite busy since his work took him overseas. That didn't mean he severed all contact with his family. Putting the letter aside, he reached back for the first album that he'd pulled out. His English was decent enough that he could read whole paragraphs and listen to a few songs. Foreign language was another subject that he studied, especially after the battle against 𝐿. If he was going to be All Might's successor, he accepted that would likely mean traveling overseas. For times like this, his ability to understand English was going to serve a more leisure purpose. In minutes, he had the record player set up on his desk, the record in hand as he prepared to insert it. Sucking in a breath, he inserted it, then put the needle. The second the song began, Izuku found himself enamored with the beat. Listen baby, ain't no mountain high, ain't no valley low, ain't no river wide enough. Baby, if you need me, call me no matter where you are, no matter how far, don't worry. Baby, just call my name. I'll be there in a hurry, you don't have to worry, cause baby, there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you. Baby, remember the day I set you free. I told you could always count on me, darling, and from that day on I made a vow I'll be there when you want me to some way. Somehow, cause baby, there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you. Baby, ooh, no, darling, no wind, no rain, ooh, winter's cold as cold can't stop me. Baby, no, baby, cause you're my 𝐿𝐵. If you're ever in trouble, I'll be there on the double, just send for me. Oh, baby, my love is alive way down in my heart, although we are miles apart. If you ever need a helping hand, I'll be there on the double just as fast as I can. Don't know that there's ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you. Baby, ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough. In the serene vacuum that the song's ending left, Izuku realized he'd sat down in his chair, his foot having tapped to the rhythm of the song. It was pretty good, he whispered with a smile. I listened to this one song that they did together and it made me think of you. I'm sure you'll figure out which one it is. Dad, he whispered, moving his finger to the holographic display panel. Mere seconds before it was about to move on to the next song, the record stopped, leaving Izuku alone in the blissfully silence of his room. On the outside, it was silent. On the inside, the song was replying, overlapped with the words in his father's letter. Ain't no mountain high ... I ain't no valley low. The green-haired teenager repeated. Ain't no river wide enough ... If you need me, call me. There's no need to fear, I am here. That was his mentor's catchphrase. In inheriting All Might's powers 𝐷𝗛𝗡, Izuku wondered if one day he'd be worthy to use it himself. Could he ever inspire that level of hope? That was another potential responsibility that secretly scared Izuku. How could he inspire that kind of hope? He hit the replay button, starting the R&B song all over again. Izuku closed eyes and lost himself in the beat for the second time. That second time became a third. It was clear the song was meant to be of one between lovers ... But Izuku couldn't help but feel it also could have just meant between any two people or more that shared a close bond. Ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you. He couldn't place it, but there was something infinitely comforting in those words. Even if the bond wasn't one of love, the yearning to protect was still there, and nothing would impede it. It was resolve like that which Izuku believed fueled heroes to save those in danger. Having said that, Midoriya, would you ever go that far to rescue anyone else? Like me? Izuku could have sworn Mina was right there with him, repeating the words she'd spoken in response to his statement about their rescue of Bakugo. I'll rescue you. Of course, I would, Ashido. That had been his answer, and he'd meant it. Cause baby, there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you. Baby, those lyrics stuck with him, especially when he thought of Mina's wonderful smiling face. She was pretty, very pretty. If she was in trouble, he would go through hell and high water to rescue her, just like he would for anyone else. Yet, I've already admitted that I have a crush on her. One half of his conscious mind declared. He'd accepted that, but Izuku was still lost on what came next. Was he supposed to confess to her? Hold it in and wait and see. Wait for what? Another more interesting guy to come and swoop her off her feet. In all fairness, that was the most likely thing to happen ... and ... maybe for the best. Izuku didn't need to look at himself in the mirror to realize he wasn't boyfriend material. Not for someone like Mina Ashido. But ... what if she? Maybe if she could ... see me in that way. He contemplated, his heart silently thumping in his chest. He leaned forward and laced his hands together. Izuku imagined them holding Mina's. He imagined running his hand along her horns again. It wasn't like he had a fetish, at least Izuku hoped he didn't. Mina's horns were pretty cool. They helped her stand out along with her pink skin, her eyes, and her shining personality. They made her one of the prettiest and coolest girls he'd ever met. Unfortunately, that left him back at the same answerless problem. What was there to do now? You don't have to listen to them. Hang them on the walls if you want. Hell, show them off to a girl. He knew that Mina was a vibrant girl who liked music and dancing. Izuku looked to the record player and the albums that now lay on his desk. Would she go for anything so ... old? As in practically 2 centuries old. Sighing, he pressed the play button and allowed the rest of the songs on the album to continue playing. Perhaps he'd find a tune or two that Mina might like, or one that might give him a solution on how to deal with these feelings. Plus, he really wanted to hear the rest of the album. Perhaps he'd be joining his father as a fan of the old school. It was a slightly chilly but still surprisingly warm day. Everyone hoped that this pleasant weather continued for a few more days into the culture festival. Mina certainly hoped so. She hoped this warm weather lasted as long as possible. It's not that she hated fall and winter. Spring and summer were simply more her speed. They'd come around again. It wasn't like the world was going to end. At least Mina hoped it didn't end. But if it seemed it was going to, she'd do everything in her power to stop it. So would the rest of her classmates, including Izuku. Mina could feel her heart quicken at the thought of her green-haired classmate. She'd gone to bed thinking about him and she'd woken up thinking about him. It was hard not to, considering she'd spent almost the entirety of last night reading some of his private journals which contained his deepest thoughts about what he thought of his classmates, including her. Mina planned on giving them back to him ... and apologizing. The second she saw him at breakfast, she felt a mixture of happiness and dread. It was only made worse when Izuku waved back at her. "Hey, Ashido. Good morning." His voice flipped a switch within her. On one hand, she felt nervousness seize her by the throat, yet Mina truly felt her heart beat a few ticks faster. It was beating in joy. The latter wore out over the former, giving her the ability to smile. "So, hey, I guess you didn't watch anything too traumatizing last night, did you?" "No, in fact, I actually got a pretty good night's sleep," he responded with a bright smile that affirmed his words. That was both reassuring and troubling to Mina. She guessed that Izuku hadn't noticed some of his notebooks were missing. If he had, he likely would have been asking around, including asking her if she knew where they were. That would have made this much easier. "I'm happy to hear that. Matter of fact, you're one guy I think definitely deserves a good night's sleep after all the crap you've been through over the last couple of days. Hey, I told you, I don't hold the detention against you. In fact, I'm actually grateful for it. I got to help out a friend and spend more time with her." Izuku responded with that innocent charm that she was beginning to find appealing. It's Izuku. Kind, selfless, dorky Izuku. He'll understand ... and maybe ... he'll. "Well, I'm happy I got to spend more time with you too, Izuku. So happy that I'd like to do it again today, if you don't mind." As she expected, his freckled cheeks took on a pinkish-red hue. Yet again, Mina felt proud at being able to induce such a colorful reaction. Actually, can I talk to you at lunch? There's something I have to tell you." Something you have to tell me?" Sure." Mina could see that he detected something by the way she was talking. He was perspective in ways that made her think he'd make a good detective. A cute, bubbling investigator. "Great, we'll meet in the same place we did yesterday. And hopefully we won't have to deal with rampaging golems today." She finished with a laugh. Izuku laughed back. It would make for some nice practice for this afternoon. Admittedly, the thought of spending another afternoon training with him made her heart flutter. In fact, Mina realized she just liked the prospect of spending time with Izuku, period. She wanted more of it. "True, I'm hoping I'll be able to help you do what you did for me. I'd love to have a sharpshooting competition with you at the festival. In fact, I could help you practice your footwork for the dance-off." Dance-off, exclaimed the freckle-faced boy. Yep, it's a culture festival. So, of course there's going to be some dancing, and some singing, and some other fun stuff I'm guessing. Will you terrified, right? She pressed with a grin. Why yeah, pretty much. He responded with a nervous laugh. To be fair, it didn't take an analyst to figure out he was more of the bookie type. Mina knew that, but she also knew that wouldn't stop him if he had the right motivation. Say, if I were to say I needed a dance partner, would you be willing? She knew what she was doing, leaning forward and smiling at her while batting her pink eyelashes. Izuku's face went redder than Kirishima's hair. Aye. Why yes. Her heart nearly exploded enjoying hearing that. Mina knew what his answer would be, but it just felt so good hearing it. And while he was blushing too. That too cute blush that almost always had her cracking up in joy. Great, now that that's settled, let's go get some breakfast. It felt good to feel his hand squeeze hers back as she dragged him along, again. Of course, the way Izuku saw it, she was dragging him anywhere, she was leading him, and he was happily following. To Mina's relief, it stayed warm, at least for the most part. Even better, it seemed that this lunch was going to be peaceful. At least it looked that way. Mina knew anything could change, especially at UA. It was actually something about the school she liked. The good weather gave her an extra bit of courage to do what needed to be done. Sucking in a breath, she reached down into her school bag. Midoriya, she called. He looked straight at her, calling her name back in curiosity. Her heart beating in the confines of her chest, she set down the stack of notebooks and pushed them forward. I'm sorry. Mina watched him tentatively pick up and examine the first one on the stack. It was like watching a time bomb ticking down to zero. She definitely feared the seconds away blast. I didn't steal them. It was a mix-up. Honest. Okay, maybe she was more than a little anxious. Izuku's eyes were wide as he read the title. Written on in black marker that he knew. He could practically still smell the marker ink as if it were still fresh. His fingers trembled as he reached to flip the cover open to the first page. His eyes bulged and his skin paled as he skimmed through the notebook. He closed it shut, then reached for the next one, his eyes widening and his skin getting paler as he repeated the process. Then he did it again with the third book. Mina, bubbly excitable Mina, was as quiet as a statue as he repeated the process 2 more times until he got to the last notebook. Fear driving her heartbeat, she reached back down into her bag. She deliberately withheld from giving back all of his notebooks. Biting her lip, she gripped the last notebook, a navy blue one that she'd stayed up almost past midnight reading. It was also the book she knew Izuku would have probably exploded in totally understandable anger at her reading. Mina's hands trembled as he took the notebook from her. Todoroki might as well have had his half-cold quirk active and focused solely on her. All around them, the lunch period continued, not one of the other students paying a second's thought to the drama unfolding between the 2 freshman students. Izuku had yet to even open the notebook, something that actually frightened the horned girl. Silence was always the worst. It was practically toxic to a hyperactive bundle of talkative energy like Mina. She saw only one way out of this. I'm sorry. Stunned yellow eyes stared into stunned green eyes. Mina's mouth hung open as her ears rung. What? She asked. I am sorry, Ashido. Izuku repeated, bowing his head, obscuring his red-tinted cheeks. What? I accidentally took his notebook and read it ... and Izuku thinks he's the one who should be apologizing. The pink-skinned girl exclaimed in her head. Mina was in seriously doubt that this was happening. Midoriya. I'm sorry. To write those things about you and the rest of our classmates. It's Izuku. His first name rolled off her lips so easily. Mina felt like she was used to saying it. The frost that had once covered her burned away, allowing her to move. She reached out and grabbed his left hand with her right hand and placed it atop the notebook labeled with their class number. You don't have a thing to apologize for. Seriously, if anything, what's in here proves that you're probably the smartest and most perspective guy of the whole class. It's why when the shit hits the fan, we can all look to you to lead us out of it. Hell, all these books prove that. They prove you're really dedicated to being a hero, maybe more so than the rest of us. The green-haired boy stared at her in slack-jawed awe at her speech. It was clear that her speech wasn't the response that he'd thought he'd get from her. Something about that troubled Mina. A cold breeze blew across the dining area, though it didn't bother either Izuku or Mina. For the former, he felt like an Arctic wind could have been blowing, freezing everything in its path ... and he wouldn't have gotten so much as a shiver. All he felt was warmth. Mina, he whispered. Smiling at him, she said, you know ... if you want to call me by my first name. If you do, I'd like to be able to do the same to you. Sure. Why did being around her make him speak before his brain could catch up to his mouth? Maybe that's part of having a crush on someone. And having that someone sitting across from you ... and holding your hand. He liked having Mina close, and he liked the prospect of being able to call her by her first name. And giving her that permission, though, it meant acknowledging his more personable relationship with her. Izuku had to look deep inside himself and realize that he wanted that a lot. Mina, he finally spoke with a smile. The Ppinkett's smile was practically ear to ear. Izuku, I'm flattered to know that you think of me that way. His smile became frozen onto his face as sweat rapidly began to accumulate on his brow. That ... way. She giggled at how he was feigning ignorance. In terms of looks ... that you think I'm the cutest girl in class. Grinning, she began to gently massage his hand. You know, a girl loves hearing that, especially a girl like me. Her smile went from audacious to more serene. I'm proud of how I look, but ... when someone calls me ... cute, compares me to the shining sun, Well, it makes my heart beat a little faster, you know. It makes me think a lot about the person who made that compliment. His cheeks were blazing like a furnace, and there was no shower that Izuku could summon to put them out. Not even the curtain of sweat practically falling down his forehead seemed to be enough. How it had yet to evaporate from the heat surging within him, Izuku would have loved to know. At the moment, though, he had other things to focus on, like the fact that his crush was essentially confessing to him. Yes, confessing to him. This was the last thing he was expecting to happen when he woke up this morning. Your entry ... it's incomplete. I wasn't able to update it before I misplaced it. That was all he could see, his gaze now focused on the table and his class 1 notebook. Even so, you're practically written a decent enough portfolio on everyone in class. Actually, it makes me a little scared to spar with you since you pretty much know all of our weaknesses. But you also wrote down how we could cover our weaknesses. For example, you've analyzed and calculated the temperatures that Todoroki needs to keep in equilibrium using his quirk, the heat and explosive force of Bakugo's explosions. You've estimated how long Ida can run and how he can stretch out his run time. With me ... you've already started running the numbers with my quirk, and we only talked about it for like 1 day. Rather than down, he simply looked away, his cheeks still aflame. Yeah, I guess I'm weird like that. And like I said, it's a cute kind of weird. Mina giggled. You're cute, strong, and smart. Now that's what I'd call a winning combination. Tying it up as your kindness, Izuku, you're probably one of the kindest people that I know. Reading your journal just proved it. Normally, I'd expect some snarky comments and insults above everyone, including Minta, but you had some positive things to say about him, some of which are actually true. She laughed at the way his blush deepened. Don't worry though, I won't go blabbing what I read in there. All those things, those were your private thoughts, including ones about ... me. Izuku was struck by just how weird his life was. At one point, it was completely ordinary being a quirkless kid, a world filled with quirks. A world where a quirkless person like him had about as much of a chance of becoming a hero as a cat did of swimming the 7 seas. Then by pure chance, he met his idol and in becoming his successor, gained a quirk. How likely were any of those things to happen? How likely was it that the evening he misplaced one of his notebooks, he realized he'd gained a crush on one of his classmates? Izuku was tempted to say that he'd gotten lucky. If he'd lost his class journal today, he'd have had time to put down his recent feelings about Mina along with the developments they'd made in her acid quirk. The latter one wasn't so bad really. The former, he dreaded to think about it, even as his feelings were being deciphered right before him. Hey, Izuku, called the pink-skinned girl. Those things you wrote in this notebook ... you ... meant them, right? There was a slight hesitancy in her voice that surprised him. Just as surprising was the faint change in the coloration of her cheeks. Mina's pink cheeks had gotten pinker, which answered the question of if her skin could get any pinker. They apparently could. Mina, every word that I wrote down in those books, I meant them, especially when it came to you and the rest of our class. His heart was beating fast, yet Izuku found himself remaining calm. A familiar clarity had descended over him. It held Eve as he raised his head and looked into Mina's yellow and black eyes. Izuku actually felt his focus magnify as he stared back at her. His cheeks were still the color of autumn leaves, but that didn't stop him from speaking his mind or his heart. Ashido is ... the color pink really suits her. When I look at her, it makes me think of the sun, radiant and life-giving. Her personality completes it. She's such social and friendly, inviting and encouraging. She's like that with everyone, kind of like how the sun doesn't pick and choose where it shines. It just does, like her. Even when she suffers a setback, she picks herself up and keeps on going. The sun always comes out through the clouds. She stared at the green and black-haired boy like he'd just recited poetry. As far as Mina was concerned, that's practically what Izuku Midoriya just did. Suddenly, she removed her hand from his, something that caused Izuku to tense up with fear. He'd just scared her off, he knew it. At the very least, he could take her rejection with a little bit of MMMPMMH. To say that he was shocked would have been a colossal understatement. Mina was kissing him. Mina Ashido was kissing him. Mina Ashido was kissing. Mina Ashido was kissing him. On the lips. Then she wasn't. But the lingering taste of her lips remained on Izuku's. Her eyes stared back at his. Her lips parted as she giggled. Hey, having said all that, would that be like getting kissed by the sun? Was it possible for his head to get any hotter? Izuku felt like he was hosting an erupting volcano in his head, the magma flow turning his cheeks bright red. In spite of that, he was able to dumbfoundedly nod in response to her question. Giggling, Mina reached out and laced her arms around Izuku's neck, causing him to further blush. Was he trying to discover a new shade of red? And would you be happy if I did that? Again? Yes, he squeaked. And if I did it again? She grinned. Why yes, Izuku responded. And again, Mina egged on. Yes, it felt like his entire vocabulary had been erased save for that one word. If I asked to be your girlfriend, would you say yes, instead of an automatic response? There was hesitation. Izuku blinked. He could feel himself blinking. He finally regained the ability to comprehend exactly what was happening. His face was still as red as a tomato though, maybe even redder. It felt as hot as molten lava, and he could feel it getting even hotter. Hundreds of beads of sweat were sliding down his skin. For him, it felt like it was the heart of summer instead of the beginning of fall. Behind her smile, Mina felt nervous. She was making this up as she went along. Though she was an optimist, and she was confident that she had a bead on what kind of person Izuku was and what his response would be. First, of course, there was the awe in which he looked to her with. Mina, do you really mean that? I mean, I am an incredibly awesome, smart, and kind guy. The kind of guy I think I want to be around. And kiss, and hug, and cuddle up to. Their faces were close enough that the tips of their hair were brushing up against each other. They held one another's stare as their respective hearts thundered in their chests. Both of them knew that this was a pivotal moment in their lives, one that had practically came out of nowhere. Izuku, you're so much better than you think you are. You may not think so, but I do, and so does everyone else in our class. Maybe even Bakugo. If I were your girlfriend, I'd do my best to make you the happiest guy at UA. Izuku was happy when he was accepted into UA, but he found that over time he became happier. Not only was he on the path to achieving his dream of becoming a hero, he had made friends. All unique and even a little weird in their own ways, but friends nonetheless. They were all people he'd gladly put his life on the line for, or in the case of some, his academic record. He did that for Mina, and he'd do it for her again and again, especially if the consequences included being able to spend more time with her. Izuku felt his heart in a constant flutter whenever she was around, which was funny because they'd only gotten to know each other over the last 2 days. But all relationships started somewhere, right? Mina, he finally spoke, catching her attention. I feel like I should be the one making that promise to you. For a second, she seemed stunned by his words, but her surprise quickly melted away into a warm smile. And that's another reason why I think you'd be a great guy to have as a boyfriend. You're so darn chivalrous. Practically my dorky green knight who can punch out giant robots and leap across buildings. Speaking of which, would you be willing to take me up one day? Take you up? What do you mean? He asked, getting a funny feeling in his chest. Giggling again, Mina sat back down directly across from him. Izuku was actually a little saddened as he was enjoying having her arms wrapped around his neck and her face so close to his. He really would have liked another kiss, this one being one he was able to consciously enjoy. Maybe once Mina had explained herself, he could ask her if she would and no. He was going to give her an answer to her question. You know, look, you know heroes, right? Mina did something Izuku never thought he'd see her do. Both her index fingers came together and a thick blush turned her pink cheeks darker, almost to the point they seemed to be turning purple. You know how in some cases heroes can get together. Heroes, heroines, civilians. You know. He nodded, and he did so with a slight blush, showing he had an idea of where she was going. Well, some people, girls like me, like it when their guys can just carry them off, or fly off with them. Izuku knew what she was talking about. He just didn't seem able to place himself in that position, carrying a girl in his arms while flying away. In fact, Izuku outright couldn't fly, but he could leap across great distances. That counted for something, right? Doing those sorts of things, he spoke. Why, you'd trust me to not let you fall. Yep. Her trademark optimistic smile came back in a flash. Izuku was happy to see it back. Izuku, I could be falling from the highest skyscraper in the world and I'd trust you to catch me. Izuku's heart thumped on his chest at those words. I'd trust you to do the same. Again, his mouth moved before his brain could. It was his heart that had driven the words out. I'd trust you to watch my back in a fight, Mina. I'd trust you to have my You'd trust me not to break your heart, she suggested with a hopefully light in her yellow eyes. He nodded. I'd do my best to be the best boyfriend in the world for you, Mina. I'd like to try to be. Relief and joy mixed within the acid-throwing girl and exploded through the rest of her body. For the second time, she got up from her seat and walked over to Izuku. This time, she was ready as she threw her arms around him, burying herself in the crux of his neck and shoulder. He compared her to the sun, but he was pretty radiant himself. She was going to enjoy treasuring that radiance. Then I guess we're boyfriend and girlfriend from now on, she happily expressed. I guess we are. Izuku responded back with a laugh. So, what now? Now, we enjoy lunch. Mina responded with a giddy smile. Our first lunch as a couple. Before that though. Leaning forward, she placed a gentle kiss on his cheek that caused his face to further blush. Thanks for not being mad about me reading your books. I promise, it'll never happen again. Mina, he began moving his arms around her waist. She nearly jumped in feeling his arms around her. It was a simple misunderstanding. How could I ever be angry with you over that? His words brought more welcome relief to her, which resulted in another hug. He wholeheartedly welcomed it. If you want, I'd loan you any of my notebooks. All you'd have to do is ask. Her heart having gone into overdrive, Mina showered her new boyfriend with kisses, which left him quite flustered. Every kiss melted away whatever remained of the heroic nerd's nervousness. Not that there was much of it left by this point. He also felt like he was getting used to the physical affection Mina often handed out. Somewhere inside he had been craving it. Given their new relationship status, that craving was going to be sated. So, like I said, let's have our first lunch together as boyfriend and girlfriend. Giving him one last kiss on the cheek, she moved back to the seat directly across from him. Here they were back at the start, only their relationship having undergone a change for the better. The sense of relief was still running through her, and apparently it was also running through Izuku as well. So, you've been updating these all year, haven't you? Why, yeah. When it comes to pros, most of what can be said about them has been said and written down. For younger heroes, like us, well, our stories are still being written, the acidic girl proclaimed. That includes your story, Izuku. At first, he smiled at her, but his gaze drifted down to the table. She'd always been quietly observant of everyone around her, including Izuku. He was capable of so much, but his confidence was weighed down by his doubts. For the life of her, Mina wondered what had happened to give him such an inferiority complex. She suspected Bakugo might have had something to do with it, but she decided not to dwell on that. Her boyfriend was looking like he could use her help. Mina, where do you think my story will end? She'd seen the question coming a mile away. It'll end with you as one of the greatest heroes that ever lived. Right alongside me, of course, boldly declared the horned girl. What about me? Do you think I'll be right there alongside you? Izuku pictured himself, standing proud and ready to defend the peace of the world. He always knew getting there wasn't going to be easy. He'd learned that firsthand over the last several months of attending UA. In spite of the hardships, he'd endured and kept marching onward. Now, as he sat across from his new girlfriend, he pictured her at his side. A subconscious smile blossomed on his face, in clear view of the pink-skinned girl. You will be. While Mina had already gotten an answer in his expression, it was awesome to hear it with her own ears. Awesome, now come on, let's eat, she exclaimed. Their talk, though very much needed and appreciated in the long run, had eaten up almost 3/4 of their lunch block, a fact they were made aware of almost 10 minutes later when the bell rang. Both young heroes were caught by surprise. But acceptance it. Sure, they'd lost time to eat, but they'd gotten something better in return. Not to mention Mina promised to make it up to Izuku. He tried to wave her off only to get a response that made the volcano in his completely blow its lid. It'll be our first date, Mina proclaimed, having grabbed his hand and giving it a tight squeeze. Date. Our first date. Our first date, mentally repeated the inheritor of One for All. I'm going on a date. We're going on a date. He'd go the rest of the day with an incredibly strange mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling within him, constantly battling for dominance. At times, the former got the edge over the latter. Those were the times Izuku found himself sneaking aside glances at Mina, who shot him those same looks back. They always came with a smile, and Izuku always smiled back. Admittedly, both of them could feel their stomachs beginning to growl by the time the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Given they'd only had about 10 minutes to eat, not even fully finishing off their lunch, it wasn't too surprising. Mina had a plan to remedy that though. Izuku had no idea what his girlfriend had planned, but he had fully confidence in her. He was also a little curious as to what sort of places she liked to visit in her free time. She was also going to get a look at the kinds of places he visited in due time as well. It was of no surprise to him that she was guiding him to Hamamoto Mall. Practically all their classmates frequented it just as much as the rest of the city's occupants, including Izuku. If you were looking for a certain store, it was there, you just had to look for it. By looking, you'd also potentially find something else of interest. That had certainly happened to Izuku and Mina. When it came to places to eat, Hamamoto had quite a wide selection. Personally, Izuku had tried a few, including a taco restaurant on the second floor. He'd surprisingly came to like them a lot. Izuku genuinely wondered what kind of food Mina liked. Crazy as it sounded, he was looking forward to finding out so that he could treat her to that kind of food more often in the future. Hey, Izuku, called his pink-haired classmate. Are you nervous? Here they were at the door, practically the doors of destiny. Yeah, I've never had a girlfriend before. That's fine. I've never had a boyfriend before, she responded in a casual tone. His eyes slightly widened, causing her to laugh. I've never met a guy like you, who I think it's worth it to take a dive with. As for how you see me, you're one of the most incredible girls I've ever met. He really was going to have to work to get this impulse under control. Then again, it awarded him another kiss on the cheek, which he very much appreciated. Okay, maybe it's not so bad after all. I seriously don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try to make you the happiest girl in the world, Mina. When it came to declarations like that, Mina could typically tell when someone was being honest or lying. As far as she could tell, when he was making promises, 𝗂𝗍𝗵𝗲 never lied. It was something about him that she admired. Mina had a feeling in the future it was something about him that she'd come to maybe love. The freckle-faced boy's cheeks lit up as he received another kiss on the cheek. "You're on your way, 𝗂𝗍𝗄. Now come on, let's go get lunch, for real." Hand in hand, the couple walked through the doors, off to the first date of their relationship. The first in what would eventually become a long and happy line. "Don't panic, 𝗂𝗍𝗄. You can do this. You can do this. Just treat her right and everything will be fine. And you'll be able to do this again with her." The last thought repeated itself in 𝗂𝗍𝗄's head like one of his records stuck on replay. His date with Mina had just started and already he was thinking of their next one. Was he really that smitten with her? One look at her right beside him and 𝗂𝗍𝗄 knew the answer yes, a resounding yes. Mina's face was bursting with glee. It wasn't just the fact that she was going to the mall, it was the fact that she was going to the mall with him. If all went well, this would only be the first of many such trips. 𝗂𝗍𝗄's heart swelled with excitement at that possibility. It made him squeeze her hand back in happy joy. She looked back at him and smiled. "Hey, 𝗂𝗍𝗄. Why yeah, all those notebooks that you've written, when did you first start writing them? Have you always done that? Have you done it ever since you got into Heroes?" she questioned. Within his head, a set of gears began to turn. Once they began, they couldn't be stopped. "You're right that it's something that I've always done. You can ask Ka-chan. I've always been a nerd, a hero nerd. Being that definitely made you into a great writer," his pink-skinned girlfriend declared. The gears in 𝗂𝗍𝗄's head suddenly grinded to a halt as he looked at her. Giggling, she reached for his right hand and laced their fingers together. His cheeks burned red and his eyes widened. It was just too cute for words. "Hey, after seeing your entire notebooks, I couldn't help but notice. You've got handwriting and drawing skills that I honestly wish that I had." Maybe it was the heat from their interlocked hands flowing into him that made him speak his next words. Mina, if that's how you feel, then maybe I can help you practice sometime." After his brain and correspondingly his mouth all ceased functions as the horned girl leaned up and planted a kiss on his cheek. Yet again, all he could do was stare at her with those wide eyes. At least his jaw hadn't hit the floor. "I'd love that, 𝗂𝗍𝗄," Mina declared with a smile that made the fire burning in his cheeks reach new temperatures. At some point, 𝗂𝗍𝗄 wondered if he was going to have something fall on his head, or he'd get hit by a speed car, or just outright walk into a wall, then he'd wake up from this incredible dream. Yet again, it was all real though, so happily real. He subconsciously gripped Mina's hand. He hoped that his palm hadn't become too sweaty to touch. So, anyway, why yeah, I suppose it's always been a hobby of mine. Over time, once I realized how often I did it, I started liking doing it." Technical, he wasn't lying her. 𝗂𝗍𝗄 was telling her the truth, but he wasn't telling her the whole truth. 𝗂𝗍𝗄 quietly wondered if he'd ever be able to tell her that his note-taking was actually his way of coping with the fact that he was quirkless. In that explanation, he'd have to admit to her that he didn't have a quirk and had been given it. Only the pain of death, Mina's death, would be enough to get him to divulge that secret. It was a good way for me to unwind. He prayed that she didn't pick apart his words. That's a pretty good way to unwind. For me, I do music, watching TV, and maybe dancing a little. Actually, sometimes I just put some music on and let myself tap away all the worry and stress that's been gnawing at me," she explained with a wistful smile on her face. 𝗂𝗍𝗄 smiled as well as he could see her doing all of those things, especially the dance part. "Hey, have you ever done your writing with music playing?" "No, I always thought of it as a distraction. Whenever I do it, I just want it to be me, the notebook, my pen, and silence." Upon saying the words, 𝗂𝗍𝗄 noted how different that made the two of them, or rather, it added another difference between them. Mina wanted to be active, even if she was fighting off negativity and stress. In contrast, he preferred silence so he could be alone with his thoughts. Sitting on it, he could see some charm in her way, even though his first impulse would be to say the music would distract him. Looking at Mina though, he felt that notion changing right before his eyes. Mina, what kind of music do you listen to in order to relax?" A light flashed in her eyes as she began to talk. She talked and he listened, his eyes sometimes widening and softening as she told him of her dozens of playlists. 𝗂𝗍𝗄 actually found it impressive that she knew so many songs. Then again, some of them were more genres than anything. His heart fluttered upon hearing that she had a taste for American jazz. Admittedly, he listened to it a few times. One memory in particular rose to the forefront of his mind, him as a 10-year curled up in his mother's arm on the couch. A nice jazzy track was playing on the apartment stereo. 𝗂𝗍𝗄 could close his eyes and drift back to that quiet and serene afternoon. Mina took notice of the blissful expression on his face. There was a part of her that wanted to know what memory she'd awakened, but she held back and simply enjoyed the tranquil look on her boyfriend's face. 𝗂𝗍𝗄's blushing face was cute, but there was something just so right about seeing him with a smile. I wouldn't be averse to trying that. It might make my writing a little bit easier. He mused. Here's hoping that you give it a try. His girlfriend offered. Like I said, music can be a great stress reliever. It's also great to dance to. In fact, music and dancing go together like popcorn and movies. Mina, how exactly did you get into dancing? Her eyes were already shining, but they lit up even more as he questioned her about the origins of her interests. She was more than happy that he did. It's something that I would do when I was little. My love of music is something that's just always been with me. My mom told me whenever it was playing, I would subconsciously shake and wave to the beat, which she found adorable. As I got older and realized what I was doing, everything else just sort of fell into place from there. I accepted that it was who I was, just like how I was born with pink skin and horns. They're what make you, well, you, 𝐒𝐫 affirmed with a cherry smile. His heart was already racing pretty fast. Perhaps it was that fast pace that led him to continue speaking instead of cutting it off there. And who you are ... is ... a pretty amazing person. Suddenly, the pink-skinned girl spun on the tip of her foot and wrapped her arms around the green and black-haired teenager. 𝗧𝗑 had a good 5 seconds to blush beet red, which Mina enjoyed seeing. Then she added to his blush by gently pressing their lips together. The fact that they were in public only made 𝗧𝗑's blush deepen. He was being kissed in public, by a cute and wonderful girl like Mina. This was like something out of a dream. Coincidentally, 𝗧𝗑 had found that dreams could actually come true. They could come true in the wildest way imaginable. Granted, any dreams he had regarding Mina were at best only a couple of days old. Just a couple of days old, and here they were as boyfriend and girlfriend. Talk about things moving fast. Upon pulling away from him, the acidic teenager grinned. You know, for a guy who stutters and sometimes trips over his words, you always seem to know just what to see to make a girl's heart race. A stream of stuttering words spilled from his lips, making Mina giggle and grin. She silenced him with a short but sweet kiss. He went silent and simply stared at her. I'd say the same thing about you, 𝗧𝗑. You're pretty amazing yourself. 𝗧𝗑's mind had been going at 1,000 miles a minute. Then, with Mina's kiss, it ground to a halt. Her words got it going again, and revved it up in the process. Why you? I'll try to live up to that praise. Mina. Silly, you already have, now come on. Minute by minute, he was getting more used to Mina's forwardness. 𝗧𝗑 honestly found solace in it. A lot of people said that he could be extremely forward himself, but that was only when the situation called for it. Otherwise, he was plain old timid Deku. The latter part, though, some had called into question, including his girlfriend. 𝗧𝗑 wondered if he could ever be like Mina, that outgoing all the time. It would certainly help him to become more like 𝗲𝗏 if he did. Truth be told, he admired people like his idol, and people like Mina. It was one of the reasons he'd grown attracted to her. He hoped that she never lost that forwardness. Some part of him said he wanted to protect it, as illogical as it sounded. If anything, it felt like that outgoing demeanor protected him. He certainly chased after it. He chased after Mina. She was the one directing where this date went. First stop were several clothing stores. 𝗧𝗑's eyes understandably widened, and he was pretty sure he could hear his wallet shudder in fear. From what he knew, Mina wasn't a big spender, or at least he hoped she wasn't. Regardless, if going past his budget made Mina happy, then ... so be it. He faintly remembered a saying, particularly amongst the many men and guys he'd been around: having a girlfriend or wife comes at the expense of your wallet. When 𝗧𝗑 asked his father about it, he'd remarked that it was a worthy exchange. Seeing Mina trying on so many different clothes and styles proved his father's words. For the record, 𝗧𝗑 didn't stare at girls, at least not to the extent of, say, Minda and Kaminari, but he was still a boy who could be attracted to the opposite sex. He was most definitely attracted to Mina, and that was when she was just wearing her plain, everyday clothes, including her school uniform. Put her in designer brand clothes. Multiple brands. 𝗧𝗑's jaw hung on the floor as she tried on various outfits. A voice in the back of his head told him he was lucky that they were in fall instead of spring or summer. Voices like his 2 previously mentioned classmates called to him he needed to stay in this relationship until then, and well after. Thoughts of Mina in skimpy swimsuits attempted to burrow their way into his mind, causing him to blush. Whenever Mina went into the dressing room, he did his best to expel them. His thoughts regarding the future were cut short as Mina burst out of the dressing room in her regular clothes and grabbed him. All right, now it's your turn, 𝗧𝗑. What? My turn. But I already have enough clothes, especially some to make it through the fall. He attempted to protest. What about the winter? She had him there, which he admitted to with a cocked eyebrow and thinking look. And besides ... won't you let me gawk at you the same way you've gawked at me? Wide-eyed, he stared at her with freckled cheeks fast turning red. Why you in and noticed? She nodded, continuing to grin at him. And you're ... okay with that? Considering you're my boyfriend, yeah, you're allowed to gawk at me. It actually makes me feel pretty good. His lips curved into an upward smile of relief. Mina raised her right index finger to 𝗧𝗑's chin. And if I were to stare at you dressed in various outfits, would you like it? In spite of her finger, Izuku looked down, embarrassment once more coloring his cheeks. She switched from a finger on his chin to a palm on his face. Izuku, I promise, I may laugh at you if you dress a little ridiculously, but as you girlfriend and you friend, I'm never going to laugh at you with the intent of emotionally harming you. You're too nice of a guy for that. And frankly, I have a hard time seeing you look uncute in anything. Cute. Mina, I don't think that's a real word. The super strength user laughed. Internally, he felt like he'd just been wrapped up in a big warm blanket. A big pink-colored blanket. Maybe not, but plenty of people use it. Like me, and maybe you too. Me too, huh? I guess I can start using it. Izuku admitted. She smiled. Good. Now then, would you ever use uncute to describe me? No, you're never new. Mina burst into laughter while he nervously smiled at him. You're learning. Hopefully you won't learn too fast or else I might run out of tricks. I'll have to come up with some new ones. That statement inspired both amusement and terror within the young hero. On one hand, he loved Mina for her teasing. On the other hand, what would happen if she stepped up her game? Would he be able to handle that? The possibility made Izuku shudder in fear as he had no idea how that would go. He got images of his head that left him feeling dizzy. Oddly enough, as the dizziness and even slight fear crept up on him, Izuku felt excitement. He supposed he really was changing, and he was inclined to say that he was changing for the better, and he had so many people to thank for it, including the girl now guiding him into the guys section so he could get his turn of trying on clothes. As he accumulated scars, there was a part of Izuku that grew more self-conscious of his appearance. If anyone saw him underneath his uniform, they'd have been taken aback by how much muscle and how many scars he'd built up, and he was still only a teenager. His male friends had all taken note and told him that if he ever walked around shirtless, he'd have a legion of fangirls. The thought genuinely terrified Izuku, doubly so since he knew what some fans could do if they took their obsession a bridge too far. For the record, Izuku knew that he was a total All Might fan and a hero fan, but he had lines he wouldn't cross. Others, well, he heard stories and he left it at that. He didn't have a problem bundling up in at times thick or heavy clothes. Given the weights that he sometimes ran with, it made little difference. Not to mention he could just shed them in a heartbeat if danger came knocking. It wasn't something that he'd like to do, but Izuku always kept himself prepared. Still, he rarely found any pleasure in shredding clothes that cost anywhere from 3 digits to potentially 4. Some heroes had actually had their careers ended over such reckless behavior. Others took joy in it. Anyone with an ounce of self or self-conscious awareness simply backed out of any of these clothing deals since they knew how it would end. Izuku sometimes wondered if he'd be one of those people. Fashion had never been an interest to him, unless it was superhero-focused, which meant that anything All Might-centered would definitely tickle his fancy. He laughed at himself in the mirror as he pondered all these thoughts. When he stepped out of the changing room, he got used to flashes of light from Mina's smartphone camera. "You won't be waving those around the dorm, will you?" Izuku casually asked. "Oh, don't worry about that. These will be staying with me. I don't want anyone else seeing how good you look. At least not until you make it big and your name and face are plastered everyone." It was a future that Mina was sure would come to pass. She'd do her best to make sure that it did because Izuku was her friend and her boyfriend. "You really like green, don't you?" she remarked in reference to the dark green striped sweater that he'd tried on. "Then again, it is in your name, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is. Green's always just been my color. Suppose I get it from my mom. My taste for it in my hair." "Your mom? What's she like?" "My mom," he mused, trying to think of how best to describe the woman whom raised him and loved and supported him. She was practically part of his whole world. "She's ... kind, so incredible kind and loving. You'd love her, or at least you'd come to," he said with a warm smile. "You know, I think I will ... and I'd love to meet her one day." Mina half expected him to swoon at the thought of her meeting his mom, but he didn't. Izuku continued to smile, seemingly accepting the proposition. If their relationship really took off, then it would be inevitable that they'd meet. Mina just hoped she'd be able to make a good impression. "Izuku, I've heard you talk about your father a couple of times ... What's he like?" I mean, are you two still in contact with each other?" "Oh, if only you knew, Mina," he thought. Izuku thought of how absurd it was for him to receive a gift and letter from his father the day before he got his first girlfriend, and went on his first date. That gift being a record player of all things and the girl in question being a person like Mina was kind of funny to think about. "Yeah, we still talk, and he and my mom are still together. Having a long-distance relationship isn't easy, but they've made it work. That's something about their relationship that I've always admired." It felt strange talking about his parents, and that was because he so rarely did it. The only person he'd done it before was with his mentor. "What does your dad do for a living?" "He works overseas for some company." "Yep, hold on a second." Back into the changing room he went, and out in his regular clothes he came. Mina followed him to the other side of the men's section, where formal suits lay. Izuku gently pulled at a black business suit and smiled at her. Corporate accounting, and he's pretty good at it. You know the way I can be hyper-focused, he can be like that too sometimes. Mina smiled back, but then her smile morphed into a grimace. That's ... well, at least that's a stabilizing job, and apparently he's good at it. It's just not the kind of job that you'd ever want to have for yourself. The kind of job that would suck out your soul and leave you a decayed husk of a person. Izuku laughed throughout the entire statement, showing that he wasn't a stranger to talking about it, which he hadn't done in years. Yeah, it was never the kind of job that I wanted for myself either. Good, it's too boring for you, and it'd be way too boring for me. I'd lose my mind within a day. What, you don't think you could last maybe a week? No, look at me, Izuku. Do you think I would be able to wear a suit and sit behind a desk doing paperwork? She shouted while waving her arms about. Laughing, Izuku let go of the suit and crossed his arms, making a show of seriously thinking about it. Apparently, the acidic-in-training heroine wasn't the only one who knew how to have a little fun at another's expense, namely his girlfriends. Let's see. I could sort of picture it, but it wouldn't quite be you. You're too bright for an office room, unless you're fighting a supervillain in it. I suppose you've got a point there. Luckily, stuff like that will always stay confined to just the imagination. I'm more than happy having chosen the path of a hero, and you're better off in doing the same, Izuku. Where would I be if I hadn't chosen that path, if that path hadn't opened itself up to me? It was a question that sometimes gnawed at him, and the terror of it kept him up at night. That question was something else that separated him from his classmates. They all likely could have done different paths besides hero work, or most of them. Izuku thought of Bakugo and Todoroki. Mina, yeah. Swerving his eyes over to the various suits, he felt his cheeks heating up and his stomach twisting itself into various knots. How would you think I would look in a suit like this? Cute, she answered in a heartbeat. You'd look really, really cute, especially if you kept your hair as it is. He smiled as she reached up and ruffled his dual black and green colored hair. Matter of fact, I'm hoping one day I can see you in a cute suit. I heard from the other girls you looked pretty cute when you were at the part on Island. Her happy expression dampened as the memory sunk its venomous fangs into her. I practiced my rock, paper, scissors game after that. He laughed while she shook off her temporary depression. I know that things went off the rails, but I still would have liked to have been there. We could have used your help, but ... we made do. I'm happy that everything turned out for the best. I know ... and I'm glad that you were, because you and All Might were there to save the day. It wasn't just us, it was everyone. If it weren't for everyone working together, including Melissa Shield. She watched Izuku's entire demeanor change at the mention of the name. It confirmed a silent suspicion that she had. Jiru and Momo told me about her. It's not like they told me the whole story or some confidential information. If I'm ever going to hear any of that, I want to hear the full story from you. That is, if you're willing to tell me. You don't have to. He was quiet for a minute, a response that quietly wondered Mina. Her intuition was sometimes spot on, and sometimes it was quite a ways off. This was one of those times she felt it was the latter, and she wasn't sure that was such a good thing. Her intuition told her that whatever had happened on Island, there was more than what the official report had said. Mina was sure of it. Little by little, her suspicions had been confirmed, and they just had been in a big way based on Izuku's response. His lack of a response was troubling to her. It left her wondering what was his relationships to this girl called Melissa. Did Izuku have a crush on her? Him. Apparently, they'd clicked quite well together. Mina wasn't the jealous type, or at least she didn't think herself to be one. She'd had crushes, but never an actual boyfriend. If Izuku had felt anything for this girl, wouldn't he have said no to becoming her boyfriend? One day, I'd like to take you there ... for a ... date. She looked to him with shocked eyes. Island's an incredible place, and it'd be awesome for you to go there. If I could personally take you there ... for ... like a date, well, I'd be beyond happy, Mina. His words dissipate the growing cloud of uncertainty within her. Mina wasn't the type to let such dark clouds form within her, but this was one of those times. Her trademark bright smile returning, she took Izuku's hand. Then I guess we've got a future date to look forward to. Yeah, we do, he affirmed. Izuku just hoped when that future date happened, it went peaceful. Seriously, his adventure on Island had been unforgettable for a number of reasons, not the least of which was the surprise theft and supervillain situation he had to resolve, which had indirectly been caused by the dilemma of All Might's power fading. Whenever he looked back on the tragic incident involving the Shields, specifically the now disgraced David Shield, he wondered if the mess could have been avoided if he knew the truth. Next time will definitely be better, he affirmed. To Mina, it sounded like a promise to her, one that she took in strides. That assumption was half right. It was a promise to her, and it was a promise to Izuku himself. He wanted to give Mina the best he could, and he was going to do that. That included a spectacular date at Island, without having to risk their lives to save the world. But if it came to that, well, Maybe they could find some enjoyment in fighting together. They were a couple and heroes in training, right? Hey, it's him. It's Izuku Midoriya. Wait, really? Seriously? Him? Beware the perils of becoming famous. Izuku wasn't sure who said it, but he was pretty sure that someone said that phrase. It was true, though to differing extents. In some cases, it was horrifically real, and in other cases, it was a little more comical. The latter could probably be used to describe getting swarmed once their faces were recognized. Or namely, once Izuku's face was recognized. 1 minute, they were just another pair. And the next they were being crowded by would-be skaters of all ages, including 1 or 2 seniors. Mina wasn't surprised at that part, nor was she entirely surprised at the attention that her boyfriend was receiving. Okay, maybe she was just a little bit surprised at how many girls came upon Izuku. Everyone seemed to be trying to touch his hands, which they recognized as being the hands that had thrown earth-crushing punches. In spite of having seen such destructive power, they sure did seem eager to feel up his arms, feel them up to the point of rolling his sleeves back and feeling up his scars, which they gasped and marveled. Okay, that's it. Sorry to break it to you, folks, but there's a fee for this, Mina shouted, shooting her arms out and waving off the horde of clawing and grabbing hands. Izuku took the opportunity to retract his hands to his chest, looking quite like a scared rabbit. The acidic girl wrapped her arm across her boyfriend's body. Look, we appreciate the attention, but we came here to do some roller skating enjoyment and that's it. We can sign autographs later. Actually, we want his autograph. One girl sniped, not even trying to hide her glare pointed squarely at Mina. She was high school age, perhaps 17 or even 18. Whatever heavy perfume she was wearing, it was going to be wiped away once they got into the rink. Her sapphire blue eyes moved from Mina to Izuku. It's your first time skating here, right, Midoriya? Why, yes, it is, he replied, feeling a new surge of embarrassment rushing through him. In spite of that embarrassment, he wasn't blind to the situation unfolding around him. I'm here on a date with my girlfriend. Normally, Mina wasn't a rude person. Not without reason anyway. This redhead who'd came up and gripped her boyfriend's hand had given her reason. She'd given her more than enough reason to near her black and yellow eyes in anger. The redhead responded by narrowing her sapphire blue eyes. She glared back at her in return. Mina had only known this girl for little more than 30 seconds, and she already hated her. And Mina had a feeling that the feeling was mutual. Girlfriend, she repeated. It was clear that she found Mina wanting in that position in regard to Izuku. Granted, this girl had no right to judge Mina. Come on, let's go sign in so we can get out skates, she near growled. Her grip on Izuku's hand was tighter than it had ever been before. He didn't protest her sudden grip, though the small crowd that had assembled certainly did. Mina could feel the redhead's glare on her, but she didn't pay it any mind. Mina, her boyfriend called. All it took was the simple call of her name for the anger building within her to dissipate. Letting out a heavy sigh, she turned around and looked at him. I'm sorry about that, Izuku. I didn't know that coming to this rink would end this way. I come here all the time and it's just me. I'm not the superstar. Well, I don't really consider myself a superstar. I'm just me. Yeah, and everyone saw you during the sports festival. Everyone saw you proving that you're the next symbol of peace. It sucks, but that kind of comes with the territory, I guess. She mused with evident disappointment. You're right, I guess there's no getting around it. If anything, I suppose I should just start getting used to it. All Might had warned him that the more he exposed himself, the more attention he would draw to himself. The media's attention, the attention of the masses, and the attention of the supervillains of the world. He'd so much time warning about the last of the three that thoughts of the other two ever crossed his mind. What a way for him to be reminded of them. I'm sorry, Mina. Izuku, you don't have anything to be sorry for. What happened back there wasn't your fault. Her cheeks puffed out as she thought of her own conduct. She'd handled it well, right? Mina didn't want to say she'd gotten too possessive of Izuku yet, but seeing another girl so blatantly come on to her boyfriend had roused something in her. Then again, maybe the reaction could be seen as a testament to the feelings she had for Izuku. Hey, what do you say we focus on the reason we came here? It's your first time skating and I'm just the girl to teach me. I'll follow your lead then. Izuku at least knew how to tie up his skates or the pads and helmets. It honestly wasn't that complicated. That part was reserved for when he stood up and tried to take a step forward. Skates were a new world for him, and it showed. Luckily, Mina was there with him, quite literally. Okay, I can do this. I can totally do this, he repeated to himself. Yes, you can, Izuku. Just take it nice and slow. His girlfriend comforted. They were going at what might as well have been a snail's pace. But it's not like they were alone. A handful of other skaters were going at the exact same speed, maybe even a little slower. There wasn't anything to be ashamed of. At least not yet anyway. Mina, I'm going to try and do a couple of laps. On my own. Though it seemed that the snail's pace wasn't to last long. You sure? Mina asked. As he nodded, she moved away. though not far enough he wasn't out of arm's reach. "I'll be right here." They shared a smile between each other. That smile was the spark that lit the fuse between them, or primarily Izuku. His eyes burned with a determined fire that Mina recognized and loved. He took off with speed that surprised her. The first 10 seconds were comedic as Izuku realized he'd perhaps put a little more force in than he should have. His hands waved about as he wobbled his way around the corner. Mina barely repressed her giggles, yet she didn't follow her natural impulse to help him. As he wobbled, Izuku locked eyes with her and shook his head. She got the message and let her boyfriend stumble and wobble. It was how he was going to learn. Personally, Mina had faith in him. Thump, thump, thump. Note to self: thank the person who invited skating pads. Compared to the pain his training had brought him, falling on his butt, knees, and arms wasn't so bad. It wasn't even as embarrassing as he thought it would be. He simply got up and tried again, getting a little better each time. There was a fire burning inside of him, the same fire that burned in his chest when he was training. He pushed on, feeling the fire growing stronger. After 3 laps around the rink on his own, he felt confident in himself. Mina was still beside him, ready to intervene at a moment's notice, but able to see he could rollerblade on his own. He could do that ... but going at high speeds like she could was still likely a long way off. Mina wondered when she'd get the chance to show him that. A flash of red and she realized the decision might not be in her hands. "HM, you seem to be taking to this pretty fast. Color me impressed, Midoriya." Both US students blinked in surprise at the realization that there was someone between them, an uninvited by familiar someone. Mina nearly tripped over her feet, as did Izuku. Thank you," he spoke, clearly uncertain of how to proceed. His eyes moved past the redhead to his girlfriend. The redhead smiled at him. She had quite a beautiful face, but Izuku couldn't and didn't let that distract him. "I don't think we got properly introduced before. My name is 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 Hajimoto. I'm a second year at UA. Why you go to UA?" the green-haired boy questioned. Of course, the now-identified girl winked. "It's for the best of the best. Like you and me." They didn't look to the side. They looked to the front, where a very peeved Mina Ashido was skating backward, arms crossed with her yellow eyes brimming with irritation. Normally, Izuku would have commented on that, but there was something else that took up his attention. "Mina, you can ... you can skate backward. That's awesome." Like a bolt of lightning light up the sky, Mina's frown broke. "It is pretty cool, isn't it? Takes a lot of practice, but hey, practice makes perfect. I can show you, if you want. I'd love for you to teach me." The enthusiasm in his voice was undeniable. "I mean ... who else would I want teaching me?" Her heart pumping with joy, Mina uncrossed her arms and turned to her red-headed senpai. Her grin was one of unapologetic smugness that she rubbed in her face. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 shot her a dry stare, clearly bemused by Mina's own expression. She had no one but herself to blame. She played this game and had been handed a defeat by the very object of her interest. It was the kind of delicious irony that Mina would have laughed at, and given the situation, she was on the verge of doing exactly that. "Well, word of advice, make sure you don't have a concussion when you teach him. Otherwise he may just have to find a new teacher." 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 jabbed. Mina had about 3 seconds to contemplate the upperclassman's words. Within that time span, her boyfriend called out, "Mina." He lunged forward, grabbing at her arms and pulling her against him. Izuku did so just in time, whipping her head around. Mina saw that if he hadn't, she'd have bumped right into the ring's edge. And with the loss of balance, she likely would have toppled to the floor, right in front of the girl who'd so subtly tried to hit on her boyfriend. Now that would have been embarrassing. At least she got to be held by Izuku as a nice consolation for the near blunder. Mina definitely enjoyed that. You okay?" Izuku questioned, seemingly not caring about the positions they were in. Mina was happy that he hadn't noticed it. It let her more thoroughly enjoy the moment. "Yep, thanks to you, my ever-faithful boyfriend," she cooed. Looking to the side, she saw 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 skating away, her red hair tied up in a ponytail. Mina had just met the girl and already she dreaded future encounters with her, but she wasn't going to let that tarnish her date. Izuku certainly didn't seem to be willing to let that happen. Their hands found one another as they realigned themselves. Together, they began to skate, and together, they found their rhythm. Izuku knew that Mina wasn't going at her full speed for him. Maybe one day, after probably hours upon hours of practice, she'd be able to move at that speed with him at her side. A new thought sprung in his mind: how would Mina react to him running at his maximum speed carrying her? He wasn't Ada, but he could still move pretty fast, leap across tall buildings. How would it feel to do that with her in his arms? That'd be pretty awesome, were his internal thoughts. They would stay internal so long as he could help it. At his behest, they began to move a little bit faster. It was clear that Mina enjoyed the speed up as her already wide smile grew. Loops made around the rink came and went much faster. Yet the pink-haired girl wanted more, and Izuku could feel a bit of that eagerness bleeding into him. "I can see why you love this place," he shouted over the air whipping in his face. "It's pretty cool. You should see this place when they're having races. I'll bring you back here sometime." That's when you'll really get to see me move. How's about now? Izuku called over the rushing air. Mina looked at him with widened eyes. In spite of his declaration, he kept holding her hand, getting all that he could before he would have to let go of it. Go for it. Go as fast as you can. I'll be on the sidelines watching you. Whenever she skated, Mina tried to keep a loose grasp of her surroundings. She had to, otherwise she'd end up with far more scraps and bruises than she'd like. Those were to be saved for actual combat training. There were times she was tempted to do something stupid and likely to get herself injured. In this moment, hugging Izuku seemed like one of those things. Luckily, she could wait until after they'd slowed down and he got to the sidelines. 3 more laps, she offered. Izuku grinned at her and nodded. By the time that those 3 laps were finished, maybe she would ask for another or 2. Inevitably, that's what ended up happening. Spending almost 2 hours skating had worked up quite an appetite for the both of them. It was hard to tell who was hungrier as both teenagers felt their stomachs growling, calling out for attention. Izuku and Mina had looked to each other with blushing faces, then broke out into complete laughter a second later. Their next destination in the mall was decided and they set out to the food court, which was expectedly packed. It wasn't quite dinner time yet, but everyone definitely seemed to have decided to grab something to eat. Some people actually were grabbing dinner to go. Izuku's green eyes searched for a table alongside Mina's. The latter found a table first and guided her boyfriend there. Upon sitting down, both teenagers went spread eagle in their seats, their heads leaning back. First time skating ... and it was pretty awesome. Izuku chuckled. Thanks, Mina. That's what a friend and a girlfriend are for. She responded with a hearty laugh. Quick question, how does skating compare to your leg workouts? If my workouts were a 10, I'd say this is about ... 4.5. Good enough. It could have been more if the rink allowed quirks. Then again, it's for the best since that kind of rink isn't meant for that kind of workout. He popped an eye that looked directly at her. You know a couple of rinks that do that, don't you, Mina? She laughed and raised her flashed him a thumbs up sign. Would you ... take me to a few of them sometime? Oh, definitely. Sitting upright, she laid her hands flat against the table and shyly glanced at her boyfriend. See, I've actually been working on a way to apply my quirk to skating, use it to skate. She watched his eyes light up like Christmas lights. Haha, yeah, I figured that'd be your reaction. That's awesome to hear, and I look forward to seeing how that application works out. There was a beat as he contemplated his next words. If I can ... help out in any way, I'd love to, Mina. I know you will. Her yellow eyes briefly moved down to his hands. It had felt great holding his hands, especially as they were skating. She knew that she was serving as Izuku's anchor. Yet in some ways, she felt like he was also being hers. Mina knew she was a girl that flew life at a mile a minute. Izuku went at a slower pace, and sometimes that was some charm in that. As they spoke of applications for her quirk, she thought of his. Again, there was so much about it that she didn't know, yet she wanted to know. She wanted to know if there was a way to help him with it as he'd helped her and he planned on continuing to help her in the future. So, what do you want to eat? Izuku scoured the food court. It had a little bit of everything, giving them a wide selection to choose from. There were some simple choices like burgers and pizza and tacos and sandwiches. Then there were some more colorful restaurants, none of which either of the teenagers were particularly interested in. They didn't feel like going through the long wait. His eyes made several round trips around the food court before settling on final conclusive choice. He genuinely wondered what drove him to choose that one, but he hoped Mina would be okay with it. How do you feel about tacos? Mina's black clear eyes widened. You eat tacos? I've had them before. Depends on who's making them and I'm willing to give them a try, he said, stabbing his thumb in the direction of the taco joint that he'd chosen. I'm willing to give theirs a shot. Then so am I. I've got nothing against tacos. I actually think they can be pretty awesome, she answered. Mina was a little surprised, but she smiled at the image of Izuku chowing down on some tacos. The image was missing some finer details, though she would get those in a couple of minutes when Izuku came back with their food. He'd regained enough feeling in his legs to get up, go, and stand around for almost 10 minutes as their food was prepared. Like he said, it didn't come close to his daily workouts, but it was a fun way to burn off energy, and tacos were a great way to replenish that burnt off energy, near simultaneously. They took their first bite of their tacos together, the faces of both teenagers bent in gluttonous joy. Mina raised her soda, proposing a toast to what was turning out to be a pretty successful first date. Izuku was inclined to agree with her. That was the surprise to him. That everything had gone so ... well, even with the minor speed bump at the skate rink. Truth be told, Izuku was actually in shock that an upperclassman had taken notice of him and seemed so invested in getting to know him. Izuku was flattered, but more than a little rattled. He knew that 𝐒𝐭𝐚 was hitting on him, which led to the rattling part. Had he been with his friends, other than Mina, he could only imagine how things would have gone. It was easy to picture Kaminari and Minta's reactions. He got a laugh out of doing so, thinking of our 2 perverted classmates. His girlfriend chirped. that easy to guess at. Yeah, plus, I was kind of thinking about them myself, Mina admitted. The smile she wore was one of half annoyance and half amusement. She knew the ins and outs of both boys well, maybe too well for her liking. You know, once word gets around, you're going to get pestered with a lot of questions from the two of them. Oh, and suggestions. I think I'm better off taking those from different sources. As for the questions, well, there's some things that I'd like to share just between us, he declared. Mina leaned her head on her palm and smiled at him. As it should be, Izuku. Let those two think whatever they want, at least until they take it a bridge too far. Then I'll be more than happy to straighten them out. He laughed as she held up her right hand and flexed her muscles, though he knew she was serious. He couldn't help but find something funny in Mina terrorizing his two male friends into silence regarding their relationship. Speaking of our relationship, Izuku, are you okay with it being public? I can't see a reason why it shouldn't be, especially since He trailed off with his cheeks gaining a slightly pink hue. Don't want to be ogled by annoying fans? Mina inquired. He nodded. Yeah, there's that, and Mina, I don't want it to seem like I'm ashamed of being with you. And I just like before at school. She rose from the table, took 2 short steps, and pecked the inheritor of One for All on the lips. Just like that time, she pulled away, leaving him utterly speechless. He didn't even care that he had crumbs on his face that Mina had somewhat sensually licked up. She returned to her seat with a cherry smile, clearly not at all regret what she'd just done. Izuku, her voice snapped him out of his stupor. You're an amazing guy, and I'm happy about being seen with you, about people seeing us together. I want everyone to know it, especially some harpies who probably think they can pull a face one on you. I've had that happen to me a handful of times after the sports festival. That was the first time that someone was so upfront about interacting with me, he explained with blushing cheeks. Izuku's eyes went to Mina's, causing the blush to deepen. But I never really felt anything serious for them. Not as serious as what I feel for you. Like I said, Izuku, you seem to always know just what to say to please a girl. It's one of the reasons I gotta keep you for myself. Her statement was capped off with a wink that really had the green-haired teenager blushing, and practically on the verge of exploding in his seat. Thank you. Mina, thank you for so much, he whispered in a heartfelt voice. Humility was a virtue, or at least that's what she'd heard. Mina believed it. But it wasn't until Izuku Midoriya came along that she realized it could be downright attractive. She knew that humility didn't mean being unable to stand up for yourself or for others. Izuku did both of those things in amazing ways. Seeing that, Mina felt an urge to stand up for him, to spend more time beside him. She also felt a desire to keep him to herself. As that little encounter at the mall skate rink had showed, in spite of what Izuku thought of himself, was becoming seen as the hero he strove to be. He was on the right track, and that was undeniable. And Mina was going to make sure he stayed on that track, and fend off anyone attracted to that growing reputation. Izuku Midoriya was off the market, and she wasn't going to be afraid to enforce that. Nor was she ever going to be afraid of being seen with the dorky but heroic young man. Being the quiet and seeming meek person he was, it couldn't have been surprising for Izuku to be at home in a place like a bookstore. Normally, it was quiet and serene, except if one were in the kids section and something like story time was going on. Izuku himself could attest to how loud some of those storytelling sessions could get. The better the story, the more hyped kids could get. Izuku liked his peace and quiet, especially when he had a book in hand. He had not 1 but 2, and 3 more waiting on the side. In clearest terms, he was a bookworm, and a proud one at that. Having said that, he wasn't the type to bury himself in purely educational books and the like. He was a comic book reader. That last part should have been obvious given his intense hero worship. Heroes were an age-old concept. That concept literally stretching back thousands of years. Izuku always took some solace in that. The ancient world had its heroes, albeit those heroes were mythically based instead of genetic like the heroes of today. Albeit every day, scientists and historians questioned if those supposedly mythic heroes were actually quirk users. That's when the conversation looped back to academic circles. Scholars' heads would spin if it turned out that quirks really originated in the BC era, nearly 4,100 years ago from the present day. The first reported quirks were during the 21st century, and what had followed was utter chaos as such abilities defied all known science and rationality. Contrast to the ancient world where myth and superstition ruled the day and people could pass their quirks off as divine gifts or proof of their unnatural parentage. Living in that era, Greek mythology seemed like a ripe world that could have been populated with early quirk users. Demigods like Hercules possessing super strength. Fantastical monsters, perhaps quirk-using animals appearing thousands of years before the phenomena was reported and confirmed. So-called gods, extremely powerful quirk users. Particularly some quirk user with electrokinetic abilities like Kaminari could have easily passed himself off as the god of thunder and king of Olympus. Hey, that actually sounds like the kind of thing he would do. especially if it got him loads of girls. It went without saying that those myths are the sorts that didn't particularly catch Izuku's eye. Unfortunately, he noticed quite a bit of these epic stories involved a lot of lust, a lot of sleeping around, some of it not even consensual on one half, and a whole lot of drama. Few heroes led as a dramatic and interesting life though, as Hercules, the son of Zeus and greatest hero in Greek mythology. Or, as Izuku and several dozen other children around the world called him Ancient All Might. Was there a real Hercules? Was he All Might before All Might himself? They were certainly interesting questions that could fill a person like him with awe and wonder. Regardless, stories of him had long since fascinated humanity, serving as a symbol of unimaginable physical strength and endurance. The stories centered on his life, his 12 labors and other adventures, were numerous. Marvel, one of the two comic giants of the 21st century, had an entire line of stories centered on him, growing out of the mythology of their Norse hero Thor. Izuku loved them both, but he personally felt a stronger connection to the Greek demigod. Given the similarities between their powers, it wasn't hard to see why. What Izuku had been happily surprised to learn that in spite of being known for his strength, the favorite of Son of Zeus could also be pretty clever, and it seemed a few of Marvel's writers remembered that and showed that. It furthered the sense of kinship that Izuku had with the fictional character. 20 minutes later, and he definitely knew he'd be adding a couple more books to his library collection. He could have stopped there, but he didn't. The Alien franchise had been the scariest movie franchise he'd ever seen, and it was over a century old. In spite of its age, its horror still held up. Or at least it did in Izuku's book. He didn't know if there existed alien life out there, but he prayed it wasn't anything like the murderous xenomorphs that were the stars of the franchise. If alien life did exist, how would he feel if there existed the masked and menacing predators who hunted the acid-blooded monsters? Yes, Izuku Midoriya had been scared shitless of his girlfriend's favorite horror movie monsters and her inspiration. Yes, he'd likely be having nightmares about them, especially if he did the unthinkable and actually watched the movies with Mina. Yes, he could go the rest of his life without ever looking up anything to do with the franchise ever again. But he knew that wasn't likely to happen, so he might as well suck it up. In reading up on xenomorphs, Izuku discovered that the creatures had something of a natural enemy: predators, larger than human extraterrestrial hunters who, well, hunted the monsters and other races for sport, including humans. Exactly what was it with the early 80s and 90s pumping out so many horrific monsters? The thing was, Izuku believed while monsters were scary, they could be slain. That's what ancient myths showed. That's what usually happened at the end of horror movies, and that's what he struggled to uphold as a hero. But these masked-wearing killers weren't exactly heroes, but they sure knew how to kill the parasitic aliens that reproduced via //urgh, one of the most disgusting means imaginable. Seriously, who in the hell came up with something like that? Izuku had reached for the first comic book that caught his eye, one that would focus on the Xenos humanoid hunters when he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He then heard his girlfriend's voice. Izuku, Izuku. It was a whisper with the force of a yell. Mina was calling to him but trying to remain as quiet as possible. He immediately dropped his books and whipped his head about to look at her. She waved her hand at him, indicating for him to follow her around the shelves. That's exactly what he did, his heart rate spiking a little. What had caught his girlfriend's curiosity so much? Mina, what is it? What's got you so? Her hand came over his mouth with the swiftness of a bear trap. She moved him aside, behind the shelf, and whispered for him to stand still. If they made one wrong move, they'd be noticed. Realizing that, Izuku went dead still. The last thing he wanted was to create an awkward situation. He was prone to too many of those. Both teenagers could feel the eyes on them, at least indirectly. Their target had a feeling that someone had been looking at him, and that suspicion kept his eyes glued to the bookshelves. Izuku and Mina knew stillness and silence were their best tools to avoid detection. Their best, but they weren't guaranteed to work. Green eyes and yellow eyes swerved to each other, anxiety building within them. Seconds ticked by in agonizing suspense. They made for quite a sight to a few of the other shop-goers. Several shrugged and assumed it was teenagers just being teenagers. Slowly, the sense of anxiety began to loosen. Izuku and Mina gradually relaxed as they felt the seeking gaze on them ease up, then disappear entirely. Neither released their breath, though they did finally peer around the corner. Shoto Todoroki hadn't noticed them. He was far more interested in the book that had caught his attention. Lucky for his two classmates, that seemed to have eaten up all of his attention. Izuku and Mina tried to get a look as to what that book was, but to do that, they have to reveal themselves. That option was definitely off the table. All they could do was wait. Waiting is what they did for the next 3 minutes, or at least that's how long it had been when they checked their phones or watches in Izuku's case. Finally, he turned his back to them and began to walk, seemingly toward the register at the front of the store. His focus was entirely on that. Oh man, finally sighing in relief. Both teens collapsed to their knees, leaning on each other. That was intense. I usually don't do that sort of stuff when I come to the bookstore. The green-haired boy muttered. Same here. His pink-skinned and haired girlfriend agreed. Usually, I'd have waved at him and walked over to see what he was reading. Izuku looked at her. Why didn't you? Just a gut feeling. He looked so engrossed in what he was reading I didn't want to disturb him. Hey, sorry if it feels like I dragged you into this and made a mess out of nothing. It's fine, Mina, he replied with a smile. Kind of felt a little exciting, to be honest. The fire of courage burned within him, guiding him to press his lips against her cheek. It was the first time that he'd been the one to kiss her, something that Mina knew all too well. She promptly squealed in joy, throwing her arms around him, making a further scene. Not that she cared. Izuku didn't care either. He was sure that Todoroki was at the register by now and almost done. Yesterday, I picked up a package from my dad and he was there picking up a package himself, he explained once Mina pulled away from him. He asked me about ... Well, how I'm good at forming relationships with others. He was asking for romance advice, Mina declared. How could you know that? He responded with shock. Sitting upright, Mina assumed an almost sagely position beside him. Trust me, Izuku, while you may know the ways of the hero, I know the ways of romance. Mina Ashido, future superheroine, Pinky. His confused expression broke into amused laughter. Mina snickered alongside him. Seriously though, trust me. If he came to you asking something like that, then he's trying to get closer to someone. Now that you mention it, he said there was someone he wanted to make a request to. The pieces started to come together with his girlfriend's assertion. Romance hadn't exactly been on his mind, but he did realize that Todoroki's thoughts were focused on someone. Who that someone was, he had no idea. Mina, he called. I have an idea. Leaning forward, she put a finer to her lips and flashed him a mischievous grin. I'll keep it a secret for now. For my amusement and for Todoroki's sake. The guy's still coming out of his shell, so let's take it easy on him. You know, I think I can go with that, he affirmed. Come on, what do you say we finish up here and get ready to head back to UA? Sure, but ... can we stop by one place? Kind of what to since ... Well, this is my first real date with a guy. Her cheeks flushed purple at the words, something that Izuku found adorable enough he wanted to kiss her again. He did, and he agreed to her request. Night was officially just a couple of minutes away from beginning. There was still a light bit of light left, like a candle flickering in the darkness, moments away from being snuffed out. It was a perfect time to visit the beach, whose waters reflected the dying light so well. It was even better to visit it with company. The last time Izuku had been to Takoba Municipal Beach Park, it had been beside his mentor. Inevitably, the place had a special place in his heart and memory. It's where he put in the first of what had become a long and grinding path to becoming one for all's successor. Obviously, it had been anything but easy. It had been such back-breaking work that there were times he felt like he'd never make any progress. But he pressed on, and through blood, sweat, and tears ... he'd succeeded, yet he was still pushing himself. Watching Mina trot across the sand, he felt strangely like he was being rewarded for all that hard work. In the fading light, Mina looked ... She looked ... She looked simply beautiful. A little colder than I was expecting, but it's fall, so what are you going to do? This place will be great to come by in the spring and summer, she mused, seemingly oblivious to his inner musings, and the role he'd played in cleaning up the beach. Izuku didn't mind it staying that way. Fame and credit weren't what he fought for, only the smiles of the people. An unintentional part of his cleanup had resulted in quite a lot of people smiling and laughing ... and hugging and kissing and ... You know, one of the perks of doing cleanup duty. Mustering his courage, Izuku walked to the shoreline beside his girlfriend. You know, Mina ... We could ... come back here when it gets warmer. She grinned at him. Oh, we're definitely coming here for a date in the spring and summer. Leaning into his ear, she whispered, just the two of us, Izuku. Though the sun was setting, Izuku's blush did its best to make up for the lack of heat and light. You know, this place was once filled with mountains of trash until it seemed like suddenly, one day, it was all cleaned up. No one knows who did it, but whoever they are, everyone's pretty thankful for them, including me. Thanks to them, I can enjoy a sunset view with my boyfriend. Dramatic irony, that's what it's called in stories. Yeah, I'm grateful to them too, he said, placing some of his bags down to wrap his arm around her. Mina, I had a great time with you today. Me too, Izuku, she whispered back. Her eyes always had an exotic beauty to them. It was more pronounced. He felt like he could spend the rest of the evening, all the way into the night, staring at her. Hey, come here. There's something that I want to do with you. Blinking in surprise, he followed her to the pier, curious as to what else she had planned. They were lucky that they were alone on the beach, having it all to themselves. She set their bags down by the side and placed her phone in front of her purse. Grinning, she took hold of Izuku's hands and moved them to the center of the gazebo. Hearing the music playing, Izuku spattered out, I can't dance. Which is why we're going to do a little practice here and now. Hell of a way to cap off our first date, huh? She'd already had him, but fluttering her eyes too. That was just overkill. But it worked none the same. The music played and the ocean waves flowed in and out. The bodies of the two US students swayed to it, just like at the skate rink. Mina led and Izuku followed, a romantic air evident between them. He was more than happy to let her take the lead. He was happy to be so close to her. Izuku Midoriya was happy that a girl like Mina, who shined like the sun, had chosen him. Izuku felt like he could dance until midnight, or maybe even until the morning. Mina felt the same way, but they both knew that probably wouldn't have been a good thing to actually test. Still, it would have been awesome if they could. Dancing had never been something Izuku thought much of, most on account of the fact that he was a horrific dancer. He had as much grace and rhythm as a rhino. In spite of that, the last half hour had been incredible. It had been an incredible learning experience that he took to his heart, just like he did all other lessons. This one was special since it was arguably the first one that Mina had taught him. How fitting it was such a relaxing yet exciting thing as dancing. As they danced, Izuku seriously considered putting in hours upon hours into practicing his dance skills just for her. There were a lot of things that he suddenly felt himself willing to do for her. Mina was utterly oblivious to his thoughts. She wasn't a mind reader, though she could certainly read expressions and go off of her intuition. The latter was telling her that Izuku was enjoying this moment as much as she was, and potentially thinking about the next time they could dance together. Her heart jumped up and down in excitement at the thought of sharing another dance with the green-haired boy she now called her boyfriend. Now that they were in a relationship, she realized she could ask him to dance whenever she liked. A light bulb went off above her head. "Do you want to dance together at the culture festival with me?" Her words knocked him out of whatever happy trance he was in, something that Mina admittedly felt a little bad about. 𝗵𝗃. She couldn't help but giggle. How was it possible for him to make looking embarrassing so cute? "Yeah, you. You are my boyfriend. It'd be a crime if we didn't share a dance together." On that, he couldn't help but admit she was right. Izuku knew he'd forever regret it if he didn't share a dance with her at the cultural festival. He knew that every other couple would no doubt share at least one dance, and probably a couple of other stuff best confined to the shadows. Thankfully, as he thought of those things, his cheeks didn't blush any more than they already were. Not that he was thinking of doing any of those things with Mina. "You have a good point. It's just, I don't think I'd be the best dance partner," he tried to explain. "Maybe, but I can practice." The follow-up burst out of him like a wolf that had failed in its first lunge, but wouldn't in its second to catch its prey. "I'm glad to hear that second part, because I can definitely help you in that area." She batted her eyes at him, causing a flare-up in his cheeks. "Yeah, I figured you'd like that option, Izuku." Embracing a sudden thought, she leaned back, a faux pouty expression on her face. "Unless there's some other girl who knows how to dance that you'd like to practice with." "What? No, only you, Mina." "As seriously, you're the only girl that I can ever see myself dancing with," he immediately proclaimed. A second later he realized just how easily she'd played him again. Not that he was against her doing it. With blushing cheeks, both of them ended up laughing together. It's not like I'm ashamed to be seen with you. If anything, I think it'd be the other way around." "Why? I can't think of any reason why I should be ashamed of being seen with you," Mina proclaimed, a hardness building up in her eyes. She slid her hands from his shoulders to his cheeks, locking his face in so he could look nowhere but into her eyes. Throughout the last couple of days, she'd gotten to know just how much of a great guy Izuku Midoriya was. Problem was, he seemed to have a tough time seeing it himself. "Izuku, I'd have no problem walking back to you hand in hand with you, letting everyone know that we're an item. Actually, I'm kind of thinking about doing that considering you're more popular than I could have thought." Izuku's cheeks burned a little brighter as he thought back to what had happened at the skate rink. It was a genuine shock to him that he'd become so popular outside of the school. At UA, he'd found himself becoming a growing source of curiosity amongst some of the students and a few teachers. His showing at the sports festival had made the rounds, and his physical strength and tenacity were all indisputable. It shouldn't have been surprising that some people had become enamored with them, and by extension Izuku himself. Even his own mother had been talked to and passed along some praise. He remembered 𝐒𝐭𝐻 and how she looked to him with open interest. Interest that, in another lifetime, might have led him down a different path. Shaking his head, he brought Mina in close, surprising her. He buried his head in her pink spikes and not minding her horns. Izuku loved her pink hair and horns, her skin. He loved everything about her. Everything that made Mina. "Mina, just you, Mina," he whispered. I feel so lucky that a girl like you chose a guy like me to be your boyfriend. Having people know that, well, it may come off as a little selfish, but I'd be happy to let people know that we're together. I'd be more than happy to let people know that." His heartfelt speech came to a momentary pause as he thought how best to phrase his next words. Izuku didn't see himself as a possessive person, but saying, "You're mine," sounded rather, possessive. Albeit it was totally true, and Mina knew that. I'd be more than happy to let people know that I'm your girl," she whispered, leaning up and kissing him. There was an immediate urge to intensify it, but Mina kept the kiss heartwarming and gentle. Izuku recuperated the sentiment. They both ended up enjoying the kiss, a kiss at the last second of sunset. Neither of them cared how the last of the sunlight utterly vanished, leaving the stars and moon as the sole lights in the sky. "I'll be happy to let everyone know that you're my man, especially mine." She added an extra emphasis on that last part. Suddenly, being possessive didn't quite seem like such a bad thing. "All right, what do you say we head back? I'd love to stay out a little longer, but it is still a school night," the super strength user proclaimed. Izuku was thankful that the heat in his cheeks was beginning to die down, giving him more ability to think coherently. "Good point. Not to mention we'll have Ida on our ..hm. What is it? I was just thinking. Obviously, Todoroki's got something going on, maybe Ida does too." Izuku's eyes widened. Mina smiled and motioned for him to get their bags. As they started walking, she began to explain. "I was talking with Asui and Takoyami, and they saw he's been spending a lot of time running errands. In fact, I met him on one. You know how normally when you ask him what he's doing he'll give a straight answer? Not so when I asked him why he was running supplies." That. Definitely unusual," Izuku noted. His lips curved upward. "That's actually kind of reassuring to know. Yeah, Ida could use a social life. Maybe it'll teach him to be a little less uptight, and give us something to tease him over." Mina finished with a fiendish smile. Izuku felt an immediate ping of sympathy and sorrow for his bespectacled friend. He'd never survive Mina's priding, nor Hagakira's if she joined in, which she might. "Command Todoroki, cross your fingers our straight shooters can get some girlfriends so they can have some social lives. Any ideas what kind of girls they'd be into?" Mina excitedly asked. Izuku had a feeling that she was looking to him because she believed he'd get close to the right answer. Frankly, he was still new to the concept of romance, but Izuku could make an educated guess on whose personalities could mesh well with his classmates. He knew that it probably would have to go further than that. Images of his parents filled his mind, being the most on-hand piece of romantic experience for him to call forth, even though his father was working overseas. All in all, one could argue he didn't have much romantic history to go on. But he still tried. Izuku looked up to the night sky trying to put a picture together. He stopped in his tracks once he did. Mina stood beside him, curious as to what conclusion he'd arrived at. So, she began. "Who'd you come up with? What girls do you think are the ones for them?" "Only for Todoroki, I think." "𝗵𝗃𝗀, why'd you ask me if you were just going to shout that?" "Just wanted to see if we were thinking of the same person," she chirpily responded. "You were thinking of her, right?" He nodded, causing Mina to puff her chest out a little. "She's an awesome fit for her." "I think so too," he admitted. "So, you'll help me hook them up?" Mina, Hey, just a thought. Besides, we'll only act if we have to. When you say it like that, I'm thinking of us dressed in white robes, sporting white wings, and bows with heart-shaped arrows." She was visibly impressed with his remark. "You know, I don't think that'd be a bad look for you. Consider it the next step since you helped Todoroki open up. I hear you're able to do that with a lot of people, almost like it's another quirk of yours." Suddenly, the freckle-faced youth came to a stop and turned around. Mina turned with him, looking back to find they were practically at the edge of the beach. The night was in full swing, the ocean water reflecting the stars and the moon above. Its waves softly beat against the sandy shoreline as a natural melody you could lose yourself in. Izuku seemed to be lost in that melody, but Mina had a feeling that wasn't the case. He was looking at something else, something she couldn't see. Mina wanted to see it though, and maybe one day she would be able to see it. Sometimes I can't believe that some people talk about me that way. I mean, I was never that type of guy," he whispered. His eyes were still distant, still looking at that unseen thing. Mina was beginning to suspect that he was looking to the past. She watched his face move up and down the beach, recognizing the sense of familiarity in his eyes. She kept it to herself though. Sometimes it just feels so surreal. "I feel like any second, I'm going to wake up, all of this will just vanish." "It won't vanish, and you deserve this. After everything you do for so many others, you deserve this twice over." As he looked to her, Mina took the opportunity to peck him on the lips. "And I'll be there to remind you of that every time." "Thank you, Mina. You're welcome. Now, come on. Like you said, we better get back." They wouldn't be walking the entire way back, though Mina would have liked that. Izuku wouldn't have minded taking a few leaps to get back. He'd do it before, a great way to exercise and practice his control. That sort of thing couldn't exactly work now, at least not tonight. Maybe one day when they weren't carrying anything. And maybe on that day she would know the truth about his quirk. On this beach, he'd struggled and struggled to prepare himself to inherit one for all. It was funny how he'd came back, with a girlfriend, the last thing he expected to have when inheriting his idol's quirk. The story of that inheritance involved Takoba Municipal Beach Park, now a popular leisure and date spot. Little over 1 year ago, that was a laughable statement, but thanks to Izuku's efforts, all the pollution had been cleaned up. He wondered what would Mina think of that story. Knowing her, she'd sing his praises from here to the United States on the other side of the ocean. Izuku didn't need praise from anyone else, not from the city's citizens or even the wildlife of the beach, just from her. But to get that, he'd have to tell her just a little bit of the truth. How much of it would he be able to tell her? A fraction? The whole truth? All those questions bounced about in his head. But he pushed them aside when he caught a bus with her back to you as she leaned against his shoulder. Blissfully happy at the day they'd spent together, he decided he could wait on thinking about the future. For now, he was happy and content. And so too was the girl who'd stolen his heart. Heights Alliance, 7:15 p.m. It's not too bad. All heads turned to the pair of girls who'd been hovering around Izuku, who did his utmost best to prepare a serving of cookies as part of their dinner. As 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐺 had so eloquently put it, "Dumbass, you're making cookies, not cannonballs." Naturally, Izuku practically jumped, his head nearly hitting the ceiling and accidentally pushing aside Mina and 𝗂𝗧𝗏. "I'm sorry, I tried my best," Izuku squeaked. Mina looked to the blonde with a tiny glare that he briefly returned. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 looked more concerned about Izuku. Then her gaze turned to 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐺. The explosive student looked from Mina to her and something seemingly changed. The ferocity of his expression softened. "Ga, from now on, leave Deku out of anything involving baking. He sucks at it," he shouted to Ida and Yaoyorozu, who he was clearly holding responsible for the baking travesty that had taken place. "Have him do the dishes or something. He's better at that than he'll ever be at cooking." "He can get better," Mina sniped. A stray glance at one of her boyfriend's cookies and she was reminded of 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐺's earlier statement. He called a cannonball. She was wondering if getting hit in the head with one would be a comparable experience. "Maybe. But not he can practice using his own ingredients, not ours," he shot back. Sorry, Izuku muttered. 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐺, Mina's right. Besides, it's not like this is the first time someone's cooking has gone awry, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 stated, and her words caused several of her classmates to grimace. It was practically an undeniable fact that Sato was the best cook in all of Class 1A. As fun as it was to have him around, they tried not to overly rely on him, which led to nights like this them trying cooking on their own. The results were a mix of success and failure. Tonight was just one of those nights where making dessert didn't quite go the way we planned it. Nothing new, and it's just an opportunity for us to improve on. Well, that, or just go out to the store and book pre-made cookies. Kaminari mused in the background, then winced as Gyro subtly jabbed him in the side. Anyways, like 𝗂𝗧𝗏 said, no sweet. We've all had our share of cooking mishaps. So out need to single out Midoriya. At the very least we can tell that he was actually trying to bake cookies. Asui mused. Beside her, Kirishima bristled, something that didn't go unnoticed by his former junior high classmate. Mina broke her glare at 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐺 to giggle at the still recent memory of his attempt at baking. "GRR, just move aside and let me do the rest of the baking," the blonde boy grumbled. As for these, he reached over and grabbed one of the cookies, tossing it about in his hand for a minute. Then he threw it off to the side, not caring where it landed, or how Ida's face fell. "Do whatever the hell you want with them, 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐺. At least have the courtesy to throw them into the trash," Ida shouted. Ida, have you forgotten who it is you're talking to?" Minda called from his place on the couch. Not seeing a talent for cooking, he simply chose to wait for the baking to finish and enjoy the delicious fruits of his classmates' labor. He had no problem waiting a little longer. Sighing in acceptance, Izuku stepped aside. His sorrow was short-lived as he felt a familiar hand wrap around his. Before he knew it, he was smiling as he stared into the bright yellow eyes of his girlfriend. She laughed as she did her job in driving away his sorrow, and all it took was a single look. A look that didn't go unnoticed. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 didn't meant to stare, but she couldn't help but stare at the interlocked hands and the mutual smiles. Her heartbeat sped up as she looked from their hands to their faces and back again. No one else had seemingly noticed, just her. That made it all the worst. "Oh, hey, Midoriya, Kirishima, we're getting some more fallout," Minda shouted from the couch. The collection of teens snapped their attention to the TV, which had been playing the news for the last several minutes. Only a few had paid much attention to the report, but those that did weren't at all surprised. Even if it had been a solid week and a half, the fallout from the raid was still continuing. Such a thing was natural when it came to tackling criminal enterprises, especially ones that had one hell of an operation going. Luckily for the world, the 𝗓𝗏 operations had been halted before they could truly begin to take off. That was the good news that everyone had been celebrated. Izuku knew firsthand of the bad news though, the news that couldn't be discussed on national or international TV. He knew that in order to stop the 𝗓𝗏, sacrifices had to be made, sacrifices that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The faces of the ones who made those sacrifices flashed into his mind, causing his entire body to tense up with fear and sorrow. Sometimes, it felt like the final battle against Overhaul wasn't that far away. Izuku had woken up in cold fright, believing that he was still in that battle, and he failed her. With a touch, he was reminded that he hadn't failed, a sudden breath escaping his lips. He looked to his right to find Mina looking at him, visible concern on her face. Izuku couldn't help but whisper her name, as if he were actually waking from some nightmare, and her face was the splash of reality he needed. The bright pink that was her skin and hair coupled with the black and yellow of her eyes chased away the mounting darkness that was bubbling within him. Yep, just like the sun, he thought while his lips began to curve into a smile, letting Mina know she'd intervened at just the right time. She sighed in relief and squeezed his hand. While basking in the feel of her palm, Izuku realized something. There was someone to his left, someone holding his left hand. Remembering he wasn't alone, he turned to his left and briefly met Uraraka's gaze. Her eyes widened seconds before she fully looked away, seemingly embarrassed. Izuku suddenly realized that though somewhat on and off, she was the one that he often ended up beside. She also always seemed to intentionally seek him out to check on him, much like Ida, but a tad more often. The two of them were his closest friends, the two people he trusted most since coming to UA. On one hand, nothing seemed to have changed since then, yet so much had. The greatest sense of warmth he felt was coming from his right side, his dominant side. Meanwhile, on the left was a girl whom he'd come to consider a good friend. That friend seemed to be staring at the report of the attempted prison escape a little more intensely than one would expect. Wait, Uraraka ... she couldn't possibly be. He thought behind a calm facade. Izuku wasn't particularly good at hiding his emotions, but he knew how to try. Sometimes he could even succeed, though never as gracefully as this. Like most kids of his generation, Izuku hadn't grown up fearing the Yakuza. They were mostly seen as a relic of a bygone era, but not all relics were content to stay dead. Overhaul was hellbent on reviewing the prestige that organized crime syndicates used to have, and he was willing to become a monster to do that. Literally. Holy shit, Midoriya, that's really you, Kaminari shouted, now leaning forward along with the rest of their classmates as footage of the battle was shown. The hulking monstrosity that was formerly the man known as Ksaki, or as he was known to the public, Overhaul, was engaging in battle with another, a fighter clad in an emerald green aura. Dude ... this one's an even better picture. Midoriya, I had no idea your quirk was that powerful. Yaoyorozu whispered. Like the others, she was taken back by the flare-up of energy surrounding her classmate as he battled the giant armed monstrosity. Her eyes flickered to Todoroki, then back to Izuku. They were glowing with concern. You didn't push yourself too hard, did you? Yeah, given how your quirk works, I'd imagine that you must have been feeling incredibly sore after all of that, more so than you would let on. Asui seconded. Her voice was tinged with just as much concern. At heart, Izuku actually felt a little bit relieved that all of his classmates were showing such concern for him. It was ... nice to know that they cared about him so much. Well, I won't deny that I was feeling pretty sore afterward, but not enough that I couldn't move around. Usually, when you use your quirk to such an extent, you end up breaking parts of your body. It's something that we all get concerned about, Shoji voiced. Izuku tensed up as he looked around him at the rest of his classmates, Uraraka and Mina being the last ones for him to gaze upon. They both nodded in full support of their masked student. But ... we know that more often than not, you're doing it for a good cause. He had one. We all did. Kirishima spoke up. All eyes went to him, though his attention seemed focused entirely on Izuku. And briefly, Mina. In the back of his mind, he noted how close those two had been since they came back from town, and the fact that they'd apparently gone out together. He kept those thoughts in the back where they belonged. Midoriya was trying to save someone special, someone that I'm happy they're not showing OTV. He did, he plus ultra, like we're all trained to do. Tim ... and Lemillion. At the mention of the name, a shadow fell over the two boys, one that everyone, including Bakugo, took notice of. Though he was busy in the kitchen, his ears remained open and alert. He'd kept a loose eye on the news report playing, and he'd occasionally swerved his glance to his former childhood friend. Hey, can either of you tell us what really happened to him? Minda questioned. There's a lot of rumors floating around, 𝗵𝗃𝗃 stated. We've all refrained from believing anything too outlandish, but let's just say that we've had some people come to us trying to get an exclusive on what's going on, especially since Overhaul's convoy was attacked. It fell to Todoroki to explain it. The latter statement caused Izuku's whole body to tense, a fact that went unnoticed by no one. Midoriya, we're not trying to pry you for information, but ... if you need to talk about what happened, you or Kirishima, we're here for you too. Izuku remembered when he and Kirishima first came back from their battle with the Shy Hasek. To say that they looked worn out would have been an understatement. Their classmates hadn't wasted a minute in going to check up on them. This is what it means to have friends. That's what he remembered thinking, and finding enormous joy in. He had that feeling again, but more intensely. And that was thanks to the girl at his right side. Izuku craned his head to the right to see Mina smiling at him, that same bright smile that he'd fallen for. Thanks, guys, he finally said. Yeah, seriously, I don't think we could have asked for a better set of classmates and friends, the redhead exclaimed. Hey, the cookies are almost finished, so start grabbing a plate, Bakugo shouted from over by the kitchen. Well, we came close to getting it exactly right, Mina noted, calling attention to the almost on-point timing. Hopefully next time. Hiraraka sounded off, also a little disappointed by the offbeat timing. On the plus side, just a little while longer. No one calls dibs on anything. The cookies shall be distributed evenly, Ida declared. Kinda funny coming from the guy who can literally move as fast as the wind in the blink of an eye. Kaminari coyly cracked. Again, he received a jab in the gut courtesy of Gyro. Was this the reason why she sat next to him this time? Hey, maybe Bakugo will have baked enough, we'll have a few extras lying around. Wouldn't that be nice? Mina offhandedly offered. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught her boyfriend's widened gaze. She shot him a slight wink that he caught before looking back to her original target. Ida flinched and looked away, a curious pink tint coloring his cheeks. Maybe Ida really is seeing someone. Izuku thought in utter bewilderment at what he'd seen with his own eyes. He knew what he'd saw, but he was still in shock at it. Ida seemed to be in shock himself, utterly speechless at how an aspect of his personal life had come dangerously close to being exposed. Yeah, I was definitely right to feel sorry for him. Izuku wasn't eager to pry into his friend's social life, but he had a feeling his girlfriend was going to have some other ideas. Would it be worth it to try to talk her out of some of them? He was left oddly excited at the prospect. That would be. Well, it'd be best we distribute the leftovers to others, he finally said as a recovery. I'm not cooking any more than I have to. You idiots want there to be leftovers, then don't pig out, shouted the night's current chief cook. Several looked to him and merely snickered in response to his declaration. Bakugo, of course, took it with a huff and grumbled to himself. Looking at him, Izuku had a feeling his old friend wouldn't mind using up a little more cookie dough tonight, for as much he tried to push people away. Izuku noted how he always seemed a little more at peace when he was cooking, just like he was at peace when he was drawing and writing. Another example was a new addition, the piece that Mina brought him. Her sitting next to him eating cookies and watching TV. That was peace, that was practically heaven. But Izuku had to wonder, what could possibly be higher than heaven? What could describe Mina discreetly licking the crumbs off his face when no one was looking at them? He was pretty sure he discovered a brand new shade of red which kept him having to keep his head ducked. Mina herself twirled away with a go-lucky smile on her face as if nothing had happened. Could they really keep their relationship a secret until the festival? Had they kept better track of one of their classmates? They would have found the answer to be no, they couldn't keep a secret from all of them. But that was a dilemma that would come afterward, as when morning came, they would face a new one, or rather, Izuku would. 11:44 p.m. Hey, Izuku. Mina, he responded, holding the phone to his ear. I'm okay. There was a pause on the other end. No doubt from her realizing that he knew the question she was going to ask before she even asked it. Mina wasn't exactly surprised. Though he could be a bumbling dork, Izuku Midoriya knew how to get the ball and stay with it. It was part of his charm. The call changed into a FaceTime session between the two of them. Not at all unusual for teenagers. For Izuku, it certainly wasn't the first time he'd done so with a loved one, but it was his first time with Mina. He smiled as he saw the bright pink color scheme of her room. In turn, she could see a little bit of his room. No, you didn't spill all the details to us when we were all watching the news report, she said. Izuku didn't need to say a word as his face showed she'd hit the nail clear on the head. Are you worried about any of those guys attempting another breakout? No, at least not anything that law enforcement can't contain. Amazingly, Izuku actually found it slightly comical that a few of the Yakuza thugs had attempted a breakout of police custody. Some of them were real die-hard believers in apparently bringing back old crime. It was ironic that they were all quirk users themselves and seemingly longed for the days of more mundane criminal activity. It was a fleeting dream that went absolutely nowhere, something he could unwilling sympathize with. Now that they're locked up, I don't really think they'll be causing trouble for anyone anytime soon. Then it's something else, isn't it? It's the fact that Overhaul was attacked mid-transport, right? The pink-haired woman pressed. Soft determination was coloring her eyes. It would only take a few wrong words for that softness to turn hard. Izuku, you know who went after him, don't you? His eyes widened. You know, don't you? Not for sure, he defended. Then who's your suspect? She followed up. His whole body tensed, and Mina could see it. She immediately regretted her intrusiveness. Sorry. Here I am calling you up before you go to sleep. And I'm pretty much making it impossible for you to sleep. No, it's fine. Truth is, I actually think it's better this way. It gives me someone to talk to about my thoughts. I don't really get to do this with a lot of people, not even with All Might, she jokingly jabbed. His cheeks turned light pink. Mina, he's my mentor, but I know he's still busy, even if he is technically retired from official field work. It means that he can now teach full-time. Though he's no use when it comes to physical instructions, which kind of sucks. It wasn't the first time that she'd complained about the depowered state of the former #1 hero. She was far from the only one who complained. You know, from time to time, they still run reruns of his final battle. Do you watch some of them when they come on? Sometimes, it's hard to watch. You know it's not your fault, right? Izuku watched through the screen as she sat up and held the phone with both hands. From several doors away, she had his undivided attention. Izuku, that battle was balls out insane. There was nothing you could have done besides get Bakugo out of there, and you did. Those simple words caused his worn face to brighten and a smile to form, just as Mina wanted. I'm sorry you have to keep on doing this for me. Usually, I try not to be this moody. Hey, like I said, I'm the one that started this whole thing. It's just, I remember being glued to the TV watching the final battle. I saw the All Might we all grew up admiring. But then, when the dust settled, I don't know, I guess I was reminded of something. I forgot he's still human. Even All Might has limits, and even though he pushed past them, apparently, even his powers could be burnt out. I've heard it can happen, but to see it happen to All Might was just unreal. Her hands trembled and her heart raced at the memory. It wasn't the night that she'd been expecting, more so when she learned her classmates had been dead center of that mayhem. The fact that Izuku had been there, and given their current relationship, Mina felt a chill run up her spine. You know, every now and then I forget that heroes are still people and that includes us. I know what you mean. Mostly, you're so in awe of them so much that you do forget that. The words were truer than Mina could know. Izuku couldn't ever forget the images of his mentor's deflated form. His true form as it was now. He'd known all along it was his true self, but the rest of the world hadn't until that battle's epic conclusion. That still didn't make it easy to see, or accept that it had finally become permanent. His eyes met Mina's, and he could instantly read her thoughts. I walked away from that battle pretty bruised, but I made it out alive. And whole, he added, holding up his right arm. Yeah, you did. And you beat the bad guy to save an innocent little girl to boot. I'd actually like to meet this little girl one day. I'd think it'd be pretty nice if you could meet her too. There was a pause as he shifted his gaze to the top of her head. Horn buddies, right? She grinned. Come on, it'll be awesome. You might have a point there. I'll think about it, though it may end up taking some time. He's been through a lot, more than I want to describe. As awesome as the idea seemed to be, Izuku knew that he had to be a bit realistic. Yuri's trauma was likely going to be with her for the rest of her life, but something could be done to make sure that trauma didn't utterly consume her. He believed that Mina could help her do that. One day, though, I'd love to introduce you to Yuri. I'll be looking forward to that day. The same way that I'm looking forward to meeting your parents. And just like that, his face fell out, his cheeks reddened. Hey, we sort of talked about this at the mall. I'd love to meet your folks, and I'd love for you to meet mine. I'd love to do that too. Maybe maybe with the holidays coming up. Yeah, that's another fun thing. After the culture festival, we can start planning for Halloween and the Christmas. Oh man, I can't wait for that. Admittedly, Izuku couldn't either. Halloween with Mina he was both excited and terrified. Followed by Christmas with her, his heart fluttered with holiday joy that was still months away. That, he was cut off by a yawn, is something else I definitely agree with you on. Alright, I think it's time we brought this exciting day to a close. See you in the morning, Izuku. She took yawned at the end of her statement, showing that she was ready to hit the pillows as well. Oh, and thanks for today. Thank you too, Mina. Thanks for everything, and thanks for giving me a chance. In spite of the exhaustion nipping at him, he still found it in him to put all of his heart into those words. It was worth it as she smiled at him before hanging up. Izuku placed his phone beside him on the dresser, another yawn passing his lips as he slipped underneath the covers. The entire conversation had taken place in darkness on his end, the call being the sole illumination in his room. There was only darkness, which Izuku welcomed. Instead of nightmares, light came to him in the form of the day's events. Izuku went to sleep with a smile on his face and calmness in his heart. The next day, they're together. All Might chuckled. Yes, I can see that. Midnight. The vixen superheroine fixed her old classmate with a grin. Personally, she found something undeniably sweet about the parental bond shared between All Might and his protege. From what she understood, Izuku didn't speak all that much about his father, though their relationship was by no means cold. The fact of the matter was for the aspiring hero. There was a strong parental figure to be found in the symbol of peace. But as she'd seen, Izuku Midoriya wasn't a carbon copy of his mentor, and he was all the better for that. For starters, the green-haired youth had accumulated far more romantic experience than his mentor ever had. The young inheritor was in one serious relationship, which was already more than could be said for his mentor. How did Midnight know this? Well, she had an eye for these sorts of things. Anyone who knew her probably wouldn't have been surprised by that. All Might certainly wasn't. I'm happy for him and Miss Ashido. Young Midoriya will be good to her. the skeletal-looking man said with a warm smile. Though she was smiling, Midnight's was of a different variety. Oh, he will be. And in turn Mina will be very good to him as well. Her fellow teacher chose not to comment on her remark. And it was for the best that his protege and his girlfriend have no idea that they're watching them. So, you think they could end up becoming a duo. And I mean an actual duo instead of hero and sidekick. I think we both know that Miss Ashido is not the type to play sidekick, nor would Izuku see her as such, the retired hero noted. Midnight cast him an aside glance. You're right there. She's far too spirited for that. Not to mention she'd likely remind him that she's his equal in this partnership. She'd have to, for his sake just as much as hers. Her words weren't said in an accusing manner, but the undertone was there. Yes, that would be for the best, for both of their sakes, the blonde admitted, her eyes softening. The black-haired woman placed a comforting hand on her senior's shoulder. It was clear to many, especially the U.S. staff, that All Might saw a great deal of himself in Midori. They all saw the similarities as well. While that was cause for praise in some areas, in others it was cause for concern. All Might knew that as well. It was the boy's dream to be like his ideal. That was admirable, but it was impossible for one person to be an exact replica of someone else, or at least it was ill-advised for that. All Might certainly didn't think it was a good idea for his successor to follow in all of his footsteps. She's too nosy to simply let things go ... and I think we both know what that'll mean. All Might. While the two students continued to dance, the two teachers looked straight at each other. It was like night and day between the two pairs. The youngsters were undoubtedly the day, basking in the light of their youth and the peace that they had. For the adults, darkness had settled over them. Eventually, it would move to the young couple that they'd spent the last 20 minutes watching. Neither of them wanted that, but they knew it was inevitably, especially All Might. I'll leave things to you and Principal Nezu, the heroine noted. Yes, as much as I hate to do it, we are going to have to talk about this. I would rather wait until after the school festival, but I just can't shake this feeling that might be too late. For that matter, I'm genuinely hoping the festival itself is able to run as smoothly as possible. It will, so don't worry your pretty little head about that. Midnight winked. For now, you focus on helping your protege hone his abilities, and be there to give him what little romantic advice that you can. The blonde hero chuckled. Painful, but true. I'm not much when it comes to romance. That may be one road young Midoriya will have to walk on his own. He can always turn to me for advice. You wouldn't have a problem with that, would you, All Might? Just because he'd never been big on romance doesn't mean that the former symbol of peace was romantic death, or just an idiot regarding women. On top of that, he and the black-haired heroine had gone to school together. He knew at heart she was as worthy of the title of hero as any other. She was also a shameless flirt and seductress who rarely passed up an opportunity to mess with others for her own amusement. There was a reason why a handful actually committed crimes with the intention of being caught by her. Many heroes had their fanbases, and some of those fanbases had their bizarre parts. For Midnight, that distinction actually made up almost a quarter of hers. She was somewhat proud of that. I think we leave that to young Midoriya and possible Miss Ashido, he finally said, trying to sound polite. Midnight recognized that and held back her amused snickering. They were still hiding, partially as not to disturb the dancing couple. All right, I'll keep it toned down for his sake. Besides, they're still maybe a year or two away from getting into those sorts of activity. Possibly. Midnight, with all due respect, can we stay on topic? The depowered hero asked, letting his nervousness show. I am staying on topic, which is the next generation of heroes, she happily retorted. The future's looking bright, All Might? Boldly, he poked his head out from behind the door into the classroom. It gave him a better look, which he'd sacrificed in favor of going unseen. He was putting himself and his colleague at risk of being noticed. Personally, All Might thought that it would be worth it, and so did Midnight, who peeked her head out as well. She wanted to get a better look at the pair. For someone who could move as fast as a speeding bullet train, and even faster, it might have been surprising to see Izuku Midoriya moving so slowly. Alternatively, that was in the heat of battle and superheroics. When he was dancing, not so much. His girlfriend was taking the time to remedy that. The music was fast-paced, and she felt an urge to dance to it at the same speed. If she did, she'd lose Izuku, who was nowhere near that level. Their dance by the beach had been to a slower pace. It had been romantic in every sense of the word. What they were having now, still romantic, but at a faster pace. The fast footwork that she could do, Izuku couldn't, not on command. That was another reason why they were practicing. It was clear they were having fun doing so, even though he was clearly struggling. Izuku was smiling. As he learned, it was great learning how to dance with your girlfriend. It was even better when said girlfriend was a patient teacher, and didn't move physically touching him to show him how to move his body. So engrossed the two teens were in their practicing, they didn't notice the pair of teachers covertly poking their heads out from behind the door. The teachers moved back around the corner when they saw the pair about to do another spin. Think the boy will ever be appearing on Dancing with Heroes? Midnight cracked. Young Miss Ashido might. And if she goes then, maybe. All Might offered. Can you see them making it past the first round? Yep. Would you be willing to let me teach them so they can go even further? The heroine pressed, smirking at her. The retired symbol of peace began to walk down the hallway, his colleague moving to follow him. They needed to get some distance for his next statement. I'd be willing to. Or they could always just go to Mount Lady for dancing instructions. Immediately, the seductive heroine's face fell. Her formerly jubilant expression went cold as she stared at the scrawny boned man. She'd forgotten that from time to time, the former #1 hero could be cheeky, almost as cheeky as her. Let's not go getting ahead of ourselves, Mr. Retired #1, said retired hero let out a proud chuckle. This was one he needed to get some distance from the classroom, while his protege was off having his fun. All Might decided that it wouldn't hurt to have a little of his own fun too. 30 minutes later. Am I in trouble? Izuku asked. No, far from it actually. The former symbol of peace said. Young Midoriya, you're not in any sort of trouble at all. This meeting we're going to, it's actually about the future. It's about all for one and one for all. As he knew, and as he feared, that caused the boy to tense up and ready himself. All Might hated it. He hated how his words had put his student on instant alert. He could take a guess at the thoughts racing through his mind. All Might himself had some of the same ones when he was learning about what his life would be like. His life wasn't easy, and Izuku Midoriya's life wasn't easy. It hadn't been easy up to this point, and it wouldn't get any easier. In fact, one could argue that it was going to get a lot harder from this point out. None of this was actually new to Izuku. He was ready for it. Some would have said it was practically a skill of his, not a quirk, but an outright inborn skill. Whatever the challenge was, Izuku could and would face it with that same determined stare of his. Principal Nezu was somewhat pleased to see that look when the duo arrived in the teacher's lounge. Good afternoon, Principal Nezu, the young hero said, giving the mouse a respectful bow before taking his seat directly in front of the green couch upon which he sat. Right beside him sat his mentor. He looked about as tense as Izuku did. First off, I've heard word that you've begun a relationship with one of your classmates, Mina Ashido. I'm quite pleased to hear that. Congratulations. The hyper-intelligent mouse stated, taking a sip of his coffee. The words temporarily broke the tension that had gripped Izuku. Thank you, sir. I guess word travels fast. We only started dating yesterday. How'd the first date go? Principal Nezu asked without missing a beat. Luckily, Izuku wasn't deterred by the mouse's forwardness. He was beginning to get used to people with such attitudes. It went pretty well. Personally, I felt like it was probably amongst the best times of my life. We're happy to hear that. It's our deepest wish that you and Miss Ashido will have more such moments in the future, the white-furred mouse declared in an amicable voice. Izuku was almost entirely suckered in by it. Almost. But the future is why I had All Might bring you before you two began your training. Looking to his mentor, Izuku spattered out. This is about her potentially finding out about one for all ... I assented. Rather surprisingly, both men raised their eyebrows in surprise. I've thought about it myself, Izuku admitted, his gaze drifting down toward the table. All Might's gaze softened as he realized that such a thing was only natural. His successor had one hell of a thinking mind. In fact, sometimes All Might wondered if Izuku thought too much. You're right, that's the focus of this discussion we felt we needed to have. Young Midoriya, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you beginning a relationship with someone. In fact, we're all quite supportive of it. It's for the best that you know that this relationship may be put through certain stress. For the first time, the principal's expression lost its usual cheer. Not even the hot and bitter taste of coffee could mask the sadness in which he was speaking with. Midoriya, as the current inheritor of One for All, you have a massive target on your back, even with All for One in prison, which we're hoping he will stay. Izuku wondered if that was meant to convince himself or them, maybe all of them. Regardless, there are still threats out there. Tamura Shigaraki and the League of Villains primarily. All Might clarified. We have reason to believe that he ... may have been the one to attack Overhaul's convoy. Why yeah, I figured it was him a while ago. He was after Overhaul's quirk erasing bullets. Just thinking about them filled him with fear and unease. It was a combination of the trauma Eri had gone through and the trauma that he had gone through in regard to Overhaul's mad quest to perfect them. As he tried going after Eri. No, both mouse and man said in unison. It was a spontaneous event, spurred on by the concern that they both shared for the teenager in front of them. In most cases, one would have assumed he would have been trembling in fear, but the fear wasn't all-consuming. While we believe the League's gone underground, they are not the only threat out there. There have been reports about some new villains attempting to fill All for One's place, just as you are training to fulfill All Might's place. As we all felt that night months ago, one age has ended and a new one has begun. The principal of UA explained, his voice heavy as if each word were a weight being dropped on him. In truth, the one bearing them was the young man across from him. He was handling the pressure remarkably well. The mouse and the man beside him were both impressed and troubled by that. Have any of those people made a move towards me? Asked the green-haired boy with a tight voice and laced fingers. So far, no. Thankfully, no. All Might answered, quick to ease the tension gripping his successor. He breathed an internal sigh of relief as Izuku let out an external one. But that brings us to the focus of this talk. Young Midoriya, we know this may sound harsh, but you mustn't let Miss Ashido know of One for All. The tension came back as his face tightened. I know, All Might, Principal Nezu. I know that I can't tell her any of it. And frankly, I'm a little scared too. That is not wrong, Midoriya, the principal softly offered. Being a hero and being in a relationship are dangerous things. But as the inheritor of One for All, you are in an especially precarious situation. If All for One were go find out, I'm sure, even from prison, he'd attempt to use Mina Ashido as a way to get to you. He'd use it as a way to get to One for All. Izuku immediately deduced. He looked to his mentor, who'd also been the quirk's previous wielder. The grave look on the retired hero's face affirmed what Izuku thought, that he'd come to this same point before. Maybe not with a serious romantic partner, but someone close to him. Izuku's stomach twisted into knots as he remembered how secretive he'd been, to the point that not even his tech support, David Shield, knew the full story. He'd used Mina, he repeated in a voice tinged with fearful unease, regardless of whether or not she knows anything. His mentor clarified, clearly not liking doing so. That said, we're not going to tell you that you two can't be together. Just that you hold off on telling her the truth. If you do, then you're dragging her into all of this in full. It may be overwhelming for her. The principal added, that's an understatement. Hell, sometimes I quote am overwhelmed by all of this. The green-eyed and haired teenager thought. I've had that same thought. That's why I've thought about avoiding telling her the truth, at least for a little while. Izuku looked between the two chief authority figures at Yua. He was asking them one all-consuming question. How long was a little while going to be? Principal Nezu and All Might looked to each other. Them doing so told Izuku that they didn't have an answer to that question either. He felt his stomach twist itself into more knots. We were thinking maybe until next spring, the former inheritor of One for All finally said. He watched as Izuku's eyes slightly widened at the proposed time. The significance of the time wasn't lost on the scar-faced mouse that headed Japan's most prestigious hero school. Spring, well, I was going to say toward the end of the year, but perhaps that's a better time frame. Hopefully by then we'll know more about exactly what we're up against. And by that, I think what he really means is the hope is that we'll have caught Shirogaki. Izuku thought. Truth be told, that sounded like a dream come true for him. He just couldn't shake the feeling that the two of them were destined to clash against each other just as their mentors had. So, spring, possibly. Be aware of this, Izuku. This timeline is not set in stone. Principal Nezu warned. We're talking at least 5 more months. 5 months of sometimes avoiding telling the truth to outright lie. It isn't going to be easy on you. No, it won't. But if it'll keep her safe, then I think I can do it. It was like trying to speak with wet cement in his mouth. The thought of lying to Mina for another 5 months was painful. Hell, just the thought of lying to her for the next several weeks about his quirk wasn't going to be easy. Spring was his new holdout, but like Principal Nezu said, even that was subject to change. He didn't like the idea of extending it any longer. What about the others? Young Midoriya, maybe it's for the best that we keep this limited to young Ashido for now. The former symbol of peace advised. You know, that's probably a good idea, he noted. Then it's set then. If all goes well, you can consider telling her the truth sometime in the spring. That said, if anything serious happens between now and then, be ready for that date to change, Midoriya. Remember, little is certain in life, besides hardship. Izuku's hands instinctively tightened. Yeah, that always seems to be the one constant in life. But moving forward in the face of that hardship is what helps define us, spoke the third member of the trio. His words made the other two brighten up. Spoken like the hero that you still are, All Might. Reaching forward, Principal Nezu took a long sip of his coffee, almost as if he'd been holding off on it. Now that we've settled that, I believe you two had the latter hours scheduled for training. Do make the most of that time, and don't forget about the school festival. It could be the unwinding that you both need, especially you, Midoriya. This'll be your first big date with Ashido, so make it memorable. For the first time since the meeting began, Izuku's cheeks flushed red. He was grateful that this was happening at the end of the meeting. All right. Thank you, Principal Nezu, and thank you, All Might. The past and present successors of One for All rose and took their leave, bowing in respect to the quirk-using animal. Neither of them ever treated him as animal, something that Nezu quietly liked about both of them. He could garner a smidgen of respect and fondness for any human that treated him decently. When it came to individuals like Izuku Midoriya and his mentor, it was much bigger than just a smidgen. That was why Nezu hoped, with all his heart, that the former's relationship with his classmate would turn out well. He was in the mood for some human romance, and the young successor seemed like a prime candidate. After all, with his heroic willpower, somewhat good looks, and knack for getting into trouble, it was inevitable that some girl would set their sights on him. Now that one had laid a claim, he looked forward to seeing how their relationship unfurled.